Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get? An unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.
1. Death and rebirth. Life's a funny thing sometimes. One moment you had years left to do whatever you wanted and the next it's all over and you can't help wondering, did I do my best? In recent months I couldn't help but ponder such thoughts after I collapsed in the convention I was at. Honestly, it felt like a fairly good day so far before that. I got dressed in my best Ash Ketchum cosplay, plastic pokeballs and all. I set out from my home after saying my "see you later" to my mom who I still lived with. The economy sucked at this point and I frankly couldn't afford to move out despite being 29 this year. I always found it funny how when we were younger we'd make fun of 30-year-olds still living with their parents, only for most people in my generation being forced into that exact situation. It wasn't all bad though, as I loved my mom and helped support the household with my crappy Walmart job. I paid my way in rent, utilities and groceries, so I can't say I was freeloading, but gods did it feel like it sometimes. I was single, of course. I suppose it was only natural really after seeing my mom's many failed relationships over the years. The very idea of romance just seemed unappealing to me at this point. It didn't help that I wasn't particularly handsome or smart or anything like that. There was also the nihilism that an unfortunate number of my generation held. You know the kind, no hope, better off dead, that sort of mindset. Not exactly great for romance really. Still, I found my relief from that dread-filled mindset in anime, books and video games. My escape from reality. Fantastical worlds and quirky characters that told grand stories that I couldn't help wishing I was a part of. I really got into the community, and this was my first time going to a convention in cosplay. I was nervous and excited at the same time. I felt a little hot when I arrived at the convention but thought nothing of it at the time since it was July in Florida. I of course brought a whole can of deodorant as I knew how bad you could smell after stewing in your own sweat for a few hours. Everything was going wonderfully at first as I mingled with other fans, got some compliments from others and even did a few funny skits with some people who came dressed as Pokemon. At about 2:30 p.m. though, while I was looking at some figurines for sale, I started seeing black spots in my vision while my strength left me and I passed out. When I woke up next I was in a hospital gown and got the worst news of my life: cancer and paralysis. Turns out I had bone cancer and it had hidden from us until it had spread to my spine. The tumor had finally grown big enough that it pressed on the nerves in my spine, paralyzing me from the waist down. As if that wasn't bad enough, more thorough tests told us that it was extremely aggressive and had spread over several parts of my body already, including my arms and skull. I knew this was going to be the end of me when the doctor told me some of the tumors were inoperable. I took the chemo in hopes of fighting it off, but other than making me miserable, it failed. I was given 3 more months to live and couldn't even spend that time at home in comfort as we simply couldn't afford it. I had insurance, so my medical bills were covered and there'd be a decent payout once I was gone, but that didn't exactly do me much good at that moment. It was strange knowing definitively that my time was at its end, numbing almost. I was in the middle of reading through the Harry Potter books again since I knew I'd never see the new reboot of it, and it was one of my favorite stories when I breathed my last. I passed in my sleep, so I couldn't even tell you what dying was like, as one moment I was dreaming and the next I felt a sharp sense of twisting which jolted me awake. The first thing I could tell you when I did was that I panicked hard. Everything felt wrong, my body felt small and strange and my surroundings were horribly unfamiliar. Even stranger was that I could feel my legs again and didn't feel like death warmed over. If anything, I felt great. A bit hungry, but compared to the agonizing existence I was leading before, I'd take that any day. It didn't take me long to figure out what had happened and how I ended up like this. Using the dirty glass of my cramped attic room, I saw that I was in the body of a child, no more than 11 from my guess. So I died and was reincarnated as this child, I thought as I looked at my reflection in the moonlit glass. It was hard to believe, but I was not going to dismiss something when I was literally experiencing it as fiction. I had to admit that while a bit malnourished, this new body of mine wasn't that bad in the looks department. I had short blonde hair and bright green eyes with a pale freckled face that was soft with high cheekbones and a strong sharp jawline. My new body was a bit on the skinny side, but not so much that it was concerning. The clothes I had on were not great though, simple dirty jeans and a dirty rough gray shirt. I must be from a poor family or something. I'll need to play dumb until I figure out how I am supposed to act, since this body didn't come with memories. I decided before turning to explore the room I found myself in. Small, rough wooden floors, slanted walls, attic room, single dirty round window, single 3-drawer dresser/nightstand, half-burned candlestick on the dresser/nightstand, single mattress bed on slightly rusty frame with a single pillow and thin wool blanket. That was it, that was all that was in the room. The room was ridiculously barren by all metrics to the point I almost thought I was in prison. Yawning, I decided that I'd try and learn more when the sun was actually up. 2. System start. Sleep came easy for my immature form even with my mind racing at the implications my rebirth held. The morning after was not exactly pleasant however. Look, the freak's awake. He doesn't even have a bruise anymore. What a freak. He's coming this way, let's leave. Children of various ages and appearances filled the building I was in, and from the looks and things they said I could guess that whoever owned this body previously was not very liked. Still, I wasn't someone who got angry easily and ignored it to try and gather information. I ended up having to sit alone at the dirty wooden long table when breakfast was served, a simple porridge that was as bland as possible. I ate quietly as I eavesdropped on what the caretakers were saying to pick up key pieces of information. The first and most obvious was that I was an orphan and in an orphanage. The second is that strange things had been happening around the previous occupant of this body recently. Objects moving without being touched, catching fire without any source, and even a wound knitting itself shut on his arm after he scraped it. I had read and watched far too much fiction to narrow down what exactly this pointed to, but it did point at the previous owner of this body was special in some way compared to the rest of these normal children. I also figured out how I came to possess this body as well. As it turned out, the previous owner had fallen down the stairs because of some of the other children and cracked his head on the floor. The caretakers thought it was just a bruise and he'd been knocked out, but didn't want to deal with a hospital and put him on his bed to sleep it off. These people literally caused this kid to die with their carelessness. I don't think I can safely stay here unless I want to risk more accidents happening to me. I thought seriously. Another thing I discovered was that this body had my previous life's name of Alexander, but the last name was different this time. It was Drake. I liked the name, felt strong, important really. The accents everyone talked in though gave away the third piece of information. I was in England. The other children avoided me after breakfast and we were dismissed by the caretakers. I took this opportunity to slip up to my room in the attic and go through the drawers of the dresser belonging to me. The first had 3 shirts and 3 pants with 3 extra pairs of socks. The second had a box of matches and a small bag with what appeared to be schoolwork and supplies for school. The final drawer had a few crumpled monetary notes and coins along with a half-eaten chocolate bar wrapped in tin foil. I picked up one of the money notes to look over since I didn't recognize it from my previous life. I didn't exactly study foreign currency. Currency detected, the initializing system. What? I exclaimed only to get a scolding yell from under the floor and wincing. Before my wide eyes a large glowing white screen window. I wasn't sure what to call it, but a glowing white rectangular thing floated as text began to appear on it in perfectly legible English. Welcome to the Multiversal Merchant System. To begin the system tutorial, please think the word tutorial. Tutorial. I thought with an eagerness as I very easily recognized this type of thing from the iSky anime I'd seen. The great systems, things designed to empower the ones using them to theoretically infinity. This is the Multiversal Merchant System. This system is designed to serve as the be-all and all of tools for the budding multiversal merchant. What is a multiversal merchant? You may be asking yourself, and the answer is exactly what the title says it is, a merchant who trades with different universes for profit and power. To this effect, the system has several functions for aiding the user in this regard. This sounds interesting. Could I travel between worlds? I thought, intrigued by this new system of mine. The first function is the system status function that allows the host to keep track of their skills, currencies, treasures, items and abilities. The second function is the system shop function that allows you to sell currencies, treasures or items for system coins that can be spent in the shop for items that exist in the user's world. A sort of personal supply chain simply. Be warned that it is still recommended that the user create actual supply chains, as the items in the shop are heavily marked up. I can see this being very useful at the start but becoming exclusively for rare or hard to acquire items later. I thought with a nod of understanding. The third function is the search function. This function is free to the user but has a cooldown of 30 days real time. This function's purpose is to randomly choose an individual in the multiverse that the user may choose to trade with or ignore, wasting the usage that time. All communication through the system is automatically translated into the user's native language in order to better facilitate smooth trading. Well, that explains how I'd find trading partners. I acknowledged mentally. The fourth function is the save and contact function. This function costs a flat rate of 50 system coins to use both initially and every time it is used for the contact aspect of it. This function allows the user to add a chosen multiversal trading partner to the contact list if they wish to trade with them long term. The final function of the system is the system inventory function. This function serves as the personal vault of the user that is unbreachable and thus fully secure. The space of the inventory can be expanded at the cost of system coins, with its current size being 1 meter cubed in size. This concludes the system tutorial. May you attain unending profit. Not very complicated, is it? Makes it easy to understand at least. I thought with a chuckle. 3. Seed package. Status. I thought once the tutorial was over. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, Homo sapien, wizard sub-branch. Age, 11. Skills, not applicable. Abilities, magic LV1. Items, common shirts 4, common pants 4, common shoes, half a bar of chocolate. Treasures, seed package. Currencies, £5, 23 pence. I'm a what? I mentally yelled as I looked the status screen. How could I not be shocked at the discovery? I knew exactly what this meant and it all clicked in my head at once. The strange things happening around the previous owner of this body, the location in England, I was in the version of Earth that had the wizarding world of Harry Potter. I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement at this revelation. Sure, the world could be extremely dangerous between careless uses of magic, evil wizards, magical beasts and politics, but it was also a world of wonder as well. Even better, I was a wizard at the age of 11, which means I would likely be either getting a letter via owl or a visit from someone to introduce me to the magical side of the world soon. That puts a damper on my plan to leave this place. Even if I may be able to take better care of myself alone, I don't want to risk missing my entry into the wizarding world because of that choice. I'll stay until I can learn the location of the leaky cauldron. I thought, making a game plan for the future. My eyes then moved on to the thing listed in the treasures part of my status. I wasn't sure what a seed package was exactly, but one thing I did know was that it wasn't part of the belongings that I had gotten from the drawers. I assumed it was in the system inventory and focused on trying to open that exact thing. To my surprise, it worked as a window opened up mid-air that was exactly 1 meter in size and depth. Within this window I saw a single glittering golden box that was maybe 12 inches cubed. I cautiously reached forward and felt no resistance as my hand slipped through this odd transparent film and into the space to close around the box. Removing it, I let the inventory vanish and moved to open the box curiously. I don't know what I was expecting, but whatever it was, I didn't find it. There was no grand surges of power or blinding lights. The lid smoothly lifted off the box, and sitting quietly within was a small sack, 2 strange glowing rainbow stones and a strange-looking amulet that looked like an iron ninja star almost, but with only 3 points on a normal-looking thin silver chain. The box seemed to just dissolve into nothingness after that, leaving these items on my lap. I opened up the sack only to be left confused as it was filled with these strange rainbow-colored coins that had a large stylized M on one side and my face on the other. I brought my status back up at this point, hoping for some clues as to what all this was. Treasures, skill stone, appraisal, skill stone, extraction, amulet of articulation, Skyrim. Currencies, £5, 23 pence, 150 system coins. Okay, so these weird coins are system coins and I understand what the amulet is about, but what's up with these skill stones? I thought, confused as I slipped the amulet on under my shirt and picked one up. Skill stone detected, acquires skill Y/N. Yes. I confirmed. To my surprise, the stone seemed to adhere to my palm at that and break down into particles of sand that burrowed into my head painlessly. I groaned slightly, however, as I now had a chunk of information in my head that hadn't been there before. It wasn't painful really, but highly disorienting rather. I somehow knew exactly how to use my skill and had to admit that it was a fitting skill for a merchant to have. Appraisal was a skill that allowed me to look at an item and automatically learn about its value, downsides, condition and uses via a description. This skill was perfect for a merchant because it would make sure that no matter how convincing a counterfeit is, I'd always know it was fake. On the same scale, it would also let me make deals that would be profitable for me easier. Encouraged by this discovery, I repeated this process with the other skill stone, and this time I was left stunned. Extraction was nothing like I had thought it would be, which was finding the positive aspects of something and then drawing them out. No, it was actually a studying skill. Extraction basically allowed me to more fully comprehend and internalize information I read. I was conflicted about this skill as it honestly sounded rather niche and situationally useful. Like I understood the whole knowledge is power thing, but unlike appraisal, this skill was not going to actively help me making deals. I accepted it easily enough though, as I was going to Hogwarts soon enough and would need to study to excel there. This skill would help me greatly in this regard, so I couldn't be too upset about it. As for the amulet of articulation, I was very familiar with its effects and absolutely loved that I got it. Item name, amulet of articulation. Class, treasure. Value, 4,000 system coins. Condition, perfect. Description, a specially enchanted amulet belonging to the Thieves Guild in the region of Skyrim in the Elder Scrolls universe. Increases the wearer's persuasiveness greatly and provides a minor protective area where it sits. In Skyrim, where it originated, the effect makes persuasion checks almost always succeed, but as this was reality and not a video game, its much weaker effect was not unacceptable. I was thrilled to have the thing though, as I had no doubt its effect would see much use, as a merchant needs to be persuasive to earn a righteous profit. 4. First customer. If it hadn't become obvious by this point, the seed package was in fact a starter pack from the system, just named differently than expected. Not that I minded really, as it only made sense that a merchant starting out had a seed starter. Weirdly named starter pack aside, I now had 150 system coins to my name and wanted to see what the shop was all about before using the search function to try and find someone good to trade with. As it turned out, the shop was loaded with stuff. A chunk of it I recognized from the books like Dittany, Wiggeneld potions, Phoenix feathers and basilisk venom. Others I didn't recognize, such as the primal draft, stolen breath potion and deathly blood. The shop categorized everything nice and neatly, with it all being in either the treasure, item, skill or ability category. There was a price tag, description and even name search function as well if I was after something specific. The prices were kinda high as even a Wiggeneld potion went for 25 coins. On a positive note however I confirmed that there was in fact high-end magical items available such as the Hallows, Philosopher's Stone and Sword of Gryffindor. Unfortunately there was no way I was going to be able to afford any of them anytime soon as even the sword which was the cheapest had a price tag of 1,000,000 coins and it was even noted in the description that this sword was its base version without having taken any special properties. In the end I chose not to buy anything just yet in case I got really lucky with my first use of the search function of the system. Not having enough coins to save such a contact would be downright heartbreaking. Without skipping a beat I mentally told the system to initiate the search function and pray to whatever gods might be listening for good luck. Search function activated. Searching, 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 target locked. Initiating trade window with target Edward Newgate, world One Piece. Holy shit, Whitebeard. My eyes nearly fell out of their sockets at this reveal and I had to forcefully calm myself. Whitebeard could either be an amazing trading partner or a terrible one depending on when exacting in the timeline I was contacting him. If this was when he was part of the Rocks Pirates then it would make him a great partner as he'd have decades of life left where he could gather resources to trade with me. Even if it was towards the end of his life he would still be a valuable trading partner. This all changes however if Ace, one of his crewmates and adopted son had been captured already. Whitebeard would then become a lost cause because there's no way I could convince him not to try and rescue Ace even if I told him he'd die if he did. If I can get lucky and it's before Ace gets caught then I can change things by revealing Blackbeard's devil fruit and strength. I thought seriously as the world around me began to grey out and all sounds vanished. Soon a point of light appeared in the grey world and expanded to reveal an incredibly large muscular old man with a black bandana over his scalp and a ridiculous look crescent moon mustache. Gururera, what an interesting power. Your devil fruit right brat? The man asked with a deep voice and an amused look. Not a devil fruit but yes it's my doing. I am Alexander Drake, multiversal merchant. At your service. I said grandly with a bow. Gururera, a funny one then. Alright brat I'll play along. What are you selling? Whitebeard laughed and asked clearly entertained by this strange encounter. I scratched the back of my head at that and replied awkwardly. Well in truth I don't actually have anything to sell at this time since you are my first customer. But if you tell me whether or not Ace has been captured or not I may be able to provide extremely valuable information to you. I said honestly. The amused look on the man's face turned into a frown and even through the system window I couldn't help but sweat as the man's gaze held a suffocating amount of weight. Ace, what do you mean about him being captured? The man asked calmly but I knew it was a demand more than anything. Can I take it he hasn't then? I asked without giving up my information for free. Don't play with me brat. What is this about Ace being captured? The man demanded firmly. Calm down and I'll tell you. You can give me whatever you think the information is worth afterwards, deal? I asked nervously as a bead of sweat drips down my forehead. The man stares at me for a moment before nodding. Alright, now speak. He said in a tone that brokered no argument. Teach, Blackbeard as he likes to be called. He's not as weak as you think he is. He has the dark fruit that nullifies other devil fruit powers if he touches you. He is strong enough even without it to scar the face of Shanks in a direct clash. He wants to use Ace to force you to clash with the Marines so he can steal your devil fruit powers and replace you as one of the Yonko. If Ace is hunting him alone he doesn't stand a chance at winning. I said seriously. The man's expression turned grave and thoughtful at the information for a few moments. Give me 3 days to check this out. If you aren't lying to me I'll give you enough gold to buy a brand new ship. If you are lying to me though. He stopped there but I got the message loud and clear. I have been nothing but truthful, it is in my own interest after all. I will contact you again in 3 days, farewell for now Mr. Newgate. I said politely before willing the contact to end. Trading ended, save contact. Y/N. I accepted the prompt and sighed as 50 of my coins vanished but it should be worth it. Whitebeard was a man of his word as far as I knew and would definitely be paying me for the information in 3 days once he confirmed I wasn't lying. It was a little scummy to withhold information that could save lives for profit but my own life was the most important to me. 5. Laying low. I barely had any coins to my name at the moment with 2/3 of them being spent just on contacting Whitebeard. The 50 now to save him as a contact and another 50 when I contact him again in 3 days. This means I only had a spare 50 for whatever I might need which is not nearly enough to feel secure. Once he comes through on his end with the gold I just need to sit pretty until I can find out where the leaky cauldron is and swap gold for galleons in Gringots. Once I have that Wizarding World money I can start stocking up on items that may be of interest to Whitebeard and others. Wiggeneld being one of my top picks as an all-purpose healing potion. It probably won't be enough to heal Whitebeard's illness or long-standing injuries but my hope is it may alleviate enough to prolong his life a bit longer. The One Piece world was one of the few where I had to admit there were few things worth collecting for resale but the few that did exist were worth ridiculously high prices. The world was an odd mix of backwards and futuristic with technology being weirdly advanced yet quality of life sat around the same level as the colonization of America on Earth. Shipping relied on wind sails for the most part and most houses were made of rough stone or wood. The futuristic parts though were straight up science fiction level stuff. Clones, mechanical monsters, artificial devil fruits and so much more. Speaking of devil fruits, those are one of the things I wanted to a massive degree. They were a strange sort of thing unique to that world that gave superpowers more or less after being eaten in exchange for the ability to swim. They fall into three general categorizations: Logia, Paramecia and Zoan. Logia fruits allowed the eater to literally become and control an elemental force such as sand, rock, flames, magma or light. Logias can only be countered by an opposing element or another unique aspect of that world known as Hackey. Otherwise they are totally invulnerable to any and all attacks. Paramecia fruits are more niche powers such as strings, flowers, eating or all sorts of other strange things. They are the most common of all devil fruits and can't affect their surroundings directly like Logia fruits unless under a specific circumstance. Finally are the Zoan fruits that, while technically one category, can be further divided into three subgroups: normal, ancient and mythical. All Zoan fruits allow the transformation into an animal or animal hybrid form. Normal ones are normal animals like cats, dogs, lions, cheetahs, that sort of thing. Ancient Zoan fruits turn the user into dinosaurs at will and are generally considered stronger than normal Zoan fruits. Mythical Zoan fruits are a bit special in that they allow the eater to become a mythical creature and gain all the powers that come with that. A phoenix fruit makes one nearly impossible to kill while allowing creation and usage of flames, while a dragon fruit gives hard scales, fire breath and whatever other abilities the creature would normally have. Mythical Zoan fruits are the rarest variety of devil fruit and also the most coveted as well. My hope was that I could eventually get Whitebeard to track down and hand over a devil fruit. I mentioned Hackey earlier, but I should also mention it is another thing I wanted but wasn't sure if I could really make a trade for it, since it is a world-specific power rather than one that was bound to a consumable such as the devil fruits. Hackey was, to put it bluntly, willpower and soul used to manipulate the world. It too fell under three categories: conquerors, armament and observation. The first type was rare and only found in a minority of people. It was also the most powerful, kinda. See, at first it just suppresses others' will with your own and thus mostly harmless, but at its advanced stages it allowed one person to force entire islands to drop to their knees if they don't directly pass out. It also could cause destruction and weather changing when powerful enough. Armament is usable by anyone with enough training and basically allowed the user to coat themselves or objects with their willpower, granting almost unbreakable durability unless either pushed over the limit or clashed with another's Hackey. Finally was observation Hackey, that more or less pushes one's perceptive abilities to ridiculous levels. A master of this type of Hackey could predict the future to a degree or be nearly impossible to harm, as they'd see you move in almost slow motion regardless of position. Anyways, that was all stuff for the future, as right now I had to figure out what to do for the next 3 days. I certainly couldn't just sit up in my room the whole time, since I was going to get bored as hell quickly. At the same time, however, I was not going to try and play with the other children if earlier was any indication. I suppose all that was left was seeing if I could figure out where a library was, if there was one nearby. Perhaps not the most impressive of plans, but reading was as good a way to pass time as any. It also helped that depending on what I was reading, it would also allow me to gain some potentially useful skills: cooking, hunting, plant identification and basic engineering, to list a few. The first three because they'd be useful when I chose to leave this place, and the last because knowing how to make simple machines is a lot more useful than most people realize. Did I expect to pick up skills like that in a mere 3 days? Not a chance, but it's a start and that's good enough. With a sigh I left my room and ignored the looks and whispers of the other children to approach one of the caretakers, an old woman who was reading a book. "Is there a library nearby?" I asked with my best childish impression, all while mentally cringing. The old woman lowered her book to eye me for a second, gained a look of recognition and then sighed. "4 blocks that way, it's the red bricked building with a sign that looks like an open book out front," she said, pointing past me. "Thank you," I said brightly with a fake smile. 6. Library trip. Acting grateful was annoying, but I worked in the customer service industry. Faking it was a well-learned skill of mine by now. It also wasn't hard to guess the woman's thoughts based on the way she acted. She had probably assumed I wanted to go to the library because the other children were isolating me, and she wasn't far off the mark. Not fully there, mind you, but not totally inaccurate either. It didn't bother me to be isolated by those my current age. If anything, I was grateful for it. I was a 30-year-old soul in an 11-year-old body, and that meant my mind operated on a very different level to these normal children's. Honestly, the only real downside to this situation for me was having to go through puberty again, but that was a small price to pay in my opinion. I also needed to keep my reincarnation a secret till I die, unless I was an idiot for some reason. My system too, though that would be harder since I was definitely going to be using the stuff I got from my trades to enrich my life here. The excuse that I got it from mysterious strangers would only work the first few times before it becomes obvious something is up, amulet or not. So long as I avoided drawing the wrong kind of attention, though, I should be mostly fine, even if I refused to say where the things I had came from. Leaving the orphanage through the front doors, I gave the place a once-over from the outside and wasn't surprised at how shabby it was. Sure, the building was large, but given its purpose that was hardly impressive. There were weeds growing around the edges of the place and the paint was faded and peeling off its walls. The cobblestone path through the grassy and weed-covered yard was overgrown and probably wouldn't even be visible if not constantly worn down by foot traffic. The fence line was overgrown and in poor shape, and all around the place was clearly financially not well off. Confirming this, I resolved myself to ditching this place the moment I got the information I needed. While I highly doubted the folks from the magical side would like that, they couldn't exactly stop me. Well, they could using magic, but all that was likely to accomplish is making me mad as I constantly tried to figure out a way to break the magic. Something I very much doubted they wouldn't also figure out. Stepping out onto the street, I followed the directions I had been given and soon came across the library I was after. It was a well-maintained building but not much bigger than the orphanage, so not a very large library really. Still, I pushed open the bright white wooden door, setting off a little bell hanging on it. I was immediately hit with the smell of old books and dust. There were neatly arranged wooden shelves of books filling the entire place with small plaques denoting the type of information within them. There was a narrow staircase to the left of the entrance that went to the second floor of the library, and a large desk right in front of the entrance with a middle-aged woman with a stern expression sitting behind it. She looked up from her book with two stern brown eyes that narrowed at me suspiciously. "It's 10 pence for a day pass or 2 quid for a month pass. Any damage to the books or library will be punished with a banning," she said firmly, and I nodded. Reaching into my pants pocket, I withdrew the £5 note from my inventory and then my pocket. The woman checked it for validity before asking for my name. I gave it easily and she put a blank monthly pass into the ink machine next to her and punched on my name alongside the date before handing the pass to me along with my 3 quid change. After that she waved me off and I immediately headed for the non-fiction section. I looked over the titles on the spines of the books and eventually chose one called Camping and You. The introductory section of the book made it clear that this was more or less a camping guide. It was a slightly older publication with a date of 1987 but should still hold up well enough for my purposes. I took a seat in one of the provided wooden chairs meant for reading and started reading the book carefully. The first chapter was about picking a location for your camp. It gave great tips to keep in mind, such as overhead cover, whether the location was wet and had signs of regular water movement, that sort of thing. I soaked up the information like a desiccated sponge, much to my own surprise at first. Once I remembered my new skill, though, I couldn't help but grin as the effect was much more useful than I had expected. I effortlessly recalled every detail of what I had read and could even mentally imagine how to use it. In essence, it was like the distance between knowing the material and mastering it had been dramatically reduced. I'd still need to experience using the knowledge to fully make it my own, but otherwise mastery was already mine. Though I had to admit that this particular information was an easy sort to take from theory and actually utilize, so that may have played a big part. There was no real guesswork about it but straightforward, follow these directions and succeed type information. Anyways, I eagerly moved on to the next chapter that spoke of setting up living space. This part took some liberties in assuming you had certain things on hand when you went to do it, such as a tent or rope, but otherwise was a simple guide to follow. My favorite part had to be the step-by-step picture guide to a series of camping knots, such as the square knot for joining 2 pieces of rope or the adjustable grip hitch knot for tying things securely in place. Perhaps not super useful in day-to-day life, but until I can set up something better like a primitive shed it would be good to know. The chapter after that was one that was mildly disturbing, since I was never a hunter myself, but it was how to catch, clean and cook fish, birds and rodents such as rabbits. 7. Magic practice. The book spared no details as there were whole step-by-step illustrations on these methods. Like I said, disturbing for the uninitiated. For those who regularly hunted or fished, though, these things might as well have just been another part of the process. Still, I learnt the information anyways, as it was better to have it and not need it than to need it but not have it. The author of the book moved on to common plants that were known to grow wild nearly all over Europe, with various uses from food to medicine, with pictures to accompany. I especially paid attention here as I was fairly certain at least some of these plants were used for potions as well, or could be sold to the system for coins. Not a lot, mind you, as some plants like daisy petals only had a price tag of 5 coins per pound dried, but coin was coin. Other plants such as nightshade or poppy had much higher values for much smaller amounts, making them worth considering. The final 3 chapters of the book merely covered situational camping, such as in winter or in a rainy area. I finished the book in about an hour and quietly put it back where I found it and moved on to a herbalist's guidebook that listed plants and their properties and identification. It didn't have chapters and was incredibly dry reading, with most of it being purely fact without interesting fluff to it. Still, I memorized it all in 2 hours and moved on to another book that was on animal species to hunt or avoid in general. Pigeons were one of the more recommended birds to hunt and doves one of the least, for ironic reasons. Pigeons were clean meat while doves were actually dirty and full of nasty diseases and parasites. Like I said, ironic. This was exactly the sort of information I wanted though, as it would help my survival chances. The few extra ways to save food certainly weren't bad either. Knowing how to make charcoal or how to set up a smoker out of branches and leaves were interesting and useful. When the sun started to set, the librarian told me the place was closing, so I memorized the page I was on before returning the book to the shelf. Dinner was a simple meat and vegetable stew that was more broth than substance, and I went straight to bed afterwards. I wanted to train my body to wake up at dawn and sleep at dusk to try and make the most of the daylight. Right now it didn't really matter much as I wasn't really busy since it was summer, but after I start learning magic that will change. Being able to make the most out of not only Hogwarts' massive library but also the forbidden forest that held vast amounts of magical creatures and plants would absolutely be worth it. That said, training a sleep schedule was not nearly so easy, and I tossed and turned for a good hour before sleep finally claimed me. A dreamless sleep that felt almost like taking a breath and holding it for just a bit too long. I woke up early thanks to turning in early, but not quite the dawn time I wanted, as it was probably an hour or so after that. Still, it was earlier than all but the caretakers, who were already preparing breakfast. While I waited for the other children to wake up so I could eat breakfast and scurry back to the library, I decided to try consciously using magic. I had no doubt that I would likely fail since it was something I had never done before, and more importantly something the book said was exceptionally difficult to pull off. If I had to say, based exclusively on the information from the books, the difficulties of using magic went in order of easiest to hardest. Wand with verbal incantation and specific movement, wand with verbal incantation but no movement, wand with no words but right movement, wand without words or movement, no wand with incantation, no wand with no incantation, instinctual casting. What I wanted to do was counted under no wand with no incantation, and thus I held no delusions of success. Then again, there was a lot about how using magic worked that was not really covered in the books, so I didn't discount the possibility of success either. For this attempt though, I took out a single system coin and set it on my bed. I focused fully on it and willed it to rise. Not even a wiggle, no strange feeling in the chest, nothing. I wasn't upset at this failure and simply tried again a different way, with a more forceful thought of the coin moving. This time I felt a small twinge of something in my chest, but it slipped away the moment I tried to focus on it. Still, this encouraged me if nothing else, and I stared at the coin intensely and mentally yelled with all the intensity one could muster for it to move. It wobbled as a stronger feeling of something filled my chest but fell still the moment my concentration shifted. This confirmed that magic responded to intent as one of its triggers, but there had to be more to it than that, or the effect wouldn't have been so little or so hard to pull off. I should mention that I was out of breath and red-faced as I had all but physically moved the coin to the point my whole body was tensed up from the effort. Still, this time I caught the feeling in my chest clearly and tried a different method. This time I closed my eyes and focused my mind on that feeling, that strange something I was certain was my magic. At first there was nothing but my thoughts that I couldn't control as I tried to focus on that memory. Then I felt it, the smallest wisp of that sensation at the edge of my mind, and I zeroed in on it like a shark to blood. As I focused more and more on it, the clearer and stronger the sensation became until it felt as though I was standing in a furnace of heat. My eyes snapped open and focused on the coin as I made a command for it to move, and move it did. The coin shot into the air hard enough that it hit the ceiling with a loud crack, before falling back onto my bed. 8. Magic practice. 2. I don't understand why this was so easy to do, I thought with a frown. Wandless nonverbal magic was depicted as one of the hardest forms of magic to perform in the books, and I managed it in 15 minutes. I didn't buy it. Something was up. What makes me different than everyone else in this world with magic? I pondered seriously, hoping that I could figure out what the issue was. When I got to the part about my past life, an idea hit me and I narrowed my eyes. It couldn't be that, could it? I thought in disbelief. To put it simply, the idea I had was that since I was a soul from a world without magic that didn't have magic, my own ability to sense it was unnaturally high. For wizards of this world, magic was always a part of them, like a limb they had from birth. As a result, their minds just couldn't isolate that part of themselves to be focused on without extreme effort or skill. I, on the other hand, never possessed magic until I found myself in this body, and so was acutely aware of this foreign limb. It probably didn't help that the stuff seemed to lie dormant until something riled it up, like a sudden itch that draws attention to itself. I almost felt like laughing as I found out yet another advantage I had over other wizards, and swore to myself to take full advantage of it. My first step was to practice drawing my magic out for use without having to strain myself or enter a meditative state. Just focusing my mind wasn't enough at the moment, but I hoped the popular theory back during my previous life about magic being like a muscle held true here. I closed my eyes and worked to draw out that sensation again, and I might be mistaken, but it was ever so slightly easier this time. I didn't try to cause anything to happen though, even after I felt as though I was burning up. Instead, I let the sensation fade away, merely observing it as it did. It was hard to describe, but I felt as though it came and retreated from the center of my chest near my heart and spread through my body as though following my veins. Is this how the parts of magical creatures and their blood can hold magical effects? I pondered curiously. It was an interesting theory if nothing else, and one I may spend some time in the future testing, but for now I just needed to work on getting my magic to move at will. I repeated the process of meditating on that sensation until it rose to a fever pitch before allowing it to fade away again. By the time I heard the sound of the other children stomping across the wooden floor, I was willing to bet I had shaved off at least a minute from the amount of time it took me to get my magic to respond, but it was not fast enough to be useful. I went down to the dining room and ate the prepared porridge for breakfast, and leaving the orphanage without hesitation. I went to the library again, and the librarian looked at me as I entered but went back to reading her book once she saw it was me. I found the book I was reading yesterday and flipped to the page I left off on and got started on my studying for the day. I went through the rest of that book and 2 more before the sun started to down again and I had to head back to the orphanage. Dinner was yet again more bland stew and I turned in immediately afterwards. I didn't fall asleep for at least another hour again and woke up just as early as I did the previous morning. Once again I practiced with bringing my magic up faster and faster with a noticeable picking up of speed the more I did it. I went from needing a good 15 minutes per attempt to only needing about 9. Not nearly fast enough for practical usage, but progress was the goal, not perfection. I didn't even know if it was possible to truly use magic without a wand on instinct, but I was more than willing to put in the effort to find out. I once again ate my tasteless food and spent the rest of the day in the library. Some might say that my time would be better spent practicing with my magic, but I disagreed. Like with all things, you needed variety or it would cause you to burn out. As marvelous an experience it was to have magic, I wanted it to be special and never a chore. I practiced with my magic because I enjoyed the feeling of progress it gave me. The eventual utility it might give me was only an added bonus. Reading on the other hand was something I did because of the help it would give me later. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed doing it because knowledge was always nice, but I won't say it was exactly the funnest thing to do. On the 3rd day things changed as shortly after breakfast I got a visitor in the library. Rather studious, aren't you? An older woman with a hefty build and well-tanned skin with graying brown hair in messy curls asked with a bright smile. I studied her carefully and easily identified her as a witch. Knowledge is power. I replied honestly. She nodded. Indeed, but there is more to life than just power. There's love, friendship, and perhaps just a bit of mischief. Why not spend some time playing with the other children? She asked, and I shook my head. They call me a freak and avoid me after all the strange things happen near me. I said, faking loneliness. Her smile falters at that and a sympathetic look replaces it. Poor thing, you aren't a freak, I assure you. See? She said as she took out a wooden stick-like object and with a flick of it turned the book I was holding into a flower. I acted shocked and dropped the flower, but she merely smiled kindly. There's no need to be alarmed. That was a simple application of magic, the same as the strange things you mentioned and also why I am here. You, like myself and many others, are a wizard, someone gifted with the ability to learn and utilize magic. Here, see for yourself. She said seriously while handing me a wax-sealed letter. 9. Into the Wizarding World. Dear Mr. Drake, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Shopping list. Clothes. 3 sets of plain work robes, black. 1 plain pointed hat, black, for day wear. 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar. 1 winter cloak, black, silver fastenings. Please note that all students' clothes should carry name tags at all times. Books. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Phillida Spore. Magical Drafts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger. Fantastic Beast and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment. 1 wand. 1 cauldron. 1 set of glass or crystal files. 1 telescope. 1 set of brass scales. Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that first years are not allowed to own their own broomsticks. I can't afford any of this, I said with a sad look after reading the letter. Not to worry, dearie, there's a no-interest loan in place for young wizards from non-magical households such as yourself. In addition, most shops have a discount system in place for first-year wizards as well to keep the amount you all have to pay back manageable. She said cheerfully. But where am I even supposed to go to find this stuff? I don't think the market will carry it. I asked, feigning ignorance. Of course not. We'll need to go to Diagon Alley for all of this. It's why I am here, in fact. As is necessary, a professor from Hogwarts fetches first years to take them shopping and arranging their way to Hogwarts if they do not have a guardian capable of doing so. In this case, that's me. Oh, I'm Pomona Sprout, by the way. I teach Herbology at Hogwarts and head the House Hufflepuff. If things play out right, you may even end up in my house. She said with a smile. But why are you delivering the letter at the same time you come to get me for collecting all this stuff? I asked, genuinely confused. Well, your situation is unfortunately a little special. Since you live in a Muggle orphanage, we cannot expect the letter's arrival to be well received and thus need to send someone in person to arrange things. Speaking of, I have already discussed the matter of your schooling with your caretakers, which is why I knew you were here. She explained kindly. I didn't ask any more questions after that, as I thought I had done my due diligence at playing the part of an ignorant but inquisitive orphan. Whether or not the act was seen through didn't matter so long as anything otherwise couldn't be proven. She walked at a surprisingly brisk pace as we left the library and she led me to the leaky cauldron. I almost wanted to curse when I found out how close by it had been this entire time. The orphanage was only a mere 10 blocks away from the place, just in the opposite direction the library was. The close proximity to the orphanage almost made me rethink my plan of abandoning the place, almost. The leaky cauldron was an old building that, despite being on a main street, was entirely ignored by everyone walking by, no doubt a type of magic at work. The inside of the place was dingy and ill-lit with more than a little bit of an alcoholic scent to the air. Behind the bar a thin middle-aged man stood cleaning a glass. When we walked in he looked up at us and smiled. Bringing in a first year I see Professor Sprout. Can I interest you in a pint of butterbeer by chance? He asked with a friendly wink at me. Not this time Tom, got some devil's snare growing at the castle that can't be left unattended for long. She said with a smile. Shame but nothing for it I suppose. Name's Tom little fella, you ever need a place to spend the night and got a couple sickles to spare I always have a room to spare. When you get older maybe even a pint or two. Tom joked with a grin to me. Alex, I may take you up on that sooner than you'd think. I said seriously. That earned me a look from both Professor Sprout and Tom but both chose not to question it. I meant it too as once Whitebeard came through with the gold I could ditch the orphanage and hit up Gringots to both pay off the loan and get a bit of extra wizarding money to shack up in the leaky cauldron till I can find a better arrangement. Don't get me wrong I'm not against living homelessly or anything but if I've got a better option I will take it. As an added bonus I could get away with the whole underage magic restriction since the ministry doesn't track the individual but rather the location the magic was used in. Due to being a place with many adult wizards constantly using magic my own use of it wouldn't be noticed so long as no one saw it. Since it was only July 18th I would be able to get in close to a month and a half before the school term officially started. Perhaps not enough to make up the gap between me and those from wizarding households but better than nothing. Alright now pay attention. 2 from the bin and 3 up, like so. Professor Sprout said after we left the pub and entered the alley behind it that looked normal. She tapped the 2 bricks on the wall with her wand in the order she said and amazingly the bricks started to fold into themselves to reveal a bustling street in old architecture with various bits of magic on public display. Welcome to Diagon Alley, the heart of the British wizarding community. She said with a smile and an amused expression at my own awe-filled one. 10. Gringots. Diagon Alley was nothing like it was in the movies and the books didn't have nearly enough detail to capture the true amazingness of the place. While there was indeed lots of people milling about in rows of store fronts there were homes as well. Not only that but the sheer selection of stores was far more abundant than either of the source materials implied. I counted no less than 4 bookstores, 5 clothes stores and 8 potion shops. Those were just the most numerous too with plenty of magical shops being more specialized such as one I saw that sold literal dreams and memories. I could feel my money sense going haywire as my mind raced at the sheer amount of potential for profit this place held for me. Greed is not usually the first thing that a new student has in mind when seeing this place for the first time in my experience. You are an odd one Mr. Drake. I can't wait to see how you do at Hogwarts. The professor said with a hearty laugh snapping me out of my thoughts and making me blush in embarrassment. A lot of these stores weren't something I saw myself partaking in all that much in truth. For example Eolip's Owl and Beast Emporium was more or less not something that would see much business from me. Many of the worlds I would have access to through the system would have much more impressive creatures to choose from even if they weren't magical in nature. At most I could see myself getting an owl for letter delivery but that's pretty much it. Anyways the professor led me into the alley proper even though it was a whole wide-ass street in truth. To the right was the rows of store and house fronts with a fountain at the far end and to the right close to the entrance of the whole area, no doubt on purpose, was a massive marble building. 2 ugly short creatures with wrinkly skin and needle-like teeth glared at everyone entering or exiting the building who wasn't like them. Gringots and of course its goblin owners in order. I was already dreading the trips to the place in the future to be honest. We'll need to stop by Gringots, that building over there. We need to get the loan money for your school supplies and the goblins there run almost all financial aspects of the British wizarding world. Let me do the talking unless you are addressed directly dearie, goblins are notoriously ill-tempered and it won't do to have you offend them somehow. The professor said seriously and I nodded in agreement. As we approached the building I got a good look at the famous rhyme on the silver doors even as the goblin guards glared at us hatefully. Enter stranger but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn, must pay dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours. Thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there. That might seem like an arrogant thing to have on your doors as a bank but in Gringotts' case it absolutely was not. The goblins were an unhinged race when it came to the lengths they'd be willing to go to in order to prevent theft. If you were a thief you first had to get past the goblins themselves, then the magical waterfall that cancels all magics that pass through it and sets off an alarm if there was any. Then you had to somehow get into your targeted vault which needed either an exact matching key or a goblin to open. Next you had to cancel any booby traps or curses in the vault itself before claiming your prize. Finally you had to escape somehow in a place with no apparition and only one exit that was likely surrounded by hundreds of armed goblins and the ministry's own orders. Needless to say actually trying to steal anything from Gringotts was not a feat easily accomplished for most wizards. Not that I had any intention of attempting it to begin with since there was no need unless the golden trio of Harry, Ron and Hermione all failed to grab the chalice of Hufflepuff from the vaults below. As one of the vital pieces of the magic Voldemort, the big bad, was using to maintain his immortality the chalice needed to be destroyed to kill him off. Should that not happen he'd be around in theory forever which I was not okay with. That guy had this weird obsession with blood purity, and since I was likely a muggle-born wizard, that means I'd definitely be on his must-oppress to death list. So I planned to let canon follow its natural course while I did my trading and got stronger in secret, and if fate decides to force me to act, then I will to take out the noseless bastard. Until I'm forced to, though, you won't catch me within a mile of the canon story. Let someone else deal with that nonsense. Anyways, the inside of Gringots was filled with people and goblins going about their business. It was a massive many-doored hall lined with high desks that let the short goblins look down on the wizards here, no doubt done intentionally. We walked up to a counter and one of the ugly creatures peered down at us with a sharp expression. "What is the nature of your business?" it asked with high-pitched and unfriendly tone. "Muggle-born orphan first-year loan," the good professor said calmly. The goblin's face scrunched up and pleasantly as it clicked its tongue the name of the recipient. It asked while glaring down at me. "Alexander Drake." I replied while matching its eyes unflinchingly. To my surprise, a brief flicker of something almost like approval crossed the thing's expression before it was gone just as fast. "The loan is for an amount of 20 galleons annually for the duration of enrollment in Hogwarts for a maximum total of 140 galleons. Payments are expected within 3 years of graduation or an arrest warrant will be issued. Are these terms understood?" it asked without moving its gaze away from me. "Understood," I answered with a nod. 11. School shopping. The goblin wrote something down where we couldn't see it on the desk before ringing a small bell. A couple moments later, another goblin covered in clinking keyrings filled with keys walked up and looked at the first questioningly. "This student has applied for the Muggle-born orphan loan. As of now, Vault 7331 is his for the purpose of holding the annual loan funds, and if he pays it off eventually even afterwards in an official capacity, you are to give him a copy of the vault key for his own keeping and access," the original goblin said firmly. The new goblin grunted in acknowledgement before rifling skillfully through the keys adorning its body before pulling out one in particular, checking to make sure it was correct and then pulling it off its ring. The key itself was a brass color with a thick body and simple circular end. The head of the key though looked like part of the jaw of a shark with 7 sharp spikes of various sizes in a row. When I received the key, I appraised it and was not really surprised at what I learned. Item name: Vault Key 7331. Class: Treasure. Value: 25 system coins. Condition: Perfect. Description: a goblin-made vault key that is used to open Vault 7331. Subtly enchanted to track the holder in case they default on a payment. Really, it wasn't anything special, and besides, the hidden effect of tracking me served only the purpose of opening my specific vault. That tracking thing was frankly something I expected, since it only made sense that the goblins would leave a method to find the people who owed them money. If anything, I thought the way they did it was clever, as who would expect the key to one's own vault to be used to track them. We weren't led to the vault or anything this time, as the original goblin handed over a small sack that clicked when dropped into the professor's hand. She turned to leave and I bid the goblin a good day before following along. After leaving Gringots, I was led to Madame Malkin's, a shop dedicated to tailoring robes and other apparel. The owner, Madame Malkin, was a squat woman with a mauve robe on who smiled in a friendly manner constantly. She was quite professional, as well as she took our payment, measured me and then gave us a time to come back to pick up the finished robes. Next up on our list of places to visit was the trunk shop that sold trunks for storing items. I really wanted one of the spatially expanded, lightweight and shrinkable chests that could be made as light as a feather and held a large quantity of things, all while being able to shrink to the size of a matchbox. Something like that wouldn't do me personally much good thanks to the inventory, but I was certain that I'd eventually have multiversal customers who would think about such a thing very differently. Forget the possible illegal activities such a thing would allow, just the utility and uniqueness it offered was enough to make it worth a kingdom in the right world. In this world though, there was plenty of places you could go to get one, and while they were pricey, at the cheapest costing 300 galleons, they weren't prohibitively expensive. I should probably explain, but the currency system the wizarding world used was based on 3 coins of brass, silver and gold from lowest to highest worth. Brass newts were the lowest denomination, followed by silver sickles and then finally gold galleons. Unfortunately, the conversion from one denomination to another was not exactly logical, with 29 newts to a sickle and 17 sickles to a galleon. The conversions were nightmarish to think about, since they were all in uneven numbers that left the possibility of fractional transactions if it wasn't for the bad necessity of rounding up in those cases. The sheer inefficiency of the currency system drove me mad, and wanting to know what lunatic devised it to begin with and which group of lunatics thought actually using the mad system of money was a good idea. Ridiculous currency systems aside, I ended up with a simple felt-lined oak trunk with iron bands and wheels to make moving it once full easier. The fact the trunk was nearly a meter wide and half as tall and thick meant it was not light, even empty. I managed, thanks to the good professor taking pity on me and temporarily casting the featherlight charm on the trunk. I made a point of memorizing the incantation she used, since that spell would be ridiculously useful in the right circumstances. Plumapondus. There was no special wand movement when she cast the spell, as she simply pulled out her wand and pointed it at the trunk. I didn't know if that was because she was skilled enough to not need the movement, or it simply didn't require one. We'll be testing that later. From the trunk shop we went to Flourish and Blot, a bookshop. The textbooks for the year were gotten from there, and I recognized a fellow business enthusiast in the owner who tried to convince us to get more books as well. After that we stopped by a potion supply shop called Poison and Panacea that sold all the supplies a potioneer could need in high-quality to low-quality versions. I ended up with the standard grade low-quality versions this time but swore once I had the funds I'd go back for the high-quality ones. Maybe it won't make much difference in how the potions were brewed but even a minor difference could mean failure or success in such a precise art. We stopped by the Amazing Astronomy to pick up a cheap but standard-issue telescope and finally headed for my most anticipated stop, Ollivanders. The shop itself was old, so very old. The paint was faded and the sign was worn from the years and exposure to the elements but easily read. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The display was a single wand laid on a purple pillow in the dusty window and the inside of the shop was tiny with all space occupied by wand boxes or a single counter that held a register. Behind that counter was a door that I assumed led to the famous wand maker's personal workshop. 12. A strange wand. Author note: before anyone goes complaining about the wand being unreasonable, maybe do some research first. Ollivander's father did make wands from other cores than just phoenix feather, dragon heartstring or unicorn hair. Vinewood wands are also lore accurate, so there's nothing off about this at all. The moment we entered the shop and the doorbell rang, there was a sudden and loud clinking sound like thousands of coins falling into a pile. A thin elderly man with a frail-looking body seemed to show up out of nowhere when this happened. Goodness me. It seems I have a rather special customer here today, what luck. He said with a wide smile as he deftly moved through the small shop and approached a particularly dusty stack of wand boxes. What is so special about those wands? I asked, genuinely curious. These wands were some that my father made and rarely ever meet their match. While none of them use the supreme cores I myself use, do not make the mistake of assuming they do not hold just as much power. He said as he blew the dust away from the pile and began to go through the pile carefully until he found what he was looking for. You seem sure that my wand will come from that pile, why? I asked curiously, and even the professor looked interested as well. There is only a single type of wand material that I have ever worked with that produces an effect like that when a potential match enters my shop, vine wood. And I judged from the sound that was released that the origin of it came from this pile, and here it is. Grapevine, Griffin heartstring core, 10 inches, neutral predisposition. Take it and give it a swish. The man said while handing over the wand eagerly. It was a smooth thing with a rich amber hue to it like caramel and no decorative features at all. I took the wand in my right hand and immediately felt my magic surge from my chest and into my right hand before the wand started releasing vibrant golden sparks. I think it likes me, I said with a genuine smile. Vine wands are rare to match, and in truth I assumed this one would never meet an owner. Its core is the heartstring of a griffin, a prideful beast that is well known for its staunch defense of what treasure it protects. Strongly independent but loyal and commonly used to protect treasures, but prone to melancholy without a treasure to guard. Wands take after their cores, and so I assumed this one would remain ownerless forever. I am certain my father would cry in joy seeing it matched today. The man said with a happy smile. What do we owe you? The professor asked with a smile. 7 galleon as always on the first matching, and here is a holster for it, on the house for the privilege of seeing something so extraordinary. He said as he moved behind the counter and placed a strange object made of several straps and a series of loops just big enough to sheath a wand in snugly on it. The professor paid the man, and he was nice enough to help me attach the holster to the underside of my left arm. Sheathing and unsheathing the wand felt a bit weird, but I knew it'd come easy once I got used to it. Like that we were done shopping, and out of that 20 galleons I got from the loan there was only 2 galleons, 7 sickles and 12 newts left. Alright, now I must inform you that while you may be eager to try your hand at magic, you need to wait until you reach Hogwarts. All underage wizards and witches have to during the summer break. A means of transportation to King's Cross Station will be arranged for you by the 1st of September. I'll see you at school, the professor said sternly as she dropped me off at the orphanage. I didn't immediately head back to Tom's pub though, even if I still had enough money left over from the loan to rent a room for a few days, maybe even a week depending on the actual price. The reason for this was simply because I needed Whitebeard to come through with the gold first. From what I knew, the guy was a man of his word, so in theory I should be good on that front. Since the contact hadn't been erased or given any indication that the man himself was dead, I assumed that meant he dealt with Blackbeard without any hassle, or at the very least managed to save Ace from getting caught. In addition to that, I had to make sure to keep my wand out of my hand and away from me, as my contact with it caused my magic to constantly simmer in my chest and not recede like I am fairly certain it should. Judging from this reaction, it was hardly surprising that so many people struggled with wandless casting. They had long since conditioned their magic to only respond to a wand by the time they think they are ready to attempt this advanced technique. Add on the now difficult task of learning to sense their magic, they had to retrain it to work without a wand as well. At least I found this problem before it was too late. I can train my magic to work by my will as well as with a wand. I'll keep it to myself though. Good to take my enemies by surprise, I thought with a smirk as I settled in my room with one of my new textbooks. I naturally set my new wand in its holster in my inventory along with my trunk and its contents. I'm not so blind as to have missed the hateful, jealous gazes the other children had when I came back. Nor did I miss the looks of greed they had when eyeing my trunk. While I was likely to spend the next week or so going over and memorizing my new textbook's content from the comfort and silence of the library unless I moved to Tom's pub, I wasn't going to leave anything for these people to try and dig through or steal. They could tear this room apart for all I care, but they'd find nothing since it's all in my inventory. 13. All That Glitters. The textbook I started with was 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Philodospore, since it overlapped with the topics I had been reading up on in the library. An interesting thing that I discovered was that a few of the herbs and fungi mentioned in the textbook didn't hold the non-magical and non-obvious properties of the Muggle-published ones. For example, the common dandelion that had magical uses in potions for healing but no mention of its liver-supporting potential nor its skin care usages. There were others but not any really big ones. Still, it was interesting to see the few examples of non-magical people knowing things that magical ones missed. I could probably make a small bit of fame and profit if I were to compile these examples into a book, kind of like an updated version of what the wizarding world already had. I shook my head at the idea though, as it was too much work for no good payout. If I really wanted easy wealth and fame like that, I could just copy what Lockhart did and steal others' adventures before writing out the tales. I made a face at the idea though, as even I could tell how distasteful that was. I completed this textbook around the time the sun started to set and dinner was served. I put the book back in my trunk and then put that in my inventory before going to sleep. The next morning I woke up slightly after dawn, which was close to my ideal time. I sat up and began my practice with bringing my magic up before allowing it to reseed over and over again. I wasn't worried about the ministry pinging me with the trace while doing it, since I wasn't actually using the magic, just bringing it up internally. The time I took to do this improved by around 30 seconds but was starting to slow down the lower the time I took. Right now I only needed about 8 minutes to bring it up, but I wasn't making any large jumps forward in progress anymore. Once the sounds of the other children waking up were heard, I used 50 system coins to initiate the contact with Whitebeard. The world around me grayed out as sound stopped and a large screen of white manifested before shifting to show me Whitebeard. Immediately I noticed that he had some injuries on his chest, including a new set of 3 long slashes in his chest. He seemed to have been resting in his seat when I made contact, as he opened his eyes with a briefly confused look before his mind caught up and his gaze focused. "Gururera, you kept me waiting, brat," he said with a laugh and a scold that didn't hold any real heat to it. "You said 3 days, so I gave you 3 days and nights. Fights at your level tend to take a while to resolve after all. I assume you caught Blackbeard from the wounds on your chest?" I asked, and he nodded. "You were right, Teach hit himself well. Without you he might have succeeded, and I am grateful. As promised, enough gold to buy a new ship," he said, and the system chimed up. "Trading partner, Edward Newgate wishes to give the user items, 20x gold bars, treasure, devil fruit, yami yami no mi. Accept items Y/N. Whoa there, what's this about a devil fruit? No, a better question is why that one? Do you realize how powerful that fruit is?" I demanded in shock. "Gururera. It was meant to be a surprise, but I talked it over with my sons and daughters and they all agree that you should have it. Consider it a gift in thanks," the old pirate said with a grin. "Ha, fine, I'll be shameless enough to accept this gift of yours, but in return let me let you in on something." The one Roger was waiting for his straw hat Luffy. "Shanks knows what I am talking about," I said with a helpless sigh. Don't get me wrong, I was thrilled to get the fruit even though I absolutely wouldn't be eating it myself. The main thing that made me reluctant to accept the fruit was that because of how the fruits operated. I wasn't sure if whoever I sold it to ate it would suddenly cause that fruit to circulate through that world from then on after they died. Devil fruits reincarnated into the nearest compatible fruit after all, and in a totally different world. I didn't know if that meant the fruit was now bound to that world or it would somehow still incarnate into the One Piece world after its user in the other world died. That brat who has been kicking up waves is the one Roger was waiting for. Gururera. Looks like I need to keep an eye on him then. Whitebeard said with an amused laugh. I suppose that's the end of this transaction then. If you stay alive for a few more months I should have some stuff that would interest you. I'll be starting my schooling as a wizard after all, and there are plenty of potions and items that I'm sure I can get you to spend some gold on. I said with a grin, and he just grinned right along with me. Gururera. I'll be waiting then, he said before I ended the contact as the items he sent over were deposited into my inventory. I didn't hesitate to take out the fruit as well as a bar of gold to appraise. Item name, Yami Yami no Mi. Class, treasure. Value, 500,000 system coins. Condition, perfect. Description, the darkness fruit of the One Piece world. This fruit turns the one who eats it into pure darkness while granting full control over it as well. A unique Logia-type fruit that exchanges the user's ability to elementalize with the ability to nullify other devil fruit powers upon contact. All injuries sustained are many times more painful as a side effect. Eating this fruit brings the sea devil sealed within it into one's body and thus renders the eater unable to swim or use their powers when submerged in sea water or when in contact with sea prism stone. Item name, gold bar. Class, item. Value, 1,000 system coins. Condition, perfect. Description, a 12.4 kg gold bar sourced from the One Piece world with a purity of 98.7%. 14. Leaving the orphanage. Not bad at all. This should be more than enough to pay off my loan while also giving me a nice chunk of change to utilize as well, I thought as I looked over these appraisals. The devil fruit was more or less just as I had expected it to be, though the confirmation that there was a legitimate demon within the fruit made me curious as to the true origin of these things. Whatever it was, I suppose it didn't matter, as the demons were sealed inside of fruits and would likely never escape this fate without someone trying to break these seals. Why anyone would want to unleash what was bound to be a definitely evil force from their containment I don't know, but I suppose it wouldn't be my problem anymore once I passed this thing off to whoever could trade for it. For the gold, however, I already had a well-established plan in that I was going to take care of that loan before going on a shopping spree to stock up my inventory with things I needed as well as to trade to Whitebeard. One of the shops I had seen in Diagon Alley was an alchemical one that might have items designed to ease the discomforts that come with old age or even remove them entirely. Whitebeard would definitely pay well for something like that. If I could also find something to remove his disease, that would also go for a mint. I might even ask for some sea king meat as well, as it was always a popular theory that the stuff improved one's growth and held an intense amount of nutritional value. Since my body was borderline malnourished, something like that would be well worth trading for, though preservation would be tricky. One of my plans was seeing if I could trade more conceptual things such as physiques, souls, or even skills through the system, as those would be game-changing if possible. For example, if I could trade for the one-piece physique, I could sell it to someone else in a desperate situation to allow them to change their fate. One had to consider that One Piece was a strange world where the harder you trained the stronger you could get, even to the point of unreasonableness like shattering mountains with a punch. In more desperate worlds where strength and durability means the difference between survival and death, this would be akin to divine blessing in value, something dreamed of but unlikely to obtain. As for skills, I was frankly hoping to obtain Hackey for myself, as it looked like something that would complement my magic fantastically. With enough training it would even serve as an extra level of security for me. Still, I wasn't going to bother Whitebeard about any of this until I had something I could trade for it. Trading on faith might work when both parties fully trusted the other, but I knew that no decent businessman would practice it unless absolutely necessary otherwise. Admittedly, I had kinda jumped the gun when it came to the search function of the system, as I had no merchandise at the time. It was only because I got lucky that I made off with a profit this time, and I knew it. Vowing never to make that mistake again, I left my room at the orphanage and ate breakfast quietly before leaving the place for good. I walked the 10-block distance to Tom's pub and entered the building calmly with my trunk behind me. I had taken it out secretly in an alley nearby, so I didn't have to lug the full weight the whole distance. Tom was polishing a silver mug with a rag when I entered and raised an eyebrow in surprise when he saw me. "Well, would you look at that? I figured I'd be seeing you soon enough, but didn't think it'd be the very next day," he said with a chuckle. I reached into my pocket and took out both of my remaining galleons as well as all my sickles before putting them on the counter. "What will this give me?" I asked seriously. The man looked the money over before answering. 8 days without food, or 5 with 3 meals a day," he said, already moving the money into his register. "And the quality of the meals?" I asked. "Rich and hearty, better than that stuff they feed you at that Muggle orphanage, that's for sure," he said with a sneer at the mention of the orphanage. "You know the place?" I asked curiously and genuinely surprised as well. I make a point in keeping track of the goings-on near the pub in case the Muggles get any funny ideas of redeveloping the area. I find any I let the ministry know and they make them forget that idea. "Never liked that place you live in myself. Kids there are too thin from a lack of funding," he said with a look of understanding as he gazed at me. "I'll take the 5 days then. Need to make a stop at Gringots, but I should be able to pay for my stay until the school year starts afterwards," I said seriously, and he looked concerned. "You didn't do anything you shouldn't have to earn that kind of money, did you?" he asked sternly. I shook my head. "Just got lucky is all," I said honestly. "All right, good for you then. Leave the trunk and I'll get it up to your new room, number 7. Here's the key. Breakfast is at 8, lunch at noon and dinner at 7. If you don't come down to eat, I'll have someone bring it up to your room," he said as he handed over a dull iron key marked with a rough number 7 on its tail. I nodded and opened the trunk up before taking out the sack of gold Whitebeard gave me that I tried to lift only the sigh as it was too heavy. "Mind using a featherlight charm on this?" I asked, embarrassed. Tom just chuckled before pulling out an old well-used wand and using the requested spell on the sack. With that done, I hefted the bag over my shoulder and left out the back of the pub. Taking out my wand, I tapped the bricks of the wall in the right order, causing the wall to fold into itself, letting me into Diagon Alley. 15 Gobstruck Goblins. I walked into the bustling street without hesitation and made a beeline straight for Gringots. The 2 goblins guarding the door glared at me as I approached and waved an odd-looking paddle at the sack I was carrying before ignoring me. If I had to guess, the paddle was likely used to detect if the contents of the sack were dangerous or not. Ironic that the contents were in fact quite dangerous, just not directly. This much gold was enough to ignite fights over after all. I walked up to a counter that was free and waited for the goblin behind the desk to look down at me. "What is the nature of your visit today?" the ugly creature said with narrowed eyes that I didn't avoid. "Gold to galleon conversion followed by loan repayment," I answered seriously. "I am legally required to ask if the gold in question was acquired through legal means." The goblin asked and I nodded. "I got it as part of a trade," I answered honestly. The goblin briefly looked over at something on its desk before nodding. "Very well, a moment please," it said before ringing a bell. Soon another goblin arrived and looked at me with a confused but not unkind expression. "You are the one requesting gold to galleon services?" it asked with clear disbelief. "I am," I said with a nod as I sat the sack down. The goblin walked over and opened the mouth of the sack, and freezing at what it saw within, the thing quickly closed the sack. "Grab that and come with me, best we do this in a more private location," it said before turning and walking off. I hurriedly grabbed the sack and followed behind the goblin, not too surprised by this as it was an outrageous amount of gold to just show off in public. From what I understood of the goblins from the books, they understood the need for secrecy in some things and were especially accommodating if they thought you were worth it. A young wizard walking into the bank with enough gold to buy a mansion definitely qualified as worthwhile. I was led to a nice room with a plush couch and a fine wooden table. "Place the bars one by one out onto the table, please," the goblin asked seriously. I did as instructed and heaved the bars out of the bag one by one until the table groaned under their weight, but all 20 were present. The goblin wasted no time at all taking out various tools that it used on each of the bars, as its expression turned more and more shocked as it went until it looked downright pale once it got to the last bar. 20 bars of an average purity of 98.5% and a weight of 12.4 kilograms. At the average market rate with a 15% conversion fee, that is 115,000 galleons. Is that acceptable? The goblin asked, looking at me as though wondering if I was real. I nodded. "Can I have a portion of that used to pay off my outstanding loan in its entirety, while another portion of 10,000 paid out to me directly? The rest can be put in my vault. Here's the key," I said, handing over my vault key. "I will need a few minutes to arrange it all. Is that okay?" it asked seriously, and I nodded. "I will wait here if need be," I said calmly. The goblin scurried off in a hurry, and I waited in the room for about 15 minutes before it returned carrying a small leather pouch about the size of an apple. This pouch contains the requested 10,000 galleons and possesses an undetectable extension enchantment for your convenience. "Will that be all for today?" the goblin asked as it handed over the pouch. "Yes, that's everything for today. Tell me your name so I can request you the next time I have business in the bank. Your service was excellent," I said, and the goblin actually smiled at that. "Ragog, sir, it would be my pleasure to serve you again," it said, pleased with itself. With my business there done, I left the bank much richer than I entered it. Pure gold may be valuable, but you can't really actually buy anything with it. Now though I had an abundance of cash and a variety of shops to hit. My first stop was naturally the alchemist shop I mentioned before, called Magical Mystique. There was a fairly small one, honestly, with very little in the way of decoratives. Just the stock laid out and labeled on shelves and a plain counter with an older man sitting behind it. "Got anything in mind, lad, or did the idea of alchemy stir your fancy?" the man asked with a heavy Scottish accent. "Do you have anything for taking away the problems an old man might be having after a life of conflict?" I asked honestly. "For an old orer, I take it?" he asked while getting up from his chair. "Something like that," I replied. "Healing items don't have much demand, except for at St. Mungo's, and I don't think I've got anything specific like that, but I might," he said as he walked over to a specific wall and began looking over the various things until he seemed to find one that satisfied him. "This is a youth elixir. Tricky bit of alchemy that gives the drinker a body like a 20-year-old without actually making them younger. Doesn't make them live longer either, other than however long having a healthy body would let them normally," he said, holding a crystal vial with a swirling silver liquid within it. "Sounds expensive," I said with a frown. 1,000 galleons worth of expensive, in fact. It was made as a failed attempt at recreating the elixir of life," the man said honestly. "I'll take it. I'll also take that primer on alchemy as well," I said, pointing at a dusty bookshelf at the far back of the shop that held only a single book covered in cobwebs and dust. The man looked surprised for a moment before asking me seriously, "You sure? That book's been sitting there for close to 20 years now," he asked, and I nodded. "Books on alchemy are rare to find, and the topic is only available in later years if there is enough interest at Hogwarts. I'll take any material I can for self-study," I say seriously. "Fair enough. Your total's 1,250 galleons. Assuming you have that is," he said as he brought the stuff over to the counter. I pulled my pouch off my waist and dumped out some of its contents onto the counter before I started to count it out. I found I dumped out more than the required amount and put the remainder back in my pouch. To my surprise, the man reached under the counter and handed me an extra book. For the last 20 years I've had that book sitting over there as a test of sorts. Till today no one's gone for it since the price was so high. I don't know if you'll make an alchemist worth a damn, but since you took that book I'm willing to take that gamble. Now get your stuff and leave an old man to his peace," he said with a chuckle, and I smiled happily as I took everything and left. 16. Shopping spree. With my stuff in hand I left the alchemy shop and headed for my next destination as I slipped my new items into my inventory secretly. My next stop was Madame Malkin's to upgrade my wardrobe. Presentation is very important when conducting business after all, and if I look like a shabby broke person then my credibility drops on first meetings. I would be making sales across the multiverse after all, so my appearance was doubly important since I couldn't exactly build up the usual street cred for reliability. Even just in this world alone one's appearance played a large part in how you were seen. I planned to do business here as well, so I wanted to set the best first impressions I could. Madame Malkin seemed surprised to see me again so soon and looked about ready to catch a fly in her mouth when I told her why I was here and showed her that I did indeed have the funds to pay for it. Still, the woman was a business owner after all and quickly got to work fulfilling my order. 3 pairs of fine shoes, 5 pairs of pants made of rich materials and fine embroidery, 12 shirts of acromantula silk and a single long black cloak with gold stitching and an embroidered dragon's head with a gold coin in its mouth over the left breast pocket. When I finally walked out of the shop I looked like a whole new person. No longer a malnourished orphan but a thin scion of some noble house in appearance. A falsity for sure, but one that served my purpose perfectly. The way some of the wizards warily moved out of my way as I moved towards my next target was plenty indication the image I cut was perfect. My next stop was an old run-down second-hand bookstore called Pages and Prints. It was not well maintained as dust hung thick in the air and the building itself had peeling paint and foggy windows from age. The books weren't even on proper shelves but piles haphazardly placed all over the shop while a bored middle-aged witch sat behind the counter reading the Daily Prophet newspaper. She looked up from it only to freeze when she saw me. "Are you lost, sir? This is a second-hand bookstore, you'll find only old-used things here," she said confused. "I know, that's why I am here. I wanted to know if I could find any old copies of my school books that a senior may have left notes in. Additionally, I want any books on potioneering or alchemy you have," I said seriously. "Oh, now there's a surprise. Most of you noble types tend to snub your nose at anything second-hand, didn't expect one of you lot to understand the value in it," she said as she put the paper down to go looking for the books I requested. "Stereotypes are not absolute. The Weasleys for example are pure-blooded wizards and neither rich nor snobby," I say calmly. "Suppose that's true enough, good folks those Weasleys. Too many kids though," she said with a begrudging agreement. She kicked up dust as she dug through the piles of books and picked out the ones that fulfilled my conditions while I waited nearby. Soon enough she had 2 large stacks of books teetering hazardously on the counter for me to go through. I wordlessly flipped through the schoolbooks and those with little to none in terms of notes in them were discarded unless from a higher year. The ones with plenty of notes were set aside for purchase alongside the books on potions and alchemy. Like I expected, there was not many on alchemy at all as most people wouldn't get rid of such books to begin with. The 3 books here likely came from mass purchases after someone died and their books were sold in a lot auction. A lucky find but not much better than that. The final lineup for the books I wanted to purchase was 10 textbooks of this year and higher years with notes and 5 higher year textbooks without notes. There was 3 alchemy books and 4 potioneering books as well, 22 in total. "You sure you can carry all of this?" the shopkeeper asked after I paid 100 galleons and 16 sickles for the lot. "Probably not. Can you hold them for a few moments while I go purchase a trunk for them?" I asked, sliding her an extra galleon. "Of course," she said eagerly, taking the coin. I left the shop and went a few doors down to the trunk shop where I purchased a plain wooden trunk enchanted to be lightweight with wheels for 5 galleons. I returned to the bookshop and loaded the trunk up with the books before leaving for my final destination, the Diagon Alley Honeyduke's candy store. I liked candy as much as the next person and now that I had the money saw no reason why I shouldn't pamper myself a little. The place smelled super sweet upon entering as it should with the sheer volume of candy here. I ended up buying some every flavored beans to try as well as some of the stranger treats like cockroach clusters, pepper imps and chocolate frogs. The fact the cockroach clusters moved and looked like real cockroaches didn't bother me any as I popped them into my mouth and crunched on them for that sweet peanut and caramel filling they had. The chocolate frog I opened tried to escape but ended up wriggling in my mouth in the end. The card I got for it was of one Cornelius Fudge. I shrugged at that and put the card away for now since I didn't really feel like trying to collect a full set or anything. When I got back to the pub, Tom looked at me in surprise. "Goodness me, what sort of windfall did you find to have this sort of money?" he asked curiously. "Best if I keep that to myself. Anyways, this should hopefully cover my room until school starts," I say as I take out a handful of galleons and set them on the counter. Tom counts it all seriously before returning me 7 of the golden coins. "Consider the room yours till the year starts. Lunch is still hot if you want some. Roast ham with bread rolls with butter and honey," he says with a smile. "Yeah, I'll take some," I said as I sat down on a bar stool. 17. Intense study. The ham was oily and flavorful with its spice-crusted edges and juicy center. The rolls were my favorite though as they were steaming hot, fluffy and soft. The butter and honey really took them to a whole other level. Once I was done eating, I hauled the trunk up the stairs and across the old creaky wooden floor until I reached the door marked with a 7. Pulling the key Tom gave me out of my inventory, I slid it into the lock and turned it, unlocking the door with a click. Putting away the key, I turned the metal knob and pushed the door open to see what I would be living in for the next month or so. The room was plain with a dresser and bed that had my trunk at its foot. There was a window that looked out over London at the far end, but that was it. The place was clean and tidy though, so I couldn't complain. I pulled the other trunk across the floor and set it against the wall before popping it open. I dug out the first copy of my potions textbook for this year and closed the trunk before taking off my shoes and hopping on the bed to get comfortable as I read it. The notes in the margins were a mix of fanciful doodling and actual helpful insights that the previous owner of this copy figured out through experience. For example, when the recipes for Wiggeneld potion calls for chopped Dittany stalks, you actually can cut the time to brew the potion in half by bruising the stalks first by rolling them under pressure. Perhaps not like game-changing or anything, but this gives a deeper insight into how Dittany as an ingredient works. As I thoroughly studied each piece of information in this copy of my textbook and compared it to the original recipes, I learned so much more than the mere original texts could give. The many small shortcuts and tricks that I found were in particular treasures and well worth going out of my way to purchase these second-hand copies. By the time the sun started going down, I had memorized the information within this book and felt much more prepared for Snape's looming presence in the potions class. I didn't bother grabbing the second copy of the same book I had in the trunk, as I knew soon enough Tom would be coming to let me know dinner was being served. I was right too, as within 5 minutes of putting the book away he did. As promised, the meal was much better than the stew they gave us at the orphanage, as it was mashed potatoes, gravy and a Salisbury steak with mushrooms. I ate the food with gusto and even gave Tom 5 newts for a slice of apple pie. Once I was done though, things started to get noisy from everyone coming to the pub for a drink, and I turned in for the day. Over the next week I would wake up, practice my magic without my wand, eat breakfast, practice magic from the standard book of spells, eat lunch, and then study my textbooks until dinner before going to bed. It wasn't the most exciting of schedules, but thanks to it I have made a few discoveries. The first was that actually using magic rather than just summoning it up before letting it fade sped up its reaction time drastically. Thanks to this, between my spell practice and morning magical workout, the time I need to draw my magic up dropped to a mere 3 minutes, and the speed of improvement seems consistent for now. The second discovery was that my wand was more responsive when I had thoughts about how I could earn a profit from whatever spell I was trying to cast. Otherwise the wand didn't seem to care one way or the other what sort of spell I attempted with it. That said, I did find it annoying that I couldn't really practice transfiguration. Like, the spells were there and all, but the book made it abundantly clear why it should only be attempted in the presence of a teacher. Transfiguration magic had a bad habit of working on the caster as well as whatever they were trying to use it on without proper focus. Even worse was that without proper treatment these accidents could become permanent. Needless to say, I was not willing to take the risk when it wasn't necessary. Still, in this week of practice I had mastered 4 spells already: Lumos, Wingardium Leviosa, Alohomora and Accio. That last spell was actually a higher year spell, but way too useful not to try and learn earlier. I hadn't tried learning any of the more combat-oriented spells in the book, since those tended to be rather loud and would tip off the fact I was practicing magic when I shouldn't be. Also, I didn't have a target for them, which was kinda important. Look, the room was Spartan in nature and I hadn't bothered to buy decorations or, well, anything this whole time. Technically that was on me, but the point still stood that I wasn't just going to go casting destructive spells at the stuff Tom owned that I was borrowing. The only reason I interrupted this schedule after this week was because something strange happened. I gained a skill. Speed reading. It did exactly what the name said. It let me read faster. I hadn't even considered that I could gain skills manually, and this changed things, like, a lot. This new skill, much like extraction, was a cumulative skill that grew alongside my usage of it as well as my knowledge base. In other words, the more I read the faster I'll get at it, but unnaturally so. Where it would normally take someone months or even years to read a large book in half a day, I could in theory cut that time down to a single month or less, with enough effort. 18. Trading test. Even just getting the skill doubled my reading speed instantly, and when you add extraction to that, I was going to be learning at an obscene rate. The appearance of the skill now made me stop for the first time and seriously consider if I could obtain other skills if I were to put in the effort, and if so, what was the limit here. Like, obviously there had to be limits of some sort, but what those were I didn't know. I was curious if the practice I was doing with my magic might lead to a skill in that case. Being able to use magic was counted as an ability, but what I was doing was refining how I did it, which in theory should fall under the skill category. The best metaphor I could think of here was that abilities were the roots and trunk of a tree and skills were branches of that tree. I needed to reach the eventual conclusion of my training to discover if this was true first though. That also reminded me that I should be contacting Whitebeard again to trade over that elixir I bought for him. I already knew what I wanted to ask for in exchange and hoped the system would make it possible. With that in mind, I spent the last 50 system coins I had to pull up the connection to Whitebeard. My surroundings grayed out as the screen appeared, and after a few moments the other end connected and Whitebeard showed up. Unlike last time, he was perfectly healthy this time, with a new set of scars where he had been wounded previously. I'll never get over how ridiculously fast people in your world heal. That kind of wounds would take months to recover from here, and years after that to stop bothering us if ever. I said honestly. Gururera. Don't act like you don't have magic, brat. He said with a laugh. Pot and kettle, I get it. Anyways, I've got a few reasons why I've contacted you this time. The first is I was hoping to test some ideas I had out with you. The second was that I've got something that I think is worth your while. Even worth what I was hoping to test, at least for you. I said, taking out the elixir. You've got me interested, brat. What do you have in mind? Whitebeard asked, leaning forward slightly. First, allow me to introduce to you an elixir of youth. This little number will give you the physical health you had when you were 20. You won't gain a longer than natural lifespan or age or anything, but just returning your body's health to your peak would allow you to shield your family for longer, and that's worth anything, right? I said with a grin. Whitebeard's eyes narrow as he looks at the swirling silver vial as his mind no doubt races at the introduction. Something like that must be expensive, right? He asked seriously. It's a matter of perspective really. For you in your world something like this would go for a massive fortune. Here it costs far less, though definitely not something just anyone can buy normally. It's a product of magic after all, which is common enough here but nearly non-existent there. I explained honestly. Gururera. I get it. This is why you are so confident you will excel as a businessman, right? He asked with a laugh and an approving look. More or less. Being able to take things from one world and trade them to another means I will stand to profit massively almost always, as some things simply can't be obtained in any other way. Enough about that though. The things I want to trade for this elixir is Hackey and the knowledge how to use it, as well as your physique, a copy of it at least. Also toss in some weapons as well, those should be good for my shop. I said seriously. I can try and teach you Hackey, but I don't see how I can give you my body. The weapons are easy enough though, got a couple named blades rattling about my treasure hold. He said with a confused expression. Try and think about making the trade as you interact with the system. If my idea works I should be able to get all of it. I say seriously. From my end I pushed the elixir towards the screen while thinking about what I wanted. Trading partner, Edward Newgate wishes to give the user items, Ability Stone, Hackey X1, Ability Stone, One Piece Physique X1, Skill Stone, Hackey X1, Treasure, Rakery X1, Treasure, Hebai no Ox 1, Treasure, Akajachino Shurigai X1 accept items Y/N. Bingo. I thought with a grin as I accepted the trade. 3 shining stones appeared in my inventory along with 3 weapons, 2 swords and a whip. Meanwhile on Whitebeard's side a vial with swirling silver liquid in it appeared in his hand while an astonished look came over his features. Gururera. Now that's quite something. Felt kind weird though, like someone was running fingers through me. He said with a laugh as he found it amusing once the surprise wore off. Why don't you give that elixir a chug? I admit that I am curious to see how it will change you. I admitted freely while I couldn't help but smile in joy. The old pirate seemed to think about it for a moment before carefully pulling out the sealed cap and dumping the elixir like syrup down his gullet. At first nothing seemed to happen, but then steam began to rise from Whitebeard's body and I saw him sit up straighter than normal and sigh as if some great weight had been taken off of him. Gururera. I haven't felt this good in years and all those aches in my body are gone. Brat, that was some good stuff. He said with a loud bout of laughter and massive smile. 19, Hackey plus magic. Good to hear. The longer you live the more trades I can make with you. I said with a grin. Greedy brat. After this I am curious what else you might have to trade given enough time to grow. Whitebeard said with grin of his own. After that I ended the connection and eagerly took out 2 of the 3 stones I had just received. Ability Stone detected, acquire ability Y/N. Skill Stone detected, acquire skill Y/N. I agreed, and first the glowing rainbow ability stone broke apart into motes of light that sank into my chest. I felt a strange sensation when it did, like my magic had grown denser somehow. Next the skill stone broke apart into light and flowed into my head as knowledge I didn't have before rooted itself there. I closed my eyes as I let the knowledge of how to use my new ability sink in. About 5 minutes later I opened my eyes and held up my hand in front of my face. To anyone else nothing seemed to happen, but for those spiritually sensitive they'd notice an invisible layer of something flickering along my skin. This is harder than expected and has an unexpected side effect. I thought, both disappointed and pleasantly surprised. While I knew I could gain mastery over my new ability with time, practice and exercise, the side effect of even trying to use it caught me off guard. As I discovered, trying to rile up my Hackey caused my magic to eagerly follow it, as though Hackey were the missing component to wandless casting. Thinking over my experience with wandless casting so far as well as how Hackey worked, I easily figured out why this was. Hackey was an expression of one's willpower through spiritual energy. Wandless magic on the same hand seemed to require a firm will to pull it forward and direct it. Now that sounds easy, but actually controlling one's willpower effectively was definitely not easy, normally that is. By using both an ability stone and skill stone for Hackey however, I effectively jumped this hurdle in one smooth motion, as I had the knowledge of the ability's usage that came from someone who could be considered a master at all of its aspects. Controlling my willpower was consequently an effortless affair now. It was bittersweet if I'm being honestly. Bitter because all of my effort in trying to master pulling up my magic seemed pointless. But sweet at the same time because now I just needed to understand how to direct the magic into a stable magical effect. In this regard wand magic was superior as spells were structured and followed a certain level of predictability. Like if you cast the unlocking charm, then there was no chance it would lock something instead. Wandless magic wasn't like that unless you tried to cast a wand spell without a wand, but at that point the entire reason you were not using a wand kinda fell through in my opinion. Like obviously the exception here was if you were trying to show off or simply didn't have a wand for whatever reason, but that was it. As far as I was concerned, wandless magic was supposed to represent true magical freedom, the ability to do whatever you wanted with but a thought. Something likened to a divine feat, because that was what magic was to me, divine. How many wizards ever really stopped and considered how ridiculous magic was? You were literally exerting change on reality with barely more than a single word and a flick of your wrist. I'm not saying that magic was unnatural or outside the rules of the universe or anything like that. But that doesn't change the fact it gave a skilled user the sort of power any muggle would consider miraculous. Wizards don't seem to realize this for some reason, not even the muggle-born ones. It was frankly confusing why there weren't more figures like Voldemort or Dumbledore, to be honest. The same power was there, just outside of reach if you'd only make the effort of finding and claiming it. There was danger to experimenting or trying to reach for more power, but when has anything grand ever been easy to do? Regardless of anything else, I was incredibly happy with discovering the effect Hackey had on my magic. Even better, thanks to getting the ability from Whitebeard, I got all three kinds of Hackey. Observation and Conqueror's Hackey would have more passive effects unless I managed to refine my Conquerors to an advanced stage, but Armament was much more active. In fact, with enough refinement I imagined I might even be able to deflect or block magic barehanded thanks to it. There was a rather glaring downside to Hackey that there was no avoiding, unfortunately, however. See, Hackey relied on the body as well as the spirit to function, and that meant a weak body couldn't withstand using the stuff for long. In other words, I need to train my body into a stronger state. Ideally it would be done with the one-piece physique, but I didn't need such an extreme body personally. Simply getting my body to peak physical fitness would be enough to supply what I needed for my Hackey, I think. As an added bonus of my body being trained to that level, my magic should also be stronger, as magic was based on the three aspects of existence according to my textbooks: mind, body and soul. My mind will grow from my studying and practice, while my body and soul will grow both from maturing as well as through training my Hackey. In theory this should allow me to reach the same level as Dumbledore or Voldemort in a relatively short time. I wasn't certain on that, however, so best not to quote me on that later. With these new understandings I adjusted my schedule to exercising and Hackey practice in the morning after waking up, followed by breakfast. Then practice magic from the standard book of spells, eat lunch and then study my textbooks until dinner before going to bed. I unfortunately needed to go shopping again before that, however, which I chose to do tomorrow. I needed both a couple living creatures to practice my Conqueror's Hackey on, as well as hopefully body development potions, not maturation potions mind you, since I didn't want to forcefully age my body but simply speed up the effects of my exercises. 20. Dumbledore. You may be wondering why such a potion exists, and the answer to that was rather dark. As had been mentioned in the books for this world, the witch hunts were a prevalent and rather unfortunately fact of life up until close to 2 centuries ago. As the magical side of the world got better at hiding their natures and existence, few witches or wizards got caught and killed anymore, but that wasn't always the case. Before Hogwarts and the other great schools were founded and the magical side of the world united more or less, Muggle-born magicals were often found by their Muggle families or neighbors to terrible effect. Exile at tender ages to the wilds was the best one of them could hope for. Torture and death were more common fates, however. The wizards who were matured and learned in magical arts, however, tried hard to find these Muggle-born magicals and bring them under their tutelage. Caring for a growing child is not easy, however, and the unstable magics of these children ran high risk of exposure. To combat this, maturation potions were born. These potions forcibly aged the body, thus causing the children's magic to stabilize while making it easier to care for them while training their magic. While the demand for these potions drastically dropped with the great schools founding, it never fully vanished. There were always the rare traditionalist or dark wizard that took an apprentice to pass on their legacy that they fed these potions. It was heavily frowned upon these days but not illegal, so the potions held stock in most potion shops. I knew, however, that these potions came at a great cost to the one who drank them in the form of stunted magical reserves. As I mentioned earlier, magic was based off the mind, body and soul. These potions forced the body to grow out of balance with the other two and stunts the magical power and potential of the drinker compared to someone who grew step by step naturally. What I wanted instead was of a similar category but muted by a massive degree, as it only accelerates the body's functions by a few days at most. Abuse the potions and there would be similar unbalance, but in moderation these potions were ideal for rapidly developing the body's fitness. Anyways, I didn't get the chance to even leave my room before I received a loud but insistent knock on the door. Flexing my new observation Hackey, I found that my senses picked up on details that told me who it was. It's unlocked. I spoke up as I held a textbook in my hand, since I had a pretty good idea what this was about. The door opened and at the entrance to my room stood two people. Tom, who was standing respectfully behind the second and most important person. He was an old, kind-looking man in a star-embroidered robe with a long grey beard and hair tied loosely at the bottom. On his wrinkled face rested a pair of half-moon spectacles that sharp but not unkind bright blue eyes sat behind. I was not expecting Dumbledore himself to pay me a visit, I said calmly as I easily identified the man. Oh, I do believe we have not met before, and yet you seem to know who I am without introduction. How curious, he said with a twinkle in his eyes. I reached into my pocket and sneakily took out a chocolate frog card before tossing it to him. He easily caught it with a surprised and curious expression before turning it over to look at it before understanding crossed his features. Ah, I see. Yes, I do suppose that would explain your familiarity with my appearance. Despite that, you do not appear surprised at all by my visit today. Why? He asked curiously. By now I imagine the orphanage has declared me missing, I would assume. It stands to reason that someone from the magical side of the world would come looking as a result. Naturally one would think to ask Tom if he has seen me, which he would naturally say he had, and that I have been here this whole time. I have long expected someone to come knocking, just not you in particular. You'll forgive me if I sound too humble here, but I very much doubt I am worth such a high-level person's time. I explain honestly. Dumbledore clapped with an impressed look. Remarkable deductions, Alex. You don't mind if I call you that, do you? I'm not overly fond of formalities, you see. He asked, and I shrugged, not caring much either way. Thank you. Anyways, I suppose in any other case your deductions would be correct and I would not personally have come. In your case, however, I happen to have needed to visit Diagon Alley this day and chose to handle your matter while I was at it. A happy coincidence, as they say. He explained. I nodded in understanding, as this was not hard to believe at all. From how he was depicted in the books, this was precisely the sort of flight of fancy he was prone to on occasion. If you are here to convince me to return to the orphanage, I will save you the trouble. I won't. I said firmly. He just smiled gently. I assure you I have no such intention. Perhaps I may have originally, but after Tom has told me of your state when you came to him and your behavior since, I would say you are perfectly fine right where you are. I am curious, however, about where you obtained the funds to make such a drastic change in your lifestyle. He said while looking me in the eye. I felt a familiar tickle of magic around my head when he did, and flexed my conqueror's Hackey, crushing the foreign spiritual power. His face paled and he wobbled where he stood for a moment before steadying himself with a serious expression. I will not warn you again. Stay out of my head. I said firmly. He stared at me with scrutinizing eyes for a few moments before relaxing and bowing his head slightly. I apologize. That was rude of me. I must admit that I hadn't expected you to be a natural accoummance. I suppose with such a talent it's no wonder you seem so mature. Nonetheless, the origin of your unusual wealth is still a concern. He said apologetically. I can swear that it was obtained legally. The goblins at Gringots can testify to that if my assumption that they used a lie detection device on me about it is true. As to specifics, I will keep that to myself. I said calmly. 21. Security concerns. If you are telling the truth, then you should have no reason to hide the origin of your new wealth. Dumbledore insisted. We all have secrets that we would like to keep to ourselves. I don't want to share that one, and you likely have plenty of things you prefer remain unknown. You are free to test me and my truthfulness in any way you like beyond Veritaserum and messing with my mind or memories, however. I said firmly. I could simply petition the Aurors and the Ministry to look into it as well. He said without losing his gentle smile. You are free to, so long as my rights aren't infringed and my mind left unmolested. I said confidently. Very well. I will consult the goblins as you suggested before letting the matter end there. A word of advice, however, young Alex, secrets have a habit of eating one when unshared. If you ever change your mind, you may find me. He said seriously before leaving. This was not a topic I had any intention of sharing, however, as I very well understood how stupid that was. I had not read any fanfic where sharing one's non-native origin or cheat was a smart move. It often ended with the protagonist dead, or worse in fact. Right now the sudden wealth I had was highly suspect, but until someone could find something wrong with it there was nothing to do about it. Clashing with Dumbledore here was also a tactical move on my part. A gamble of mine that I was hoping would work out. Oh, I had no doubt the old goat would be keeping a watchful eye on me, but I wasn't doing anything illegal yet, so I had no worries. There was no chance he'd find the system either, so long as I was cautious not to openly show it by taking stuff out of my inventory from nowhere. With observation Hackey, he also probably couldn't secretly watch me, as there was no such thing as perfect camouflage. There will always be a sound, smell or disturbance that would give away one's presence. With that thought in mind, I added something else to my shopping list for tomorrow, a large fuzzy rug. If I was going to be watching for hidden people in my room, I wasn't going to bother with magical means that would be expected and countered. It's amazing how easily people underestimate even the littlest things, such as the floor under their feet or the ceiling above their heads. A fuzzy rug would be examined and then promptly ignored once its mundane nature was revealed, not realizing that the rug's purpose was to show me if anyone was standing on it. Even being invisible wouldn't stop one's feet prints from being visible due to the rug being an external thing. It was much like how Harry was found in the books because of his footprints in the snow despite his invisibility cloak. I'll need to learn the smoke charm too, just in case. I thought seriously. Without hesitation I took out my wand and got to work trying to pull off the spell, Fumos. It was a first-year spell that created smoke, and that was it. The reason I wanted to learn it this time was because it was also one of the best ways to flush out invisible entities. There was no way not to be revealed if you were the only spot smoke didn't fill in the air after all. It didn't take me long to get my first puffs of smoke either, about 10 minutes really. From there I practiced until I could comfortably fill most of the room with a thin mist of smoke. Interestingly, if I used my armament Hackey while casting the spell, I could even control it to a degree, allowing me to create a sheet of smoke the eye could see the entirety of. I ended up skipping lunch as a result of my practice, but finished up by dinner, so there was no real issue. I went to bed after setting up an alarm by my door that consisted of a dozen coins perched precariously along its top edge. When I awoke the next morning I cast a wide Fumos spell to search the room from top to bottom and found my alarm untouched. Confident I was alone, I sheathed my wand and put it away in my inventory before taking out a coin to practice controlling magic wandlessly by my will. As my Hackey rippled weakly over my right hand holding the coin, my magic flowed to that area and I tried to direct it to move the coin, gently. My magic stirred at my urging and the coin wobbled slightly. Encouraged by this, I tried making my command more intense. The coin stood up on its side at that and slowly began to rise through the air. I quickly realized something annoying, however. When my thoughts slipped slightly, the magic stopped instantly. Clearly this would require absolute focus to train, at least at first. Once using it became second nature, this problem would vanish, but until then this was the way it was. My next step was testing my limits with the magic. Moving a coin? Easy. But what about me? Or perhaps my bed? From the coin I moved on to the next lightest thing I had in here with me, the ability stone for the One Piece physique. Much like the coin, I had no issues at all moving it with my magic. I then put it away and made the attempt with one of my textbooks. Once again no issues at all with that attempt. With a serious expression I finally moved on to my trunk full of textbooks and school supplies. This time I felt resistance, though the magic still moved it, but it felt shaky and unstable, like when someone works out with slightly too much weight. So my current magical limit is heavier than me but lighter than my bed. Now to see if magic is truly like a muscle that grows with more use. I thought as I started to exercise. Nothing too major, just stretches, push-ups, crunches and squats until my body started to shake. I may add jumping jacks to that for cardio once I get my rug to absorb the sound of me jumping, but for today that was enough. Once I was done, I stopped by the bathroom to get a quick rinse off with soap before eating breakfast and leaving the pub. 22. Shopping. Diagon Alley was especially bustling today for some strange reason, and as I looked around that reason became fairly obvious. Most of the Hogwarts students were getting their school supplies today. There was an abundance of young people in the street going about their shopping, with the Muggleborn among them being more obvious than those born into wizarding families. The most obvious even amongst these wizarding children, however, had to be the group of 6 redheads in less than stellar apparel and similar enough appearances. That must be the Weasleys. Judging from the ages they have and the lack of supplies being carried by Ginny, I'm definitely be going to Hogwarts the same year as Harry and the other 2 from the Golden Trio. I thought with a sudden sense of pressure. I had of course assumed I would be there during canon, but as to when during canon, that was still up in the air. I had no idea if this world was identical to the story in the books or if canon was moved up a year or down a year. Expecting things to be precisely the same was a foolish idea, as everyone knew about the butterfly effect in my previous life. Assuming my mere presence wouldn't shatter canon into 1,000 pieces was a fool's notion. That said, I had no intention of getting involved directly. I didn't make any move to approach the Weasleys and simply went my own way to get my objectives done. My first stop was naturally a carpet shop that sold enchanted carpets. Flying carpet were not included in that, as they were illegal to sell or use in the British magical side of things. I was fairly certain that was because it would cut into the profits of broom sellers, and thus the ministry had banned them here. A ridiculous thing really, but expecting better from the corrupt and or incompetent ministry was a foolish thing. Not saying the whole thing was without purpose, but the fact remained it wasn't a pure and clean organization by any means. Still, I wasn't after anything like a flying carpet and settled for a fuzzy thick white wool carpet with a warming enchantment to keep your feet warm in those cold mornings. The shopkeeper was more than happy to have the rug moved into my room in Tom's pub and installed for a little extra. My next stop was a sports shop that sold practice targets, brooms, and other Quidditch equipment, as well as my true goal here, dueling dummies. These things were specially enchanted to take serious punishment from spells before standing back up for more. The more advanced ones even had the ability to use simple spells themselves, like Protego or Flipendo. I merely bought a simple one for taking a beating so I could practice more combat-oriented spells without damaging Tom's stuff. Even better was that the shopkeeper had special shield orbs that could protect the room itself if placed in all 4 corners. They apparently worked by creating a barrier spell that covered the walls and windows between them. The ceiling was still a concern, but not as much, since I didn't plan on practicing the more wide-area offensive magics I remembered from the books like Bombarda or Confringo. Those would have to wait until I got to the castle and squirreled away in the room of requirement. Look, anyone who has ever even considered the idea of going to Hogwarts as a student in my past life could tell you that the room of requirement was a heavily underutilized asset in the books. For those not in the know, somehow the room of requirement, or ROR for short, is a special room in the castle of Hogwarts on the 7th floor, directly across from a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy trying to teach trolls ballet. This room is both invisible and undetectable normally, without a door at all, unless a very specific thing is done. You must pace in front of the wall 3 times while repeating your need in your head or out loud each time. Done right, and a door will magically appear on the previously blank wall that when opened takes you to a single room that fulfills whatever need you had. In the story, the room was used to hide things, to practice magic, or even to relieve oneself in the middle of the night if Dumbledore is to be believed. Regardless, this was a massive waste agreed upon by the vast majority of Potter fans, as the room had so much potential that was never explored. I fully intended to exploit the bloody hell out of the room. Specified book searching, magical practice, brewing illegal or highly controlled potions, rituals, the works really. Not to mention the room of hidden things configuration that held an unknowable amount of potentially valuable or dangerous items just waiting for me to take them for my own. Oh, and we can't forget the diadem of Ravenclaw. That lovely little piece of headwear that housed a fragment of Voldemort's soul was a ripe target for my system shop. Now that I knew it was possible to trade for conceptual things thanks to Whitebeard, I could absolutely sell just the soul fragment in the diadem to the shop, giving me the diadem itself that had the ability to boost one's mind. In theory this would ruin canon since the diadem was slated for destruction to make the mad wizard mortal again, but so long as his soul fragment was gone the same end was achieved, so nothing really changes. As an added bonus I'd get a treasure valued at 10 million system coins in the process for absolutely no personal cost. Now that's quite the steal. Anyways, with the practice equipment secured and sent back to the pub, I headed for my final stop, Aeolip's Owl and Beast Emporium. I needed living targets to hone my Conqueror's Hackey, as right now it was a wide area sort of spiritual attack and not focused. This didn't mean it wasn't very good or anything, just that like all Hackey users I needed practice with it. My target was not going to be anything expensive or even that I would care about traumatizing like an owl. I wanted some rats. 23. Practice. An unfortunate fact of both the magical side of things and regular side animal experimentation was a fact of life. For wizards it was using rats as targets for new potion recipes or even new spells. As a result, the common species was quite regularly stocked in beast-selling shops. The owner might suspect that I was up to no good buying the rats as a child, but the act itself wouldn't be odd at all if an adult wizard were to do it. Honestly, besides training my Conqueror's Hackey on the things, I didn't even plan to mistreat them at all. Assuming they survived the training, I was just going to release them into the wild. During the training, however, I would provide them good food, water, toys, and a large cage to roam about as they pleased. Really, if anything, I'd say I was going to be pampering the little rodents other than the sheer terror they'd have from feeling my Conqueror's Hackey. As expected, the old man in charge of Aeolip's gave me a rather stern look when I made my reason for being there clear, but sold me the rats along with a cage and the works to care for the rats. The guy seemed to have a misunderstanding when I got all this unnecessary stuff for mere experimental rats and probably thought I wanted them as pets, as his attitude towards me visibly improved. I certainly wasn't going to correct him, as it was better this way in my opinion. When I finally got back to the pub, Tom stopped me with a serious look. "Look lad, I know I said treat the room like your own, but you might be going a tad too far," he said sternly. "Hold that thought," I said calmly before unhooking my coin pouch and dumping a small pile of galleons on the counter. "Let's see, it's about 30 galleons a month, so for 12 months that is 360 galleons. Please count that amount out if you'd please, Mr. Tom," I said, and he seemed to realize what I was doing. "You mean to rent out that room for the whole year?" he said in shock. I nodded. "It's that or having to deal with paying you over and over again every month to hold the room. Really, this is much easier," I said honestly. "Bloody hell, kid, now I feel all sorts of foolish for going and trying to scold you for decorating the place like home," he said with an awkward smile. "No problem, this was kinda on me for not clarifying things before I started," I said with a friendly smile before bringing the rats in the cage up to my room. Of the three I purchased there, none looked the same as the others, so I had an easier time telling them apart. One was pure white, one was gray, and the last was brown, and none had names. All were male to prevent any sort of breeding issue with them while I had them, and they seemed more curious than anything at the moment. When I opened my room, I slipped off my shoes and set the next to the inside it before walking in my socks across the fuzzy warm carpet. I set the cage up near the window before setting the room protecting orbs in each of the room's four corners. A glassy sheet of magic rose up when I did before turning invisible. Against the wall next to my bed stood the target dummy ready for use. Satisfied with what I had accomplished so far, I relaxed in my bed with a couple books to study until Tom came to get me for dinner. After eating, I set up my alarm again before going to sleep. Once I woke up and found that it hadn't been messed with, checked the rug for depressions, and finally filled the room with smoke before being satisfied that I was truly alone. I did my exercises before moving on to wandless practice and then having breakfast. After breakfast I began to practice my Conqueror's Hackey while trying to focus it exclusively on the white rat. I failed as all three were knocked unconscious rather than the one I was trying to focus on. I waited for the rats to awaken by practicing Diffindo and Expelliarmus on the dummy. Once the rats were up and about, I made another attempt that was little better than the first. I wasn't discouraged by this, as I knew from the skill that Conqueror's Hackey was the hardest to train. It took both a firm will as well as a lot of practice focusing one's spirit on a single target or just fully unleashing it over a wide area. There was a big difference between that second one and what I was doing at the moment, specifically how even the Hackey was spread out. Right now my Hackey was a bit like formless patches of smoke that filled an area but didn't hold any consistency. A refined usage of it would be like flooding an area with deep water, as it pressed evenly everywhere with no gaps. I repeated this practice of mine until dinner time and did my nightly setup before going to sleep. This pattern held up for the next 2 weeks. By then I had already begun to fill out from my daily exercise and proper nutrition. I had mastered the entire first year's book of spells and few extras not in any of my books but I remembered from the story before I died, such as Silencio, Evanesco, and Coloporchus. The silencing, vanishing, and locking spells in order. In addition to that, I had made some progress at controlling my Conqueror's Hackey. Specifically, I had managed to narrow the effect down to the general area of the cage and not in every direction. I know this because I leashed one rat behind me and left 2 of them in the cage. At first they'd all get knocked out, but by the end of these 2 weeks only the rats in the cage would be. To be fair, I knew that the only reason I was making such fast progress was because I was merely following the skills knowledge that came from Whitebeard, who had long mastered the same ability. I wasn't like those people actually having to learn how to use it from scratch. I had a very clear path set for me that I merely needed to follow. 24. Status and shop. Status. I thought after my exercises for the day. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, Homo sapien, wizard sub-branch. Age, 11. Skills, appraisal, extraction, speed reading, Hackey. Abilities, magic LV2, Hackey LV1. Contacts, Edward Newgate, One Piece. Search cooldown, 2D, 23 hours, 57 m. Items, plain wooden trunk, miscellaneous textbooks, wand, fine robes X3, common potioneering equipment, plain work robes, black, X3, plain pointed hat, black, pair of dragonhide gloves, brown, winter cloak, black, silver fastenings, fine leather shoes X3, fine pants X5, fine shirts X12, exquisite embroidered cloak X1, common rat X3, miscellaneous candy. Treasures, amulet of articulation, Skyrim, devil fruit, Yami Yami no Mi, enchanted wooden trunk, ability stone, One Piece physique X1, rakery X1, Hebai no O X1, Akajuchi no Shurigai X1, room protective orbs X4, enchanted training dummy X1. Currencies, £2, 23 pence, 71.33 galleon, 16 sickles, 8 newts. Only 3 days left until I can get my second potential customer. Might as well appraise those weapons for sale in the shop, so I have some system coins reserved to save the contact. I thought seriously. For large items like this I needed to fully open up my inventory, which was risky but an unfortunate fact of life. The white screen appeared in mid-air and I casually reached through the transparent film and into the space to grab each of these weapons one after the other. The first and second were both katana-style swords, while the third was actually a blade-tipped whip. Item name, rakery. Class, treasure. Value, 3,000 system coins. Condition, well maintained. Description, a katana-style sword created by a renowned smith inspired by the flash of lightning. Housed in a yellow scabbard. Item name, Akajuchi no Shurigai. Class, treasure. Value, 3,000 system coins. Condition, well maintained. Description, a katana-style sword created by a renowned smith inspired by the force of thunder that shook his house during a storm. Housed in a white scabbard. Item name, Hebai no O. Class, treasure. Value, 4,000 system coins. Condition, well maintained. Description, a fine green whip made using the powerful tendons of a sea king with a blade tip inspired by the deadly grace of a serpent. My eyebrow couldn't help but twitch as I compared the first 2 weapons' inspirations. Both of the weapons were more or less inspired by the same thing, just different aspects of it. The whip, on the other hand, while inspired by something rather mundane, was at least crafted in an interesting way, as it used the tendons of a sea king for strength and flexibility while having a blade tip for lethal damage. Each of them were decent weapons that had been taken care of as their condition stated. I chose to sell the second sword and whip to my shop while reserving the first sword as merchandise that went back in my inventory. With that done, I now had 7,000 system coins to my name and chose to see what that could get me from the shop. A lot. The answer was a lot of things. I wasn't after just any old stuff though, as I was specifically after stuff that I couldn't get with money this time. That meant treasures, skills and abilities in particular. For treasures I found that most enchanted things regardless of complexity or power counted, which I noted mentally for later deals. While this category had a few things of interest, most of it was frankly things I could get with money, and the few I probably couldn't were out of my price range anyways, which made sense. Skills and abilities, however, were where things got complicated. The lowest valued skill was listed at 1,000 points, and the more useful or hard to obtain the skills were the higher that price jumped. Appraisal, extraction and speed reading were valued at 10,000 for the first 2 and 1,500 for the last. One thing I noted was that my theory about my magic practice earning a skill eventually was correct to a degree. At a price of 25,000 sat a skill labeled condensation that had a description that sounded suspiciously like my practice. According to the description, the skill worked to focus the magic within the body, thereby making it do more for less through the principle of density. My practice was focusing my magic to react faster, which was of course very different than the skill at the moment, but fell within its purview after enough expansion. I easily saw the path I could possibly take to acquire this new skill from my previous training. There was one skill I saw that I didn't hesitate to spend 3,000 coins on, linguist. The skill was similar to extraction in that it was a learning skill, but in this case it was specifically for language. The skill let me learn and master any language I found very fast with proper materials, and even let me decipher languages without a known translation if I understood a similar enough language. Considering the sheer volume of magical tomes written in dead tongues and incomplete articles, this skill was absolutely worth having as soon as possible. It also would allow me to master magic easier, as I understand the words that make up a verbal or written spell. The only real downside is I still have to put in the effort to learn the languages that would serve as my foundation first. Onto the category of abilities. Much like skills, the price of these things was extremely high for even the cheapest ability, sitting at a price tag of 10,000 for the ability telekinesis. According to the description of this ability, this was actually the most common ability to exist in the world. The problem was apparently discovering the ability was rather tricky, as it needed to awaken first through some sort of intense emotional event or catalyst. Magic was priced extremely highly at 1 billion coins, which I thought odd until I read the description. Magic is hereditary through genetics, but the more powerful the holder of said ability is, the more absolute the chance of the ability passing to their child. I found it rather funny that the pureblood idea was complete bullshit, and if anything was likely to slowly kill out its believers due to genetic mutation from all the inbreeding. Any two magicals, whether muggleborn or pureblood, coming together would almost always guarantee a magical child, since the magical gene would be dominant, no incest needed. 25. Abilities and languages. I mean, I suppose there is some merit to the idea of trying to keep the blood pure, since most pure blood houses did have some sort of extra ability inherent to their bloodline, but otherwise it was nonsense. Even then, the chance of said ability manifesting in one of the offspring of the family was very low, with the exception of certain bloodlines for some reason. For example, the Gaunt family, while it still existed, were somehow guaranteed to awaken Parseltongue. There was probably some secret there, if I was being honest, as otherwise it made no sense. Speaking of Parseltongue as an ability, it was priced at 50,000 coins, which was middle of the list surprisingly. From the description though, I couldn't help but agree with its price. According to the system, Parseltongue had exactly 3 uses. The first was of course communicating with and commanding most species of serpents. As it turned out, most magical species of serpent can't actually be commanded, only coaxed or bribed into compliance. The second use was that if used in serpent-related spell work, the effects of the spells were much stronger than otherwise should be possible. The final use of the ability made me laugh, as the ability also buffed healing spells, especially those that dealt with poison or curses. Beyond these uses though, the ability had no other uses, so its rather lackluster pricing made perfect sense. Another ability that I recognized on this list was the Metamorphagus ability that Nymphadora Tonks had in the books, which was ironically the Black family's ability that had been dormant for decades. The price for this ability was set much higher than Parseltongue at a whopping 2 million coins. According to the system, Nymphadora Tonks had barely even scratched the surface of the ability in the books. Changing one's appearance was the most basic thing the ability allowed. The real value was being able to mimic the properties of other things, magical or not, in nature. In other words, the ability let the user copy other innate abilities, such as a dragon's resistance to magic or ability to breath fire. The image the system painted of a mature Metamorphagus ability user was a witch or wizard who were so versatile and powerful that even without a wand they were nigh unstoppable. There were plenty of other abilities as well, of both good and strange uses, that I considered collecting eventually. Like that though, I was done with the system for now and went to experimenting with my new skill. I knew a bit of broken Spanish after taking the course in high school and closed my eyes to try and remember as much as I could on the subject. It was slow going at first, as those memories were over a decade old, so I just sat there mumbling what little I remembered to try and jog them. As more and more of my lessons surfaced, my mastery of the language began to rise rapidly. I went from being able to understand bits and pieces of Spanish to whole sentences by the end of the day. I didn't get any further than that though, as I simply couldn't remember any more from that time in my life with any real level of clarity. I should get some books on other languages to study at some point, maybe hire a tutor. I thought as I ate dinner. I woke up the next morning and did my exercises before eating breakfast and heading into Diagon Alley. This time I went straight to Flourish and Blots and bought a few primers on Spanish, French and Russian before going to a potion shop and stocking up on Wiggeneld, then heading back to the pub and holing up in my room. I went through the 2 primers for Spanish I bought fast, since most of it was things that already resting in my mind but needed to be jogged to the forefront. I was confident that I could now hold a decent conversation in the language at the very least. Perhaps not as fluent as a regular speaker, but good enough. I moved on the French and had to admit that after knowing both English and Spanish, picking up this language was not that hard. By the end of the day I was willing to bet I could somewhat follow a French conversation if the speakers weren't the sort that verbally regurgitated a lot of words all at once. Thanks to this, I was confident that by the time the cooldown on my search function ended I would have at least 2 additional languages in the bag. I was right too, as by the end of the second day I had mastered French with the same proficiency as Spanish, just with less practical experience using it. I didn't start my studies of Russian though on the 3rd day, but spent the day practicing with my wandless magic to try and diversify my bag of tricks when using it. Being able to lift and move things was plenty useful but easily countered as well, so some extra methods were needed. I decided to cheat a bit and try and copy some abilities from other worlds that I knew from anime. My first shitty copy was for the chakra scalpel form Naruto. Unless my understanding was totally wrong, this technique was literally just coating the palm or finger in an extremely sharp layer of energy that allows for invasive surgery without the patient bleeding to death. My attempt was basically just trying to put a sharp edge of magic on my hand that I could slash at the dummy. As it turned out, not actually an easy thing to pull off, especially when you can't see if it's working without testing it. I am not proud to admit my hand really hurt from all the karate chops I put on the dummy that weren't actually working. I pulled it off kinda by trying to cast and hold a Diffindo through my hand, but it was a pale imitation of the real thing from the anime. I wasn't too discouraged though, as no one ever said that this was going to be easy or fast. The focus Hackey let me have for this helped a lot, but I was still an amateur magic user, so there was only so much progress I could force in such a small time. 26. Second customer. I ate and went to bed as usual, but barely got any sleep as my mind was far too occupied with the impending end of my search function's cooldown. When I awoke to a knocking on my door, I knew I had ended up sleeping in longer than I usually would and quickly sorted myself out before going downstairs to eat breakfast. It was a simple meal of scrambled eggs and sausage with toast before I headed back to my room. I watched the timer tick down the seconds until the search function lit up from its grayed out state. Search function activated. Searching. 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 Target locked. Initiating trade window with target Edmund Rockwell, world, arc. Rockwell, huh? Gonna need to stay on my toes for this one. I thought as the world around me grayed and a screen appeared in mid-air. There on it a pale man with mutton chops and round spectacles wearing a rough leather set of clothes stood. He looked at the screen and me by extension with a critical eye and even tried moving his hand through the screen as a test. Either I am hallucinating due to the heat or the arc is behaving abnormally. He said eventually. Neither actually. My name is Alexander Drake, the multiversal merchant. And you sir have the privilege of being chosen as a customer. I say with a smile as I bow grandly. An amusing hallucination, at least it seems. He said, clearly unconvinced. No hallucination I assure you, but of course a scientist like you requires proof. No. As a show of faith, take this potion. I said, sending him one of the Wiggeneld potions I had stocked up for just such a purpose with my last trip to Diagon Alley. Impossible. He yelled in disbelief when he found the vial of green liquid very much solid and real. Why is it? You yourself have been cast far into the future, have you not? I asked calmly. You know of my situation? He asked with a sharp stare. Indeed I do. Edmund Rockwell, once an early 19th century English scientist, but suddenly found yourself upon a savage land with prehistoric beasts roaming it. You learned of these beasts and tamed them while studying to understand the new world you found yourself in. Judging from your comment on the heat, I assume you are at the part of your life that you find yourself studying element in the arc known as scorched earth, a desert arc. I said with a smile. Let's assume for the sake of argument that I believe you are not a hallucination. What comes next? Also assuming you know all about these arcs, you should be aware I have little to trade for anything. He said, now more interested than disbelieving. Ah, but that is where you are wrong. Not only do you have a plethora of trading materials available to you, but I also have plenty that you would find invaluable. My world is after all nearly identical to the version of Earth you come from, with a key difference. Magic is very real here but has been hidden away from the non-magical side of humanity. This means all the creature comforts you've no doubt dearly missed and more I can easily acquire for you in exchange for the things on your side. I said, smiling widely. He did look sorely tempted but cautious still. You say I have a plethora of things to trade, but if that is true, why don't I know about it? He asked seriously. Because it's a matter of perspective really. To you these things are common and everywhere you look, but across the multiverse, valuable and rare. For example, the vast variety of beasts that roam the lands you are in. There is the element as well, but that is more limited in its uses outside of your world. One thing I know for certain that I possess that you will want is knowledge about the arc's true purpose. About what element is and can do, and on a personal note the future that awaited you should you not have been contacted by me here and now. I said, knowing from his expression of greed that I had him hook, line and sinker. You certainly know how to draw one in with your words if nothing else. I will not mince words then. I want that knowledge and will go to any length to get it. I won't deny desiring some comforts of home either. He said seriously. Fantastic. To start with, I'd like a Pulmonoscorpius, raptor and Dimorphodon egg, fertilized of course. What would you like in exchange? Don't be greedy though. I know the value of what I can offer you against what you can offer me. I say seriously. You are surprisingly well spoken for one so young. Is this some sort of magic? He asked curiously. Something like that. Still make your demands, or if you need time I can contact you again at a date you specify. I say calmly. No, that won't be necessary. I want a bundle of tea leaves, Earl Grey preferably. I want a set of proper clothes suitable for a desert environment like this. And I want to know what would have become of me if you hadn't contacted me. He said, watching me closely. I pondered the matter for a moment. Barely acceptable. Knowing one's possible future is a very valuable thing after all. To provide context, I suppose I need to mention that your disagreement with Helena and May-Een over their visit to an obelisk is founded on a misunderstanding. They would have shared their findings freely had you but asked. Your joining with that Nerva fellow was the main source of the rift between you three. Luckily you've left him behind, so they will work with you again once they too arrive on the arc you are on. I paused to make sure he was getting all of this, only to find that I had his rapt attention. While you are here you will have explored element further and would grow wary of others, especially those you believe unworthy of knowing the arc's secrets. This would lead to your downfall. I say seriously. 27. Changed fate. Rockwell frowned at this part. My downfall? From context I assume my decisions lead me to make a grave error of some sort. He asked and I nod. You play nice with Helena and Mayene while you are here and even to a degree when you arrive on the next arc of the chain, Aberration. The survivors of that arc however have learned to harness the power of element for various technologies, armor the most advanced. Your mind begins to be clouded by ambition and paranoia as your experiments with element become more and more unethical and lead to your fall from grace. I say seriously, am I hunted for my actions then? Not all great minds are accepted, so that does not surprise me. He said, seemingly in agreement with himself that the story was fine so far, not worth changing. No, I say, shattering that delusion. Your ambition outstrips your reason, and in your hubris you inject yourself with liquid element believing it would make you a god only to turn you into a freakish monstrous puppet. You attack the other survivors before being chased off. In the corrupting pools of element you grow and further mutate, becoming the overseer of the aberration arc by default. I say seriously, impossible. I will have to have lost my mind to take such actions. He says in disbelief. I told you already. Your isolation led to your downfall. You truly go mad in the pursuit of the secrets of the arcs and element with no one to keep your mind grounded. Your final fate is to become a puppet for the corrupted element itself that is consumed with the idea of corrupting all you can, a true monster. The worst part is if you had only stayed with Helena and Mayene, the ascension you so desperately sought could have been yours. I said honestly while finding it ironic. It's different now. I know and can avoid the mistakes that I would have made otherwise. He said with a deep thoughtful expression. That is my hope as well. For as long as I have known your story I felt it a shame your fate was so bleak. That is enough for now though. I will contact you again in a week's time to trade items. Will that be enough time for you to procure the eggs? I asked, wanting to bring this contact session to an end. For Raptor and the Pulmonoscorpius that is more than enough, but I may need more time for the Dimorphodon egg. Flying creatures like that can be tricky, you understand. He said seriously, and I nodded. Then I will contact you in a week. I said before closing out the screen and saving him as my second contact. That went well, I think. I can't wait to get those eggs. Hagrid should have all sorts of valuable and rare things from the forest that I can trade them to him for. I thought with a grin as I started to do my exercises that I had missed earlier. Once I was done there I started working on my magic, both with and without a wand. I wanted to make the most of the next 2 weeks before the official Hogwarts school year started. Right now it was the middle of August and the term started on the 1st of September, so 2 weeks was my current limit. In this time I had to collect the things Rockwell wanted while studying and practicing my magic. I had already gone through all of my first-year coursework books and was currently reading through last year's second-year textbooks. The books don't change normally in any other class besides data, so finding out what to get was easy. All of that said, I had no intention of taking all of these books with me to the school and was currently using my unenchanted trunk to store all my books that weren't going with me. In this case that was the second-hand copies I had already memorized and any second or third-year textbooks I hadn't memorized by the time school rolled around. I went about my day as normal, and the next day I set out to collect what Rockwell wanted. The tea leaves were easy to find as tea was an incredibly popular beverage even for the wizarding world, so I just walked into a tea shop and bought a few different blends of Earl Grey since I wasn't sure how Rockwell would like his tea. I even bought an iron kettle for him with a matching set of cups. As for the clothes, I simply bought a set of khaki enchanted cotton clothes that were enchanted to keep one cool and resized to fit the wearer snugly. I didn't know his sizes and wasn't going to ask either, so this was the best I could do. Still, it would fulfill the request more than adequately, which was good enough. I didn't just go back to the pub though, as I happened to see something quite interesting. There, moving through the crowded street of Diagon Alley, was one Rubius Hagrid. There was no mistaking him. Massive and covered in a patchwork fur jacket with messy long brown hair and a thick full beard. The man towered over the rest of the crowd and was impossible to miss. What had me interested however was the skinny overwhelmed boy trailing beside him. Short brown hair and bright green eyes behind ratty glasses and a distinctive red scar on his forehead, the boy who lived, Harry Potter. I made no move to approach either of them but just watched as Hagrid left Harry at Ollivanders. I walked over to Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor instead. The place was as cold as expected and fairly busy when I walked in. The bright atmosphere and pretty young witches in skirted uniforms made the place vibrant to say the least. A first-time customer, how rare. What can I get for you today? The older man who owned this place asked with a smile as I walked up to the counter. Can I get a single scoop of your strawberry peanut butter on a chocolate-dipped cone? Also, is it possible for a cone to be sent to the boy who is in Ollivanders privately? I asked, and the man looked surprised before just smiling widely. Trying to give someone a pleasant surprise, are we? All right, that'll be 2 sickles. He said brightly, and I just took out the money and paid the bill before heading back to the pub. 28 Protego and setting off. Once I was back in my room at the pub, I set straight to work practicing my magic as I only had a small amount of time left before school started. 2 weeks may not sound like a small amount of time, but when you were focused as I was, that simply wasn't true. As expected, the time came and went as I devoted my time to further expanding my wandless magic as well as a single wand spell that was giving me no end of grief to pull off, Protego. I had no books on the spell and had to go off of what I read in my past life as well as the movies, but the spell was considered quite advanced for a reason. The effect of the spell was to summon up a magical barrier that was supposed to protect the caster. The problem was that the spell required more than simple rote memorization and recitation to cast. You needed a genuine desire to protect yourself or someone else for the spell to even try and fizzle into existence. This part was unfortunately not easy for me to pull off at all. As it turned out, having Hackey was actually detrimental here, as when I used armament I gained a sense of being protected, which for obvious reasons was counterproductive to what I wanted. Filling my mind with the image of a broad impervious shield was easy, but I lacked that desperate feeling of needing protection and didn't feel like putting myself in harm's way to get it. The spell was useful for several reasons, yes, but not strictly speaking necessary to learn. I wanted to learn it in case I needed to block spells without exposing Hackey, or learn its more advanced forms that were quite varied actually. The spell Protego was the most basic of shield spells, with there being a great deal more advanced versions because, to no surprise, people really valued their lives. The three advanced versions I personally knew of from my past life were Protego Maxima, Protego Horribilis, and Protego Diabolica. The first was just a direct upgrade to the normal Protego spell meant for a single person. The second was a version that created a wide area of effect barrier that was stronger than a normal Protego, but not by much since it covered a wider area. The final, however, was less shield and more conceptual construct that was both offensive and defensive. The only known user of that version was its creator Gellert Grindelwald, but what it did was create a sort of blue fire that wouldn't burn those the caster thought were allies but would reduce enemies to ash near instantly. There was some speculation that the spell was a strange fusion of Protego and the forbidden fire spell Fiendfire, thus creating the flames that sensed the heart. Whatever the case, that was a future me problem as the time finally came for me to head to Hogwarts. I had already passed off the goods to Rockwell and received the eggs that now sat quietly in my inventory to prevent them from spoiling, so I just needed to approach Hagrid himself. "You know how you are getting to King's Cross, right?" Tom asked when I came down the stairs with my enchanted trunk. "Yeah, the night bus. Have to admit I'm a little excited to see it in person. One of the rare cases of Muggle-Wizard hybrid technology after all," I said with a grin. "You won't be so excited after actually riding in that bloody thing. Still, I'll keep your room clean while you are at Hogwarts, so don't worry about that and focus on your studies. Can't say I don't envy you, lad. Some of my best memories were from my own time there. Most British wizards will say the same too," he said with a nostalgic look. "Oh, I don't doubt my time there will also be quite memorable as well," I said with a chuckle as I thought of the events from the books. The first year had Voldemort himself serving as a teacher on the back of Quirrell's head, the second had Lockhart and the Chamber's whole shenanigans. The third had Dementors and Sirius Black lurking about while we have a bloody werewolf as a teacher. The fourth was even worse, as we had a madman hiding as another madman with Polyjuice as a teacher while we had an international tournament between the Russian, French, and British wizarding schools. That alone was going to cause all sorts of drama that is then punctuated by the resurrection of Voldemort himself. The fifth year was Umbridge's year, and one I was frankly not looking forward to since from both the books and movies she seemed to make it her mission to ruin the lives of every student in the school that year. The sixth years had highs and lows, with Snape getting the Dada position while Slughorn took up potions again. Draco Malfoy working to bring the Death Eaters into the castle and kill Dumbledore was a big downside as well. Then of course there's also the fact Dumbledore is dying the whole year and keeled over at the end after setting a really complicated plan in motion. The final years were by far the worst though, as while the books didn't cover it much since Harry and his friends were elsewhere, the few lines we get show that it was being run by the Death Eaters and not in a positive way. I wasn't sure if things were going to play out the same way this time, since I was going to be making moves in the background that would interfere with canon to different degrees, but I was going in with the assumption it would all be roughly the same for now. I said my farewells to Tom and walked out front of the pub before raising my wand in front of me and waiting. There was a strange sound as a blue double-decker transit bus seemed to snap into existence on the street in front of me. "Welcome to the night bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. Just stick out your wand hand, step on board and we can take you anywhere you want to go. My name is Stan Shunpike and I will be your conductor this day. Off to King's Cross I take it." The thin blonde guy standing at the front of the bus said casually. 29, Bumpy ride in Hogwarts Express. "Yes, 11 Sickles right?" I asked, and he raised an eyebrow. "Done your homework it seems. You'll probably end up in Ravenclaw, I'd wager." "Yeah, it's 11 Sickles regardless of distance. Hold on to your trunk if you don't want it slung about the place though," he said casually. "I'll make it a full galleon if you can get me there faster than normal, don't care if it's a bit bumpier as a result," I said, pulling out a golden coin. "You hear that, Ernie? Bloke wants us to go even faster, and he's even paying us for it," Stan said with a chuckle. "Just Stan. Me never erd of some ain, like the but I be willing to give I'm what he want," the shrunken head above the steering wheel said in a dense Jamaican accent. "You heard him, mate, best hold on tight. This'll be a ride to remember," Stan said with an excited expression. I boarded the bus, and unlike the usual seats one would expect, there were only rows of beds in the bus and the usual handles to hold on to. I found a nice corner spot and wedged myself and my trunk into it firmly before actively channeling my armament Hackey to my hands and feet to ground myself. It was a damned good thing I did, as with a loud bang, the bus shot into motion violently, trying to send me and my trunk flying as the bed slid across the floor to the back of the bus and to the sides rapidly as the bus bounced and defied physics at insane speeds through London. My grounding kept me and my stuff from getting sent sprawling haphazardly across the bus. But I felt like I was on the world's most unhinged roller coaster as my insides were yanked by momentum and inertia this way and that. Ironically, I could feel my Hackey growing rapidly under the strain this was putting on me, and my spotty coating started to fill in and even out at a visible rate. This wasn't all that surprising, as Hackey was well known to grow best under strain, with combat being a particularly good method. Considering the amount of effort I had to put into keeping it up while subjected to such raw directional forces, it was no wonder mine was growing so fast. With a sudden lurching sensation that almost overcame my efforts, the bus slammed to a stop outside a busy area with people coming and going. King's Cross Station. Stan said with a grin as I relaxed my Hackey, only to almost collapse from weakness. Why yeah, a moment please, I said with a groan as I fought to suppress the contents of my stomach from leaving. Re-enervate, Stan said, pointing his wand at me casually. Immediately my nausea lessened and my senses sharpened for a split second, like I had taken a shot of espresso straight to the brain. Usually best for waking folk up, but in a case like yours it gives a jolt to set you on your feet, a trick I've picked up working here. Now off with you, don't want to miss the train after all, he said, and I nodded before hauling my trunk off the bus. The bus vanished right after that and I pulled my trunk into the station before heading for platforms 9 and 10. At first glance it looked like nothing was off there, but if you really paid attention you could spot the aurors keeping the muggles from noticing the oddity of the enchanted secret entrance to the Hogwarts Express. The place was a red brick set of platforms next to a few different engines and had a metal roofing that only just covered the station before opening up on the walls to let the trains come and go. I made eye contact with one of the aurors, who nodded at me before pointing at the brick archway that led to the Hogwarts Express's special platform. I took the hint and ran straight for it, and instead of crashing into it I was met with a brief instant of darkness before finding myself on the magical platform with students of all ages saying their farewells to their families. I wasted no time at all carrying my trunk up into the end cabin of the red steam train and went to search for an unoccupied room. The cabins were old-fashioned with many small rooms with doors that had 2 benches to sit on and overhead space for one's luggage. I easily found an empty room at the very end of the train and took out a book to read while I waited to arrive at Hogsmeade Village. The train didn't go straight to Hogwarts after all, but to the train station in the nearby village. There were all sorts of theories about why this was in my past life, but the one that made the most sense to me was that it was a protective measure so that dark wizards couldn't just hitch a ride on the train to get into the school. In the same vein, it was theorized that the point of the boat ride after students arrived was a sort of ritual that extended a kind of protection over the students while they were at school. The idea was that by following the ritual steps, even unknowingly, the students made it so fatal injuries were almost impossible to suffer while they were at school. The supporting argument for this was the fact there was only one fatality in the school in over half a century, despite the fact young people given a lot of power aren't usually the most safe people to be around. Even in the books where hexes and curses were exchanged between houses, there was no case that couldn't be solved by a visit to the hospital wing. That could be coincidence once or twice, but over almost 1,000 years of next to no fatal incidents. Nah, that's downright suspicious. But not that I had any plan to investigate that gift horse to begin with. Some things are best appreciated in silence rather than fully understood. After all, who was to say there wasn't a cost to this protection that students had to pay unknowingly? Magic was not something that came free, all magic had a cost. The trick was what exactly that cost was. In the case of most spells it was a wizard's own magical energy, a resource they regenerate over time. In others it was something more costly, such as an ingredient or material that once used was gone. 30 big fish. As I sat there in my cabin on the train reading, the train was starting to load up, and more than a few times someone had looked into my cabin before leaving. I wasn't too surprised, as I imagined the last cabin in the train would be popular due to how close to the entrance and exit for this segment of the train it was. I found it funny how easy it was to guess why these people didn't even bother to see if I minded sharing the cabin. Most likely they saw my fine clothes and immediately pegged me for some kind of spoiled noble brat and chose to go elsewhere as a result. This changed about 10 minutes after I had settled in, as 2 girls appeared at the door. The first was a young blonde witch with sharp blue eyes and smooth aristocratic features that had a bit of baby fat still clinging to them. The second was a hazel-haired witch with slightly more plain features but the same baby fat in her face. "Are those seats taken?" the first girl asked, pointing to the seats across from me calmly. I shook my head. "Not at all, you are free to them," I said casually before going back to my book. The 2 girls shared a look before entering the room with their trunks behind them and putting the things away. They took their seats after that, but clearly they were both uncomfortable with the silence and tried to make small talk. "I am Daphne Greengrass, heiress to the most ancient and noble house Greengrass," the blonde said with a proud expression. "Tracy Davis, half-blood," the brunette said with a bright smile. I closed my book calmly. "Alexander Drake, aspiring merchant," I said with both girls looking confused. "Does that mean you are pure blood or not?" Daphne asked, voicing her confusion. "I believe one's blood status is irrelevant. What truly matters is what they are capable of. To answer your question, however, I don't know my blood status, as I am an orphan. Could be half, could be muggleborn. No way to know without a test," I say with a shrug. Both girls shared the same disbelieving look. "But how are your clothes so fine if you are an orphan?" Tracy asked curiously. As I said, I am an aspiring merchant. These clothes were paid for thanks to a successful deal I made. I said honestly. Nonsense. There's no way you could ever make such a large deal. Unless you were dealing with illegal things, that is. Daphne said with a disbelieving look. Is it truly so hard to believe that I had something valued by someone else so highly? Even now I have several items that if I sold them would likely go for a fortune. A fruit that allows one to create and control darkness itself in exchange for the inability to swim and injuries causing much more pain, for example. I said with a smirk. For those wondering why I am spilling something like that, the answer is very simple: profit. Daphne Greengrass was a minor character in the books as she was never really involved with canon ever and thus not focused on. In this world, however, she is absolutely a big fish. The Greengrass family is part of the sacred 28. 28 families considered to have the purest and oldest blood in all of magical Britain. A true noble heiress, magical royalty almost. If I could make a connection to her or even better her family, that would be an extremely valuable thing indeed. It was made fairly clear in the books that the noble families tended to hoard rare knowledge and materials from the general population, and I wanted that stuff. I saw nothing wrong with using the advantage I had over everyone else in this world to achieve that end. Every little or not so little advantage I get from using my system to trade with other universes is in truth only a single advantage, as it all boils down to the system in the end. If you were just going to lie, you might as well have claimed something that actually exists, like the Philosopher's Stone. Daphne said with a scoff. I just grinned widely at that, however. Oh, but I am not lying, I have the fruit in my trunk. Can't prove that it does as said without someone eating it, but I am absolutely sure it works. I said confidently. Humph. And you will not even show me this so-called darkness fruit as a result, right? She said with a snort of derision. Quite the opposite, really. I'd be more than happy to show it to you. I said, still grinning. For the first time she looked less confident that I was lying once I said that. It was easy to understand why too, as she had likely written me off as blowing smoke only for me to be willing to back it up with actual evidence. She probably still thought I was talking nonsense, but likely realized the possibility I wasn't actually existed. Fine then. Show us this fruit of yours. She said, still disbelieving but slightly worried. I didn't hesitate to stand up and pull my trunk down and set it on my lap so I could open it away from their sight. I reached into the trunk and secretly pulled the Yummy Yummy no Mi out of my inventory before closing my trunk and holding it up. Clearly the fruit was nothing like anything they had ever seen, which made sense as devil fruits had very unique appearances. It looks poisonous. Tracy said with a concerned look. It's not, definitely won't taste good though. I'm told that the flavor of similar fruits taste absolutely wretched. In fact, the powers they grant are worth it though. I said, still grinning. Fine. I will admit that you have a strange fruit that I can't identify, but I still don't believe it does what you said it can. Daphne said reluctantly. As I said, unless someone eats it there's no way to prove it, and I doubt you can make such a deal on your own. I said, throwing her own previous accusation back at her playfully. 31, hook, line and sinker. You. She hissed in offense but couldn't actually argue. Even as young as she was smart enough to understand that if I wasn't lying then she really couldn't make a deal on this level. Her father, who headed the Greengrass family, would be required to close a deal like this. That didn't mean she liked being called out on it though. It also certainly didn't help that I had managed to turn her own words against her. Now, no reason to be upset. I'm sure your family would be quite interested in making such a deal. When we get to Hogwarts you can even use the Ollery to send a letter about it. I'll keep the fruit in reserve till then if you'd like. I suggested with a grin. My father will easily prove that your fruit is a fraud, then we'll see who is laughing then. She said with a huff. You said you were told other fruits like that one exist as well. Are they the same with the darkness magic or different somehow? Tracy asked curiously, and Daphne listened in interest even if she was still a bit upset. Different. Each fruit is unique in what it does and can even be categorized into 3 groups based on what they do. The first group is called Logia and allows the one who ate it to create, control and become an elemental force like sand or lightning. My fruit falls in this category though is special because it allows the user to forcibly cancel the powers of other fruit eaters if they touch them. The price of that advantage is that the fruit doesn't allow its eater to elementalize and causes injuries to hurt much more than normal. I explained while they listened with deep interest. And the other 2 categories? Daphne asked, anger forgotten. The second is the Zoan-type fruits that allows the eater to become something similar to an animagus though much more perfect, as you can take a hybrid form as well. This type of fruit is further broken down into 3 categories, ancient, normal and mythical variants. The first is dinosaur forms, the second is the normal species of non-magical beasts, and the third is the rarest type of fruit that allows the eater to take the form of magical creatures. I said, thoroughly pleased by the interest they were showing. Magical beast animagus forms. They both said in astonishment. No, I was quite clear, similar but not actually animagus magic. Anyways, the third type of fruit is the most common but also the biggest gamble of them all unless you already knew what the fruit was about before eating it, paramecia. These fruits are more conceptual in nature. Things like springs, pulling, strength, speed, bubbles or even just cleaning. The powers granted by these fruits can be strange or incredibly dangerous, but their potential is limited only by the user themselves and the length their imagination can go to. I explained, watching as expressions of desire and even the smallest hint of ambition crossed their faces. How have we never heard of these fruits before if they are so powerful? Daphne asked with a confused expression. That's because only I can get them. I won't explain how either, personal secret I'm afraid. I said with a smirk, knowing they'd absolutely try and find out on their own anyways. I put away the fruit in my inventory secretly, using my trunk as cover before putting my trunk back up onto the shelf. You said you had other things as well, right? What are they? Tracy asked with a burning curiosity. Nothing that would likely be of interest to either of you. I already have certain customers in mind for these things anyways. I do however take commissions if you have anything specific you desire. Might take me a while to find if I even can. I said as their faces lit up from disappointment to excitement. Hook, line and sinker. Gods, I love the amulet of articulation. I thought with a smirk. Indeed, this entire conversation had been influenced subtly by the amulet to convince these two to accept what I said as not only truth but something they wanted. Downsides be damned. I wasn't really all that worried about introducing devil fruits to this world, as if any world could fully integrate them into it, this was it. Anything the fruits were capable of magic was also able to do, and even the Logias weren't so overpowered here, since there was more than enough willpower infused magics here that would likely hit a Logia user. Naturally, if I was going to introduce devil fruits en masse to this world, I myself would try and get one I liked. If I had to choose, actually I didn't want a Zoan or Logia fruit but rather a Paramecia fruit. Specifically the Juku no Mi or ripe fruit that allows its user to mature or decay anything or anyone they touch. I would otherwise like the Toshi no Mi or age fruit that allowed the user to control the aging process of any person or object. The reason I wanted either of these for myself was simple: profit. I could not even begin to list the amount of treasures that needed an ungodly amount of time to ripen or become valuable again. These fruits would allow me to speed up this process to harvest these treasures right away. Or in the case of something like, say, a fertilized egg, incubating it in an instant. It kinda went without saying, but these powers were also horrifying if used on a person, as you could straight up age someone to the end of their possible lifespan and watch them keel over in an instant. Time-based powers like this are both incredibly useful and dangerous as a result. As for Zoan or Logia fruits, if I had to choose between the two, I would only accept a mythical Zoan or either the lightning or light Logia or nothing at all. My reasoning was simple: speed was king. Both light and lightning were like top 1 and 2 fastest things in existence that we knew of, with one of them being incredibly valuable for technology as well. Honestly though, I doubted Whitebeard would go out of his way to grab the current user of any of these fruits in a way that would let him trade me the fruits they hold. 32. Showing off. Do you think you could find something for plants? Daphne asked hopefully. Any particular reason? I asked curiously. The Greengrass family runs many potion ingredient farms and pride themselves on their mastery of plants, in particular due to their druidic heritage. Tracy explained. I see. I can think of a few fruits that would fulfill the niche you are after, but as for finding and obtaining them, well, there's no telling how long that might take, or even if it's possible at all. I'll put out word though. I said honestly. I meant it too, as there were several plant-related fruits I could think of off the top of my head. Not including the two I myself wanted. There was the forest fruit used by Aramaki, who becomes an admiral after the Marineford battle and its aftermath. There was likely others as well, but they hadn't been mentioned in the manga or anime, so I wasn't aware of them. Now that I think about it, I should probably see about getting a devil fruit encyclopedia from Whitebeard. They aren't complete, but it would definitely be better than relying on just what I saw in the anime or manga. I thought seriously. These fruits are gonna be expensive, aren't they? Tracy asked with an expression that said she fully expected to be unable to afford one. Depends on what you consider valuable or not. See, in this case I don't want gold or galleons, but rather things that noble houses hoard to themselves, such as rare knowledge and resources. Gold or galleons I can acquire easily, but that requires connections, status, or irresistible treasures. I said seriously. Books? You want books of all things for something like that? Daphne exclaimed in shock. Not just any old books, but rare ones, even unique volumes that haven't ever seen a pair of eyes outside your family. Knowledge is power, especially for a merchant like me. I said seriously. My dad will make that deal without hesitation. Daphne said confidently. I wouldn't be so sure unless your father is a fool. What I am asking for is effectively part of your family's legacy. It's not about the knowledge being useful or not to your family, but that you and only you have it. These fruits are certainly worth it, but to make such a deal is to trade away this advantage, and unless one is mad or desperate they will hesitate. I said, shooting down her misunderstanding firmly. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem exploiting my customers' ignorance if it gives me a better deal, but Daphne is not the one making the deal, and there was no point in giving her false hope. I wasn't sure what sort of man her father was, but as I said, it was not so easy to make such a deal. These were heavy stakes to pay for anyone who was part of a group that valued their heritage so highly. Telling her this made her go silent, as she understood at least somewhat the weight of my price. After that the train started to move and I went back to my book. The two girls talked amongst themselves as I read, though I was still keeping an ear out on both their conversation and the door, since I was expecting a visit here soon. The door was pushed open about 15 minutes later, and a bushy set of long brown hair and round face with slightly long front teeth was looking in on us. Excuse me, but have any of you seen a toad? Neville's lost his and we are searching the train for it. The girl who I identified as Hermione Granger asked seriously. Accio toad. I said calmly as I drew and waved my wand. Soon enough there was a thump as a large brown toad flew into the girl. I earned 3 sets of eyes at that and merely smiled. Summoning charm, I learned it a bit early since it's quite handy. I said casually. Where'd you learn it from? I haven't seen it in the first-year books at all. Hermione asked intrigued. That's because it's a 4th-year spell. The textbooks are merely guides after all, not the limit. I said as I put my wand away. Might want to hurry back with that toad, looks like it's trying the escape again. Tracy said motioning to the wiggling toad Hermione was holding. The girl quickly rushed off with the thing at that reminder and I was left with 2 sets of eyes looking at me expectantly. What? I did say knowledge was power already. For us wizards and witches that is very literal. I said with a shrug. How far ahead of the rest of us are you if you are casting 4th-year spells? Daphne asked curiously. Depends on the subject. In charms and defense against the dark arts a whole year and a half roughly. As for the subjects that take ingredients or physical practice or are incredibly dangerous like transfiguration, herbology and potions more or less at the same level you are. I do have more theoretical knowledge on them than you do though. I said casually. How? Didn't you only get the books like a month ago? Tracy demanded in shock. I did but I can read quite quickly and can understand and remember what I read near perfectly. I also went out of my way to purchase higher-level books as well as copies of our textbooks that were second-hand and had notes written in them. After that I spent at least 6 or 7 hours a day studying. I said honestly. You are definitely going to Ravenclaw. I can't even begin to imagine studying so long. Tracy said with a shudder. That would certainly be convenient. Ravenclaw is a neutral house if my research is correct. That will serve me well if I want to make deals with all 4 houses. I said with a shrug. 33, arriving at Hogwarts. All 4 houses. You sure that won't cause problems? Daphne asked seriously. Only if the people in them can't separate business from personal matters. The rivalries between houses have no part in business. It's like getting mad at Flourish and Blotz or Ollivander for selling to people from a different house, makes no sense. I said calmly. Yeah but those are not also students at Hogwarts. Tracy pointed out. I am aware of the difference but as I said business and personal matters shouldn't be mixed. Something I will make abundantly clear to anyone I sell to. I said with a shrug. After that things quieted down and I got to focus on my book until the trolley lady came by offering food. I purchased some fizzy pop and a roast beef sandwich that I had for lunch while sipping on the pop throughout the trip. The sun was mid-trip below the horizon when the train arrived at Hogsmeade Station. The station was all brickwork but well maintained at least with a carriage path leading away from it elsewhere and a footpath to the edge of the Black Lake where several boats sat docked. I stood up as the older students started getting off and took down my trunk before opening it up and taking out my robe. I draped it on over my clothes before putting my trunk back and leaving the room so the girls could change. Once we were ready we left the train itself alongside the other students. First years this way. Hagrid was calling out as everyone got off the train. I walked over to the slowly gathering crowd of similarly aged kids to myself and waited. I heard we have to fight a troll to be sorted. One of the kids said nervously. Well I heard the heads of each house choose their own students. Another said and I rolled my eyes. None of these theories were even close to the truth but I wasn't going to correct them either. I imagine it was a sort of tradition to keep first years in the dark about the exact nature of the sorting ceremony. More likely than not because it was amusing watching them squirm anxiously. I was likely the only first year not all that nervous about the matter since I already knew the details. How are you so calm? Daphne asked nervously as Hagrid led us to the boats as the dark settled from night arriving. The ceremony isn't truly dangerous or the school wouldn't work and I honestly don't care all that much which house I get sorted into. I said frankly. Maybe but you will have trouble if you get sorted into Slytherin with your blood purity in question. Tracy said seriously. If it happens I'll figure it out. At worst I can just hex everyone till they leave me be. I said with a shrug. That might work. Daphne said hesitantly. Soon enough we got to the boats and Hagrid told us all 3 to a boat as we loaded up. The man himself took up a whole boat and even then the poor vessel looked a slight rock away from sinking. The lanterns at the front of the boats lit up as the things started to drift out over the lake all on their own. Casually running my Hackey over my hand I could feel the slight hum of the magic enchanting the boat I was in. It wasn't as clear as my own magic and far weaker but definitely there. As we passed over the slightly rocking dark waters I extended my admittedly weak observation Hackey to see if I could notice the giant squid. It was kinda blurry and moved in and out of my perception range but I was sure I spotted the thing lazily trailing along under the fleet of boats, no doubt to rescue any students that fell overboard. I couldn't get a clear look at it though since my Hackey was weak as hell. To be fair though I had only been training it for at most a month now so really that was to be expected. The trip across the lake was uneventful otherwise as it was a crisp cool night with clouds overhead as per usual. The castle was visible in the far distance and I had to agree that it was truly magnificent. Several tall stone towers with sharp points on top of a wide many-windowed ancient stone structure that you could practically feel the history it had stood through. The fact it sat high up on a hill next to the lake made it even more scenic. The boats pulled into the docks and the at most 31st years alighted onto solid ground again. The population of wizards were never particularly populous, but I knew thanks to the books that my year had one of the lowest number of new students due to the fact Voldemort was most active during that time. Those in the wizarding world didn't feel safe bringing children into the world at the time. Most of the new students were as a result from families that moved here after his defeat, Muggleborn or pureblood who had nothing to fear from the man. Even then we only made up a single class worth of students, which explained why everyone seemed to share the same schedule in the books. I had always thought it odd that Slytherin and Gryffindor had so many classes together, but this was a pretty damn good reason. Anyways, Hagrid led us up the stone steps to the castle and into the large wood and iron doors. There was an almost immediately change in temperature as the castle was lit up with flaming torches and braziers. We were then led straight to a set of internal doors that were quite large, where a tall black-haired older witch with glasses stood waiting. "The first year's professor, as promised," Hagrid said respectfully. "Thank you, Hagrid, I'll take them from here," the witch said sternly but not unkindly. 34. Ghosts and Hidden Function. Welcome to Hogwarts. The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you are here your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory and spend time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw and Slytherin. She paused to make sure we were all listening before continuing. Each house has its own noble history and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts your triumphs will earn your house points. Any rule breaking will result in a deduction of points and perhaps more if the offense is severe enough. At the end of the year the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I sincerely hope all of you will become a credit to whichever houses you are sorted into. The ceremony will begin in a few moments, so I suggest you smarten up as best you can before I return for you," she said before leaving us to enter the Great Hall. A few of my peers took the advice and began trying to make themselves look presentable while others gossiped nervously about how the sorting was done. I myself instead turned to look behind the crowd since I knew that soon enough the ghosts of the castle would be making their appearance. The ghosts always interested me when reading the books because it was never truly explained how they came about other than the obvious that they died at some point. Like most magical phenomena, that explanation left much unsaid, but unfortunately the books nor movies ever gave more detail on the matter. One hope of mine was to possibly understand the state of existence that was a ghost fully as one who had passed through the veil of death himself. What made me different from these ghosts exactly? Why did I get a second chance and they instead get bound to the earth in a cold incorporeal state? Perhaps a lofty piece of information to seek, but wizards seemed particularly capable to research the nature of the soul from the book, so it shouldn't be an unattainable aspiration. Soon enough the ghosts did indeed appear just as the book said, from the walls behind the group. There were cries of shock and fear from those that noticed them first, which drew the rest of my peers' attention. Pearly white and slightly transparent, about 20 ghosts glided across the area, hardly paying any of us any attention as they argued about something. "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." One particularly robust figure in an old friar's robe went to say. "My dear friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name and you know he's not even really a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" Another ghost wearing a ruff and tights said, only to pause as he noticed us first years. Nobody answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling around at us all. "About to be sorted, I suppose?" he asked, and a few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff, my old house, you know," he said brightly. "Move along now. The sorting ceremony is about to start." McGonagall spoke up firmly as she returned. The ghosts moved through the air before going through the wall nearby at this. "Now, form a line and follow me," McGonagall said firmly before turning and walking away. My peers and I all did as instructed, with me taking up the rear of the line so I could have slightly more time to look over everything. From what I knew, the order of the sorting went alphabetically based on one's last name, so I was going to be one of the first people sorted and thus wanted to make up for this fact by entering the Great Hall itself last. When the doors to the Great Hall opened I wasted no time at all extending my observation Hackey to the widest extent I could to take in as much as possible. I keenly noticed that Harry Potter himself seemed to stiffen slightly when I did, as he might have felt my Hackey pass over him. Sharp instincts it seems, I thought before ignoring that. The walls of the Great Hall had a dull thrum of magic in them, and up above magic flowed through the very air itself in my perception. The many lit candles floating up above our heads and ceiling that matched the sky outside the castle made the why of that obvious. What wasn't so obvious, as far as I could tell from how everyone else was acting, was that the entire hall was filled with wild, intense magical energy. It was fairly easy to deduce the why of this as well. All the people here. One had to remember that it was common knowledge that the magic of wizards and witches was unstable during the time it awakens until around their 17th year of life. This hall was full of people in that exact unstable period, and as it was the start of term their emotions must be quite turbulent, causing some magic to radiate off them, even if it was only a little, with many people doing it all at once added up. I had to admit the founders were quite clever, as I could pick up on the slow but steady absorption of this energy into the very walls of the Great Hall. Even an idiot could understand that this was likely a key part of how the castle had lasted so long. This energy likely went towards the maintenance of the castle itself via its enchantments, or perhaps even fueled the wards that covered the massive area. These were just theories, of course, as I couldn't prove any of it at the moment, but I had 7 full years here, so it shouldn't be too hard. 35. The sorting ceremony. The line came to a stop and I paid attention to the end of the great hall that had the teacher's table as well as a podium for speeches. In front of even that, however, was a simple wooden stool that a ragged, dirty old pointed hat sat with wrinkles that formed a roughly face-like shape. Dumbledore stood up at the podium and once we first years were in place began his speech. Soon you shall all be sorted into your houses and begin your journey to magical mastery. Those in your house shall be your friends, your family and your classmates for the next 7 years. I welcome you all to Hogwarts and wish each of you a happy next 7 years. The old man said loudly before stepping down to give McGonagall the floor to speak. When your name is called, sit upon the stool and wait to be sorted before joining your house's table, she said succinctly. The hat then began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise Ravenclaw if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. The hat finished its song and everyone clapped in appreciation of the interesting spectacle. McGonagall stepped forward with a scroll of parchment and spoke firmly. When I call your name you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. She then paused to look at the scroll. Abbott, Hannah. She called out the first name. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line. She put on the hat which fell right down in front of her eyes and then sat down. There was a moment's pause before the hat spoke in a loud voice that echoed in the hall. Hufflepuff. Of the 4 long tables that sat the house's students, the one on the left middle of the hall from the doors cheered and clapped as the girl took off the hat and moved to join them. The next few names went similarly but for different names and houses. Bones, Susan. Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry. Ravenclaw. Brocklehurst, Mandy. Ravenclaw. Brown, Lavender. Gryffindor. Bulstrode, Millicent, Slytherin. Corner, Michael. Ravenclaw. Crabbe, Vincent. Slytherin. Finally came my turn, as there simply was only 2 with a last name starting with AC, so it went to D. Drake, Alexander. McGonagall said firmly, and I calmly stepped out from my spot at the end of the line. Amongst all my peers there was one that appeared utterly flabbergasted by my name. A boy with short white blonde hair that was oiled back and had narrow aristocratic features and grey eyes, one Draco Malfoy. His confusion was beyond amusing to me and I even winked playfully at him as I passed by. My last name and his first name were so similar that it was no wonder that he had mentally error-messaged. Not that he could be blamed since he was named after the constellation Draco, which had in turn been named because of its similarity to a dragon. My name ironically was just a pseudonym of the word dragon, and thus it was a whole big jumble of coincidences all colliding at once. As I approached the stool and the range of my Hackey reached the professors, the vast majority of them flinched in unison. I got what I wanted, however, as I had felt the magical power they exuded, and as a result a rough estimation of their power in comparison to my own, minus skill of course. I was hopelessly outmatched, to put it bluntly. Not every professor was as strong as the others in terms of pure magical energy, but that didn't matter as each and every one of them outstripped my own magical energy by a massive amount. Dumbledore was by far the worst, however. If my magical energy was a match, most of the professors had campfires and Dumbledore had a bonfire. Just as fast as my Hackey had swept over them, however, I had retracted it, so besides making all of them focus more intensively thinking there was something that set off their instincts about me, they found nothing. It was a bit like immediately noticing when someone was looking at you and turning to find out who, but several times more intense. In this case they knew the who but not the why of their instincts reacting like that. I sat on the stool with the hat on and it spoke quietly and with a very conflicted tone. You're a tricky one, aren't you? Clever, witty, ambitious, and loyal. If it weren't for the way things have been recently, I might have thought you a perfect fit for Slytherin. That fellow would have loved you. It said honestly. I shook my head. Can't do Slytherin, would alienate me from a good part of my potential customer base. I said firmly. There's nothing wrong with greed, but be sure you don't overestimate your means. Better be Ravenclaw. The hat finally said, and my robe's finer details took on the colors of the house, blue and bronze. I grinned at this and took the hat off before heading for my new house's table. Hello, I'm Terry. A boy said with a friendly smile as I walked to the table. Terry Boot was a pale-skinned, freckle-faced boy with blue eyes and brown hair and a slightly chubby face. Not fat but more stocky in build. So far he was also fairly easy to get along with, but I chose to reserve judgment until enough time passed. 36. Feast. I'm Mike. The dark-haired boy next to Terry introduced himself more cautiously. Alex. I said calmly in response before listening to the rest of the sorting. Finch, Fletchley, Justin. Hufflepuff. Finnegan, Seamus. Gryffindor. Goldstein, Anthony. Ravenclaw. Goyle, Gregory. Slytherin. Granger, Hermione. McGonagall called, drawing my attention. Unlike the two boys before her, Hermione was plot important and more than that had seen me use magic that could change her mind about what house to go in. It was more or less implied that she was perfectly in between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw in the books, with the hat deferring to her to choose in the end. In the books she said she chose Gryffindor because it was the house of Dumbledore, who was considered the greatest white wizard. After personally seeing me cast higher year magic, however, I was curious if this change would cause her choice to change as well. She sat on the stool with the hat on her head and things got awkward as the hat remained silent to everyone but her for a good 5 minutes before speaking. Gryffindor. The hat called and her robes shifted colors. As expected, my interference wasn't enough. I thought both satisfied and a little disappointed. Satisfied because canon was still on track, more or less still, and disappointed because it would have been interesting to see how Hermione would change in Ravenclaw. Still, I didn't care enough to dwell on the matter and watched the rest of the first years get sorted. I ignored most of the remaining names and the houses they got put in until the main courses arrived. First up was Malfoy, who looked downright pleased with the result of him getting put into Slytherin, but considering his home life that was to be expected. Next up was Mr. Main Character himself, Harry Potter. The boy was thin to an unhealthy degree and pale from a lack of sunlight in his life, with beaten-up glasses on his face over his green eyes. He had short messy brown hair and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, as the whispers about him started immediately after his name was called. The hat had furrowed brows at this one, and I wasn't surprised since the hat saw great potential for both Slytherin and Gryffindor in Harry according to the books. An interesting theory from my previous life was that Harry's potential in Slytherin actually came from the soul fragment in his head as it belonged to Voldemort. I couldn't say for sure since I was no expert on the subject of Horcruxes or souls, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that were the case given the corruptive influence the souls had on their housing objects in the books. When Harry was eventually sorted into Gryffindor, though, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding in relief. I knew why this moment had me so focused too, as it would be hard not to. But despite saying I had no care for canon, the fact was I didn't like uncertainty. Any large change in canon that happened would cause many unexpected and potentially problematic things. Once I started my business in this world, canon was bound to get fucked sideways anyways, so I would prefer not to have to deal with a change unrelated to my actions just yet. By unrelated I of course mean things I did directly rather than the indirect results of them. I refuse to think about that or I might go mad from stress. Anyways, the Gryffindor table went wild with joy and pride at Harry's placement in that house. This was understandable given the boy's importance and reputation in the magical world. After that was Ron Weasley's turn, followed by Blaise Zabinai's turn to be sorted, Gryffindor and Slytherin respectively. Dumbledore rose from his seat with a joyful expression and wide arms as he addressed everyone. Welcome, welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak, thank you, he said before sitting back down while everyone clapped and cheered. The moment the man had finished speaking, food manifested above all the tables in great proportions. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausage, bacon, steak, boiled cabbage, coleslaw, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and oddly enough peppermint humbugs. The sheer variety of food was nearly overwhelming, and I wasted no time at all helping myself. I grabbed a helping of boiled cabbage, lamb chops, gravy and fries and dug in eagerly. The food was well made and fresh, making the meal nice. Dear God's man, slow down. It's not going to run away. I chastised Terry, who was practically not chewing his food at the speed he was eating it. Bugger off. My mom says I'm a growing boy and need to eat as much as I can, he retorted with a grin. Keep it up and you'll grow just as big at the waist as you are tall. Mike chimed in and we laughed. Yes, I quite like these two so far. They kind of reminded me of Whitebeard with how carefree they are. Terry was more boisterous of the two, with Mike being more reserved but still casual. Soon enough though, all the main course foods vanished along with the plates and silverware we used to eat them, only to be replaced with clean dishes and various desserts. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor imaginable, apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, jam donuts, trifle, strawberries, jello, rice pudding and other desserts. Even after his ravenous consumption of the main dishes, Terry tore into the desserts eagerly. Any idea what the schedule is like? Mike asked while chewing through an eclair. We know as much as you do till we check the post board, an older guy said from nearby with a shrug. 37, feast wrapping up. What do you mean? Mike asked the senior student curiously. The first and second years have set shared schedules that get posted on the board in the common room, since these 2 years are for getting you all to a decent skill and comfortability with classes. The third year and beyond though things change as you start your elective classes like care of magical beasts or divination. Your schedules are individualized as a result since obviously not everyone will be interested in the same subjects. Well except divination but that's basically a free class credit. The senior explained helpfully. True divination takes talent to learn doesn't it? I asked dropping a not-so-subtle hint to Terry and Mike not to get any funny ideas. Look I get it everyone thinks that if they take the class they might learn to predict the future but even in the books it was made abundantly clear that the subject was not something you could actually learn without innate talent. Talent that neither of them were mentioned having or anyone else for that matter beyond Trelawney herself. Grindelwald was said to have the gift as well but he was locked away in Nurmengard until Voldemort killed him towards the end of the series. Speaking of the Dark Lord before Voldemort I wasn't sure what to make of him honestly. From his ideals and methods he sounded like a charismatic but extreme visionary revolutionary. The books didn't really cover him much and the history of magic textbook only briefly mentions his feats and ideals. The funny thing is that he wasn't actually wrong in his beliefs. See, he believed that if Muggles were allowed to continue growing scientifically they'd not only discover the magical side of things but eventually go to war with it, a war the magical side would definitely lose. I'm not a pessimist but anyone with any tactical capability could see it. Wizards are outnumbered thousands to one and need years of training to be a decent threat. Muggles though? A single pull of a trigger or push of a button could kill a wizard or level a city. The fact of the matter is that only a handful of wizards in history had an equivalent level of power and even then it was far from effortless. As proud as wizards were of having magic we were hilariously and hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. As for if we would end up at war with the Muggles that was a harder to say matter. Personally I thought the chances of it were low given the sheer amount of love the books received back during my previous life. That said I wasn't stupid enough to dismiss the possibility outright as humans do have a rather long history of being unnecessarily violent or suppressive to other races and cultures. Much less said about the idea of magic being the biggest difference the better. The senior student nodded. Yeah, Professor Trelawney says so right at the start of her first class. Still the class is popular since so long as you show actual effort earning an E or O isn't hard at all. He said casually. The desert vanishes leaving clean tables and Dumbledore stands up and walks to the podium again. Ahem, just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all students. A few of our older students would do well to remember that as well. He said before briefly pausing to pointedly stare at the two red-headed twins on the Gryffindor table. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of term. Anyone interested in playing for their house team should contact Madam Hooch. And finally I must tell you that this year the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. He said that last part particularly sternly. There were whispers immediately across the hall about that piece of news but I had to inwardly hold back a scoff at the open-faced trap. Anyone familiar with the first year in the books could tell you that this was a not-so-subtle manipulation by the old man towards Voldemort on the back of Quirrell's head. Besides the first and second to last traps in said area the rest were all more or less harmless if you weren't a total idiot as a student and even then not truly lethal either. The two I mentioned though were lethal even for most adult wizards without a shadow of a doubt. The first was the Cerberus guarding the trapdoor entrance to the second trap. Having read through Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them I knew for a fact that Cerberus as a whole were not just giant three-headed dogs but powerful magical beasts almost on par with dragons in terms of danger. The only reason their rating was lower was because they like most dogs could be trained not to attack indiscriminately and even taught to guard things. The second to last trap was according to the books a single mountain troll. Once again a very strong and dangerous magical creature but this time savage and too stupid to train for the most part and not afraid to kill anyone and everyone if they felt like it. The most dangerous trap of all however was the final one, though not deadly exactly, the Mirror of Erised. This ancient magical artifact had the most dangerous of properties in that it showed you your heart's desire. This sounds simple and easy to ignore but the fact was the mirror could drive anyone without a firm will to madness as they saw the very things they craved above all else just there in front of them, yet outside their grasp. 38. Dangerous Plan and End of Day. It was this one artifact that made this plan of Dumbledore's so dangerous not for Voldemort but the students of the school. Few if any will have the sort of will or mindset to break free from the draw of the mirror and curiosity was both a terrible and beautiful thing. Should any of them manage to get through the rest of the traps as Harry and his friends did in the books they'd likely be mentally broken messes by the time anyone found them in front of that mirror. To be fair however the mirror wasn't yet in the final chamber of that series of traps but in an abandoned classroom somewhere not quite specified in the books or movies. The theories from before I died were that it was there so Dumbledore could modify the enchantment to actually house the Philosopher's Stone but make it impossible to retrieve unless you had no desire to use it. Despite the value of the stone however I myself didn't want it or rather I didn't want to make a play for it. The protections around the stone from the books mean there is a very small window that I might be able to grab it in but even then I doubted it was possible. The reason for this doubt was simple, the books tell of the story from Harry's point of view for the majority of the time and thus the hidden things you never knew about were countless. I highly doubted that Dumbledore, being the clever old coot he is, would not leave some sort of warning system in place if anyone made a pass at the stone and return immediately. Additionally, the sheer fact the stone could be shattered by Harry was suspicious enough to make me wary. Others may not know, but I did since I had searched out the treasure in the system shop. The stone was stronger than diamond. You expect me to believe an 11-year-old could just smash such a thing into pieces, barehanded? Ridiculous. More likely than not the stone was a fake and not even worth going after. Anyways, Dumbledore went on to leading everyone on through the Hogwarts school song, and I can say for certain I did not sing along because Jesus Christ was it terrible. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts. Teach us something please. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff. For now they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we've forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest. And learn until our brains all rot. The fact everyone actually singing did so at their own speed and tone did not make it better, but oh so much worse. Dumbledore ended the song when the final voices, the twins, quieted and clapped with a sigh. Ah, music. A magic beyond all we do here. And now bedtime. Off you trot. He said before dismissing us with a wave of his hand. Ravenclaw first years with me. An older male student of African descent with a metal badge of his chest spoke up firmly as the rest of the older students went ahead by themselves. Our common room is at the top of Ravenclaw Tower behind a specially enchanted knocker. In order to enter you have to solve the riddle it asks you. Once you do, the door opens. Now follow me so I can show you the way. Be sure to remember it, or if you forget, ask the portraits for directions, as they are usually more than happy to guide students in need. The prefect said calmly as he walked. The halls of the castle were all made of the same dull-colored stone with elegant archways and many torches and hanging lights to brighten the way. On the walls were a vast amount of portraits that amazingly moved and could even seemingly think and respond. We passed many closed doors as well that the prefect told us were storage rooms or even empty classrooms with no purpose. There were also medieval armors standing at attention with weapons that if you paid close enough attention to you'd notice shift slightly or even turn their head pieces to watch you back. Soon enough though we arrived at the famous moving staircase of Hogwarts. The staircase was in truth a series of staircases that moved seemingly at random to allow access to different floors and hallways in the castle. It was located in a very large vertical area that was no doubt the massive cylindrical tower visible from outside the castle in its center. The prefect casually walked up one of the staircases after it moved into place, and all 8 of us followed nervously. Not to worry, the staircases might seem like they move randomly, but you'll find they have a pattern once you get used to it. The prefect said reassuringly as the staircase we were on moved. The staircase soon connected to another that we got on before that staircase stopped in front of a specific hallway that I noticed had a bronze eagle head at the top of the archway for. A small detail, but one that would prove invaluable for learning my way around. Landmarks were important for a reason. The hallway had many windows that let the moonlight shine through as we walked its length. At the end of the hallway there was a split path with 3 options. The prefect went to the left, which after walking through yet another hallway though shorter and narrower we reached a winding staircase. This is Ravenclaw Tower, which has our common room at the top. The prefect explained as he walked up the stairs. The entrance to the common room was not even close to being secretive at all. The entire top of the tower had bronze eagle statues lining its blue and white star-patterned walls, with a massive eagle's head statue sitting on a large wooden door in plain view. If you feed me I thrive, but give me water and I die. What am I? The eagle head on the door asked firmly. Any one of you want to give it a try? The prefect asked with a smile. The answer's either a Venus flytrap or fire. I said casually and kinda bored since this riddle was easy. Well reasoned, welcome. The eagle head said before the door swung open. 39, schedule. Why a Venus flytrap? Fire makes sense, but I don't get that one. Terry asked confused. Venus flytraps are carnivorous plants, and unlike most plants get most of their moisture not from the soil but in the form of dew or rain. Water them regularly and all you accomplish is drowning the poor plant, thus killing it. The prefect answered for me surprisingly enough. That does qualify for the riddle I suppose, not the first answer you'd think of though. Mike said. Yeah, but even I have to applaud the answer, it's bloody brilliant. The prefect said, clearly pleased. From there the prefect led us into the doorway that opened up into a wide well-furnished area. There was a fireplace with a warm gentle flame burning within it and several couches and tables with chairs. Along the far left side of the room was a large bookshelf covering the whole wall with various books on it. Next to the entrance was a massive sculpture of a pretty woman in robes wearing an ornate diadem that had the inscription, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure, Rowena Ravenclaw herself." The rest of the common room had banners of our house and a few knickknacks like an old globe or ancient coin collection in a glass case. In the center of the room however a small man about 3 feet tall with a wrinkled but kind face stood patiently. Good evening children. I am Professor Phileas Flitwick, your head of house as well as the Master of Charms here in Hogwarts. Now before you go shuffling to your rooms I feel a few things need to be addressed. First, as some of you no doubt noticed, Ravenclaw has the unique privilege of having a private selection of books. These tomes were chosen not for merely their academic aid but for those who wish to learn beyond the scope covered in your textbooks or classes. he said, motioning to the large bookshelf. I raised my hand. Yes, Alexander. Flitwick said curiously. I prefer Alex. But my question is if alchemy is included in the shelves tomes. I asked without hesitation. Oh ho, that may be a fair bit beyond you at the moment. May I ask why you wish to know? He asked, not directly shooting my question down but trying to understand why I wanted to know. Perhaps it's just a vain hope, but with Dumbledore in the school I can't think of a better opportunity to learn the art fully, and I have learned it's not usually offered as a course at the 3rd year or beyond unless demand is high enough. Self-study is the only option left. I answered honestly since I had no reason to hide my interest in the subject. Marvelous. 5 points to Ravenclaw for the brilliant initiative. I look forward to seeing your performance in class, young Alex. But your research is correct. Alchemy is not offered unless demand is high enough, as the subject is quite pricey to learn. While I can appreciate your eagerness to jump right into the subject in self-study, I can say with certainty that you don't reach the minimum requirement for studying the subject. He said seriously. What do you mean? I asked with a frown. Alchemy, even in its most basic form, requires a level of mastery in charms, transfiguration, potions and ancient runes that only a 3rd-year student might have. I can't in good conscience suggest self-study for now. However, I give my word that if you can show me the proper level of mastery in the named subjects at any time, I will personally tutor you on the subject. He promised sincerely. I nodded in agreement and didn't push for more, since even if I hadn't gotten quite what I wanted, I did still get a very important piece of information. See, the thing about alchemy books is they tend to make the assumption you already have a certain level of knowledge and skill in certain subjects and thus don't specify what those subjects are or what level that is. Flitwick just told me exactly that knowledge. This was the benefit of a teacher compared to a book. Important context. Truthfully, I already had a sneaking suspicion about the potioneering skill needed as well as the ancient runes, but knowing the full set made me breath of a sigh of relief for not attempting to study the subject over the summer. Where was I? Ah yes. The next order of business is the post board. Flitwick said as he walked over to the right side of the doorway where a large board was hung up that was mostly empty for the moment save a single piece of parchment. Pointing at it, he continued, this parchment contains your schedule for this term. Geminio. He said, casting a spell that caused the parchment to double before doubling again and again until there were enough copies to go around. 6:30 a.m., 8:30 a.m., breakfast, 9 a.m., 12 p.m., classes, 12 p.m., 1 p.m., lunch, 1 p.m., 4 p.m., classes, 6 p.m., 8 p.m., dinner, 9 p.m., 6 a.m., curfew. This was the general schedule for every day except Saturday and Sunday that were off days minus an hour of flying class. The astronomy classes were the only exception since there was no point in studying the stars during the day. The first set of classes we had were charms and then herbology for the day after tomorrow. After that it was history of magic and data, then transfiguration, herbology, then astrology at night after dinner. Then charms again with history of magic and then double potions on Friday. The schedule left plenty of time for free study and homework since classes only lasted a total of 6 hours, and with the weekends off I'd easily have the time I needed to deal with the ROR and rapidly improve my magic skills this year. 40. Exploring. Finally, I must reinforce Albus's warning about the 3rd floor corridor. While curiosity is a wondrous thing, in this case it's best left well enough alone. That is all. Welcome to Ravenclaw once more. Flitwick said warmly before leaving. The prefect spoke up. Through that door is the male dormitories and through that door is the female dormitories. You are all quite lucky that as due to the majority of people being sorted into Gryffindor or Hufflepuff, each of you have a single room to yourselves due to having many more rooms than students in the house. Slytherin has a similar setup. The doors of your rooms would have your name written on it. I suggest going to bed immediately to fully utilize your time tomorrow in familiarizing yourself with the castle. He said, pointing out the doors leading to the rooms and then promptly leaving. I'm headed to bed then. I announced before following the prefect through the door to the male dormitory. I didn't even need Hackey to know there was magic involved here, as the spiral staircase had doors lining its outside that led to different rooms. I found the one with my name on it and turned the handle before stepping in. The room was circular with a space of about 10 meters in all directions and a 5-meter tall ceiling. There was a single window looking out across the top of the school facing the central tower. The room's furnishing consisted of a large plain dresser, a wooden nightstand with 2 drawers and a single large bed covered in a blue and bronze comforter blanket. My trunk sat neatly at the foot of my bed with a small basket next to it for my laundry. Quaint but in need of decoration, I thought with a shrug as I slipped off my shoes at the door and set them neatly next to it. I walked across the room in my socks and carefully started to strip off my school uniform. I highly doubted I was expected to sleep in it after all. I folded it and set it on top of my dresser before opening a drawer and walking over to my trunk. I moved my clothes from my trunk to the dresser while setting my books out on my nightstand for easy access. Colloportus, I said with a twist of my wand at the door, remotely locking it. Satisfied, I changed into my pajama bottoms before moving the blanket and top sheet aside on the bed to slip in and cover up. I easily fell asleep as I had already broken my usual sleep pattern and I felt it. I woke to the sun rising slowly above the horizon and stretched, causing my joints to pop pleasantly as I got out of bed. Walking over to the dresser, I got me a pair of pants, a shirt, and my coat. I decided to skip my morning exercise and unlocked my room before setting out to explore the castle. I briefly debated about going to see Hagrid about these eggs I had, but decided against it for now, as it would be beyond suspicious if I did so on the first day of school. By my estimation, I would only be roughly safe to do so around the 1st of October. To my surprise, I wasn't the first up, as in the common room several senior students were already awake and chatting or playing wizard chess. Wizard chess was like if normal chess met Battlefield Command. The moves were the same, but the pieces themselves were semi-alive and could actively move themselves and even try and help the one commanding them in terms of strategy. Additionally, you needed to treat the pieces well or they'd turn resentful and may even disobey orders. I myself wasn't all that interested in the game, as it was just chess with extra magical flair. None of my year's students seemed to be up though, which clearly caught the older students by surprise. More than one looked me over for a moment before deciding they didn't really care and went back to their business. I wasted no time at all, leaving the common room and heading down the stairs to explore the castle. I checked the 2 hallways the prefect passed the night before and found one led to the Great Clock Tower's upper level and the second was more or less abandoned with no important rooms as far as I could tell. A bit disappointing but not surprising given the sheer size of the school. The castle simply had too much space that was never used since there was no need. I wouldn't even be surprised to find that there were priceless artifacts just sitting in a room gathering dust since no one bothered checking the things. I moved back to the grand staircase and proceeded to get thoroughly confused as I took the first set I got the chance to that ended up taking me all the way to the 7th floor. Wasn't planning to visit the room, but went on the 7th floor, I guess. I thought with a shrug as I started checking the place out carefully. "Hey, you there, first year?" A voice called out as I was looking at a display case with a Diricol skeleton in it. I turned towards the source of the sound only to find it was a small portrait of a red-haired man carrying a sword while wearing shiny armor. "Did you say something just now?" I asked, confused. Obviously, I was making my rounds and happened to spot you way over here and had to know what was going on. The man in the portrait said with a bright grin. "I'm exploring the castle on my free day before classes start, of course. Noticed a slight bit of scuffing on the floor by this display and wondered if there was a secret here. What about you?" I said honestly. Being a portrait can be boring, so I like to stretch my legs every now and again. "Good eye, by the way, rub the beak and you'll see." The portrait said, still grinning. I saw no reason why not and reached out carefully into the display and gently rubbed the beak of the skeleton. Almost immediately the skeleton shook itself and squawked loudly before the whole display slides to the side to reveal a small metal hoop stuck straight into stone at the floor. "Now pull the hoop outwards and then up." The portrait instructed eagerly and I followed the instructions, intrigued. 41. Treasure trove. I pulled the hoop and to my surprise the stone of the wall seemed to stretch with it and I lifted it after that, watching as a door appeared out of nowhere with the hoop sitting at its top. "Well, go on lad, open it up," the portrait encouraged. Pulling the handle of the door, it swung open with a small rush of dusty air coming to smack me in the face, making me cough. Waving my sleeve to clear the air, I soon was able to breathe normally as the dust started to settle. Walking into the room, I was surprised by what I found. Besides dust and darkness, I could see various items of different types. Limos. I spoke. A bright white glow rose from the tip of my wand that I had drawn out. "Hides, books, weapons, armors and vials of stuff. What is all this?" I thought curiously as I walked through the clearly forgotten room. "Magnificent, isn't it? This room houses various trophies I collected in life when I taught here at Hogwarts," the portrait said proudly as he appeared on a dusty canvas in the room. "Who are you?" I could help but wonder out loud. "Sir Arnold Gervain, at your service." In life I admired Godric Gryffindor and sought to copy his life as best I could, hence my appearance. Towards the end of my life I even taught Transfiguration and left my collection here for future generations of young wizards and witches to find. He spoke with a nostalgic smile. "Is that why you told me about this place?" I asked and he laughed awkwardly. "Well, in truth it was a coincidence. I had actually forgotten about this place until I spotted you snooping about the display it was hidden behind. I happened to be patrolling nearby as well, so I could let you rediscover this old pile of history," he said honestly. I ignored the rest and moved to the books neatly lined on the small bookshelf against the wall to the right of the doorway. I frowned however as I not only couldn't understand the titles on the covers but the language they were written in was totally foreign to me. As expected of a Ravenclaw, drawn immediately to the books. Unless you are well learnt in Old Germanic and Greek, you'll be unable to learn much from those. I myself never read them while I was alive but kept them as trophies from when I raided the grave robbers that desecrated Gryffindor's tomb. I was taken to believe they were tomes belonging to the founder himself that he was buried with. Same applies to that sheath on the wall there," he said, motioning to the silver and gem-encrusted sheath mounted on the wall at the side of the room. "I'm surprised you didn't try and get the matching sword," I said, genuinely shocked to see the sheath. In the books the sword itself was housed in the sorting hat and it was widely believed that it didn't have a shatha, but in truth that was ridiculous. Gryffindor was famous for wielding the sword and carrying it with him everywhere, and it made no sense he'd do that using a bloody hat of all things to keep it. This was one of those things that the books left unexplained but that in a real world like this made perfect sense. Naturally, a special sword like that also had an equally special sheath to complement it. Appraising the sheath proved this immediately. Item name, Sheath of Gryffindor. Class, Treasure. Value, 200,000 system coins, 2 million system coins if paired with the Sword of Gryffindor. Condition, excellent. Description, the matching sheath to the legendary Sword of Gryffindor. Crafted by master goblin smiths to house and feed the magic of the sword. Made of goblin silver and mithril and encrusted with mana-conducting gems, this sheath adapts to his paired blade to maintain perfect storage conditions while slowly feeding the blade the ambient mana, strengthening it. I had to stop my jaw from cracking the floor with how hard it dropped at that appraisal. Forget the description, my eyes were glued to the value of this thing. 200,000 coins by itself, or 10 times that with the sword as well. To put that into perspective, that was enough to buy out some really unfair abilities from the shop, markup be damned. Unfortunately, I wasn't nearly foolish enough to try and sell the sheath or sword at the earliest time possible. Canon really needed the sword around for at least a few more years, so until that time passed I couldn't take the thing next year when Harry drew it out of the hat. I tried while I was alive, but besides finding out only a true Gryffindor in need could draw the blade from the hat, I never got even a glance at the blade. Still, I did at least manage to have a similar enough blade forged by the goblins, if inferior to the true Sword of Gryffindor in all ways. He said, seeming to not notice my loss of composure or simply deciding it was appropriate and ignoring it. I looked around eagerly at that, however, and quickly found the sword in question. It was a 1.5-hand silver arming sword, 4 feet in length from point to pommel, with a cross guard that held 2 sapphires at the ends and a large emerald at the center of the pommel that was enclosed around it. The blade was sheathed in a silver ornate sheath with 3 emeralds and a ruby carefully encrusted into its face. Appraising it, I had to admit the portrait was right about it being inferior. Item name, Sword and Sheath of Arnold Gervain. Class, Treasure. Value, 20,000 system coins. Condition, excellent. Description, the sword and matching sheath to the wizard Arnold Gervain. Crafted by master goblin smiths in a failed attempt to replicate the Sword of Gryffindor. Made of goblin silver and mithril and encrusted with mana-conducting gems, this sword and sheath has all the material properties of the Sword of Gryffindor but lacks the refined potential of a magical catalyst due to a loss in the techniques that forged Gryffindor's sword originally. 42. Divine Artifact. Is the loss of the magical catalyst potential really that severe? I pondered with a frown as I looked at the weapon. It was hard to understand, as even the description said that this weapon had all the same material properties and as a result should have been a match for the Sword of Gryffindor, or at least close in value. Yet the lack of that one feature had its value being a fraction of Gryffindor's blade. I decided to look into this a bit further, as if nothing else this would help me in understanding how treasures were valued by the system. It looks like a fine blade, so why do you say it is inferior to Gryffindor's? I asked curiously. Gryffindor's blade not only had the ability to use the wielder's magic much like a wand, but it also took the goblin silver's ability to imbue itself with materials that strengthen it to a new level. The blade could absorb the user's skill with a blade as well as other traits and pass them to another wielder temporarily. To say it simply, the weapon could in theory allow the one using it to not only match Gryffindor's own skill with a blade but even exceed it exponentially for however many previous wielders the blade had. Mine cannot do that, he said with a reluctant sigh. By comparison, yours is just a normal goblin silver-made weapon then, a fine one but no more than that. I said with understanding, and he nodded. Quite so, unfortunately. He agreed. And what about the rest of this stuff? I asked curiously. That. Trophies from my travels, as I said. Hide from a Nemean lioness, hydra blood and venom, Hebridean black horns and scales, Leviathan liver oil, Kraken ink. My most interesting trophy, however, is that spear over in the case there. Highly powerful and unnaturally sharp, but beyond that I could never figure out what it did, he said, introducing his trophies proudly. I walked over to the long dust-caked case and popped the latch to open it. Inside was a spear with a long smooth white wooden shaft and golden spearhead at the end. It was certainly beautiful but otherwise didn't look all that special, until I scanned it with my Hackey. I stiffened immediately as my perception caught the hurricane of magical energy quietly curled in this thing. Calling it boundless would be inaccurate, but not by much. This weapon had more magical energy within it than I have ever felt from anything else before, even Dumbledore himself. I couldn't help but appraise it out of curiosity, but nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered. Item name, Zeus's Thunderbolt. Class, Treasure. Value, 50 million system coins. Condition, perfect, indestructible. Description, the spear of the wizard King Zeus himself. Said to have been forged of lightning itself, this weapon served as both the source of Zeus's mastery of the sky and his symbol of power. Its haft is made of wood hewn from a great white oak struck by lightning 7 times without perishing. Its head of the lost magical metal celestial gold. Carved into every inch of this weapon are runes of containment, control, growth and sky at such microscopic levels there are millions of them. This weapon houses the magical power that Zeus stored within it every day since its creation and serves as a powerful magical catalyst for lightning and atmospheric spells, sealed away until a worthy wielder is found to inherit its previous owner's power. If the sheath of Gryffindor's sword had my jaw on the floor, this thing caused my mind to short-circuit for a moment. That description was frankly insane. Let's put aside the fact this thing belonged to Zeus of all people for a moment and cover the weapon itself instead. White oak struck by lightning 7 bloody times without dying is already unreasonably rare, statistically very unlikely at best. That lost celestial gold medal was a whole other kind of BS. There was literally no telling what that was capable of since it was a lost medal and probably didn't even have very many records surviving of it to this day. Then there were the millions of runes carved at a microscopic level all over the bloody thing. I had no clue how that was even possible at this point, not a single damn clue in fact. The uses for the weapon were also frankly insane as well. Not only was it a melee weapon but it also doubled as a wand more or less. One that was especially good at lightning spells or literally changing the weather. At the top of this massive pile of BS though was the fact the damn thing held the massive stored magic of Zeus himself waiting to be accessed by a worthy wielder, whatever the hell that meant. Once my brain rebooted I eagerly reached out and plucked the spear from the case. It was surprisingly light all things considered, like holding a book almost but more spread out. The thing was longer than I was tall, probably about 2 meters in length I'd guess. Holding it with both hands the thing gave off no strange feeling so I likely didn't possess whatever quality the thing looked for to determine if one was worthy or not. That said I had something that Zeus definitely hadn't counted on when he set up that seal, Conqueror's Hackey. Focusing my will as tightly as I could on the spear between my hands I fully unleashed my Hackey on it and felt an immediate reaction. For all of a split second I felt like I was holding the entire sky in my control, until I was blasted backwards. Pain, agony really filled my body as I awoke. I whimpered as I tried to open my eyes only to discover half my vision gone, not blurry or distorted, gone. I was in an unfamiliar place with white curtains surrounding my bed and air that smelled of herbs and sterilizer. I went to sit up only to almost scream as pain racked my body, especially my hands that I tried to use to sit up. Gritting my teeth I moved my arms from my side into the air in front of my face to look at them. Thick bandages were wrapped around both of them like mummification all the way up to my elbows. Moving any of my fingers sent a burning pain through me like fire having taken residence under my skin there. Sighing and relaxing to let my arms rest at my sides again I turned my head to look around and to my surprise right next to my bed leaning against the nightstand is the spear. I admit my first thought was an almost overwhelming desire to sell the damn thing to my system for causing me so much pain but my rational mind immediately picked up on something wrong with the situation. If I was in the hospital wing then why was the thing that put me here left right next to me? 43. Inheritances and damage. Author note: so before anyone jumps down my throat sideways about this chapter 1 want to clarify something. Yes, he is really badly injured. No, it was not something that came out of nowhere. It's been hinted at quite a few times that he was getting cocky and overconfident. I wasn't surprised that I was in the hospital wing as the portrait had likely hurried to find help after I did something I admit might not have been the smartest. What I was surprised about was the fact the spear was brought with me and not confiscated as the dangerous artifact it is. That was until I noticed something rather unusual, a sort of mental connection at the back of my mind pointed right at the damn thing. Oh, you have got to be shitting me. I won its allegiance and still got toasted. I mentally raged. It was beyond annoying to even think about. Like in any other situation I might be beyond the moon with joy. But in this case I was severely injured and even partially crippled it seemed like. Before my mind could tear itself apart because of conflicting emotions the sound of footsteps rang through the still air and the curtain to my bed was pulled aside to reveal Dumbledore, Flitwick and an unfamiliar older woman I wasn't familiar with but assumed to be Madame Pomfrey. Ah, I see you have woken up. I must admit I was quite shocked when Professor Gervain's portrait came seeking aid after a student suffered an accident. Not as much of a shock as you yourself from what I am told however. Dumbledore said trying to bring humor to the situation. I was not amused. This is no joking matter Albus. The woman who I assumed was Pomfrey scolded the man sternly. Of course Pomona, I merely thought a touch of humor might raise the spirits is all. Dumbledore said placatingly. Alex, can you tell us exactly what happened? We know from Professor Gervain's portrait that you picked up the spear and then it seemed to detonate but the only theory we have as to why is not one we wish to entertain until we hear your side of the incident. Flitwick said seriously. I collected my thoughts before speaking. There's not much more to the story I'm afraid Professor. I picked up the spear to examine it closer and I had the illusion of holding the entirety of the sky in the palm of my hand before the pain came and then I woke up here. I said mostly honestly. It would seem our fears have been confirmed. Even in misfortune there is a stroke of luck. You young Alex have been subjected to an ancient wizard's inheritance test and been found worthy. The spear is for all intents and purposes yours now. Dumbledore said kindly but didn't seem happy about it at all. I raised my hands to look at them before turning my eye to meet his. I don't feel like I was deemed worthy. I said flatly. He sighed. What do you know about wizarding inheritance tests? He asked calmly. Clearly not enough. I said bitterly. Albus, are you sure this is wise? Flitwick asked the old man worriedly. Given the nature of this matter he more than any deserves to know the reason for this tragedy. Dumbledore said seriously while shooting a brief glance to the spear. Flitwick caught the look and agreed reluctantly. Very well Albus. I trust your judgment. He said before letting the headmaster address me again. You must forgive Phileas. This information is usually highly restricted to students to prevent them from seeking out wizarding artifacts for their inheritance in overconfidence. In your case it's best you are informed given your ownership of such an artifact by accident. The old man explained honestly. I understand. I said tiredly. What else was I supposed to do? Rage about my own misfortune? What happened was my fault and I couldn't blame it on anyone but myself really. I was overconfident. I believed that if Hackey let people dominate swords in the world of One Piece then I could use the same thing on the spear here. Unfortunately I was operating on a misunderstanding about the nature of the seal on the spear and ended up screwing myself over instead. I suppose I should begin by clarifying that there is no overarching theme to wizarding inheritances but conditions set by the item's original owners instead. These conditions tend to fall into three rough groupings however: skill, power and compatibility. Skill-based inheritances require that the one taking this test show an adequate level of skill in a chosen field of magic. He paused for a moment to swallow his saliva. Power-based inheritances are the most common and require the one attempting the test to possess a certain degree of raw power. Finally is the compatibility-based inheritances. These are often the most brutal usually as the item uses the most forceful method of testing the compatibility of a wizard with their own nature. If you fail then you perish but even if you survive the price paid is rarely worth it. You were subjected to such a test. He finished seriously. I remained silent for a moment as I thought over this information and had to admit it made sense. Zeus wouldn't leave his spear behind for someone who wasn't suited to his own brand of affinity if the tales of him were accurate. The man was vain, arrogant and petty with an insatiable lust. Naturally he'd want his inheritor to be as much like him magically speaking as possible. Will I ever return to normal? I asked the biggest question on my mind finally. I cannot in good conscience lie to you child. It does not appear that way. Your hands will always bear the scars of this test and your eye is too soon to say. We are doing all we can to repair the damage but the nature of the magic makes it hard to repair precisely as it was before. Pumphrey spoke up honestly and not without a good measure of pity. I see. The eye will prove annoying to deal with but I can handle mere scarring. I'll also need to be more careful around magical objects from now on. On a different topic, what about the various treasures that were in that room with me? I asked thinking about that mass of valuable things. You are rather calm about accepting your situation. Dumbledore said with a genuinely surprised look. Why wouldn't I be? I can do nothing to unmake the past so moving forward is all I can do. Why should I wallow in regrets when I have so much more to look forward to in the future? I said firmly. 44. Distribution and class accommodation. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled at this an admirable mindset. As to your inquiry, on the rest of that room's contents we are of two minds. The first is that after being thoroughly examined to prevent any further accidents the treasures are given to you. Professor Gervain himself is at the head of this, no doubt in hopes of compensating you for your suffering. The second is that the items be put on display here at Hogwarts due to both their rarity and historical value. Knowing this I am curious as to your own thoughts on the matter. He said calmly. Albus, surely you don't intend to listen to a child on such a serious subject. Madame Pomfrey said outraged. Dumbledore raised his hand to calm her. In any other circumstance I would at most take the words of a child under advisement. This matter is directly tied to young Alex himself however and fairness demands his voice be heard. He said firmly and the woman looked like she wanted to argue but eventually just sighed and remained quiet. I seriously took a moment to think about the matter and how best to answer. As much as I would want to claim all that treasure for myself all that would accomplish would be to show greed. The second option is also not ideal as then I definitely lose out. So what is the right choice here? I ponder seriously. None of them disturbed my thought process but waited patiently as they definitely understood how big a decision this was. After seriously giving it my best roll over in my head I came to a sort of middle ground option. Perhaps it would be best if we mixed the two options. I said and all three of them reacted strongly to this. Flitwick looked surprised and kind of proud oddly enough. Pumphrey looked stuck between praise and rebuke giving her a funny expression. Dumbledore however bloomed a smile as his eyes lit up as if I had passed some sort of unspoken test with flying colors. That reaction in particular set off red flags in my head as it really wouldn't be strange if that was precisely his intention. The books already painted the man as someone manipulative and cunning so testing me with something like this would not be out of character at all. An intriguing idea. I can see a path along this premise but perhaps your idea differs from my own. Would you please elaborate? He asked with that same gentle manner that was deceptive. Despite my reservations I acquiesced. Some items there are naturally not something I could reasonably own. The sheath of Gryffindor for example should naturally belong to Hogwarts. The trophies taken from the long-thought extinct magical beasts also needed preservation. The books would also naturally belong to Hogwarts if their origin is not a fanciful tale. Perhaps there are other equally historically significant artifacts there but I wouldn't know given my accident happened before I could learn. I said seriously before pausing for a moment to let the words sink in. My idea is that the items that can't reasonably belong to me go to Hogwarts and those that can, go to me. Additionally I'd want access to the books since there's no telling what secrets they hold. I finished seriously. Surprisingly reasonable all things considered. And what of the spear? Flitwick asked curiously. Naturally that belongs to me. Whatever historical value it has no longer matters. It cost me so much to claim, I won't give it up. I said firmly. That is fair. I wouldn't mind studying the artifact however. I have never heard of any that match its likeness yet clearly it is no simple thing. Dumbledore said eyeing the spear in interest. With that settled I suppose we need to discuss my classes. For charms I should be fine but for potions, herbology and transfiguration no such luck. I cannot exactly practice those from this bed. I said helplessly. That was a concern but what do you mean you should be fine for charms? Flitwick asked curiously. I already memorized and mastered the entire textbook's content for this year and half of the textbook for next year as well over the summer. I of course did the same for every other subject as well but without practice I cannot claim mastery for anything beyond theory. I said honestly. That doesn't make any sense. What of the trace? Pumphrey asked in disbelief. I looked into the trace and found a loophole. The trace doesn't detect whether or not a young wizard or witch uses magic but rather if magic was used in their vicinity. For most muggleborns this works just as good since there are no other sources of magic but what about those from wizarding families? The trace only works if there is no other wizards nearby to cover the young wizard or witch's magic usage with their own. I have been living in Tom's pub however, a magical hotspot and thus perfectly concealed. I explained smugly. I don't know if I should be proud at your ingenuity or appalled at your blatant disregard for the law. Flitwick said with a troubled frown. Ignoring laws is a poor habit young Alex. That said in this case it makes things considerably easier for us. If you truly have mastered the theoretical aspects of the classes then you can be quizzed on the matter in place of in-class activity and homework while you are recovering. Dumbledore said with an amused expression despite chastising me for breaking the law. If my hands weren't like this I could easily demonstrate my mastery of charms at least. Otherwise I don't mind being quizzed at all, I rather welcome it in fact. I do have quite the number of questions myself that I would like answered and who better than the professors themselves to do so. I said with a grin. I see the hat was not mistaken in putting you in Ravenclaw at all. Still we have disturbed your rest long enough and will leave you be until it is time for your quizzes. Dumbledore said and Flitwick wished me fast recovery before they left me with Madame Pomfrey. 45. Seeking strength. Once I was truly alone I grit my teeth and opened up my inventory to reach in and pull out an item I needed, the one-piece physique ability stone. While I wasn't lying about my willingness to subject myself to the quizzes of the various professors I knew that if I wanted the best chance of fully recovering I had to go beyond normal methods. The physique of those in the One Piece world was well known for their ability to bounce back from injuries that would prove fatal in any other situation. And not slowly either in most cases as there were examples of a good night's sleep after a grand feast returning someone horribly injured to almost perfect health. Additionally this event gave me a massive scare as it all but pointed out how weak I really was. I almost died. If I wasn't at least somewhat compatible with the spear's power I would have and that idea terrified me. I needed to put potential profit to the side temporarily to focus on making myself safer first and above all even more compatible with the spear. With that in mind I chose to go all out with the one-piece package on myself. To be fair Hackey was supposed to go with the physique since it relied on the body to begin with. I only refused to take it on account of the fact I didn't feel the need to have a body so ridiculously strong. Joke's on me huh. I didn't really mind the potential side effect of maybe growing unusually tall all that much since shrinking potions did exist. I could also just transfigure myself smaller if I got skilled enough with that field of magic. Ability stone detected, acquire ability Y/N. I mentally agreed and the stone turned to sand that sank into the bandages of my right hand and creating a warmth that spread comfortably through my arm to the rest of my body. The warmth lasted for only a brief moment before I frankly felt no different than before. I wasn't too surprised by this as the physique was passive and not active like magic or Hackey so there was nothing to feel. Still if nothing else this should greatly accelerate my training of my Hackey as well as my recovery. I hoped the physique would be enough to restore my eye as well but I wasn't going to delude myself into fully expecting it. With nothing to do and being unwilling to go to sleep I closed my eyes and fully extended my observation Hackey. My perception showed me the bed I was laying on the clearest due to its proximity but things got blurrier the further from me my Hackey extended. Observation Hackey wasn't exactly sight in how it worked but saying it wasn't similar would be wrong. It was like experiencing the world from two different perspectives simultaneously. Obviously you had the normal way you perceived the world but then there was the sort of third-person perspective centered around yourself that was observation Hackey as well. At my current skill level my observation Hackey was not even at the quality of my normal perspective much less greater. I had all the time in the world to fix this problem though since I was currently bedridden. I didn't push my limit for my Hackey but rather worked to make the distance I currently had covered better. Thanks to the skill for the ability I didn't have to fumble about with this but simply followed the path already set out for me. It was interesting how Madame Pomfrey went about her business in the hospital wing with a confused almost paranoid look as she kept looking around for whoever was observing her but failing. She even used the spell Hominum Revelio to try and reveal any nearby people only for the spell to tell her it was just me in the wing. I almost felt bad for the poor woman as she must have thought she was losing it. I had to admit her instincts were quite sharp though to immediately identify the feeling of being observed and go looking for the source. After a few hours of this however she went from paranoid to fed up with it and cast a spell I was unfamiliar with non-verbally that caused my Hackey to get repelled viciously causing my head to throb. To say I was caught off guard would be an understatement as even in the skill there was only 2 ways to cancel someone else's observation Hackey. The first was clashing your own Hackey against it which caused a type of interference that made things harder to discern than normal. The second was using Conqueror's Hackey to kill the offending observation Hackey. In truth this was literally just saturating your surroundings with so much Conqueror's Hackey that any weaker Hackey was all but rendered impossible to extend beyond the user. This spell presented a third option as it was nothing like these 2 normal options. It felt almost like my Hackey had been struck with a baseball bat literally damaging it. The only theory I could come up with was it was a spell that dispelled things of a spiritual nature that lingered. What with the existence of ghost, poltergeist and other not so pleasant spiritual-based entities it made sense there existed magic to repel them. For dark spiritual creatures I knew there was the patroness charm but this was clearly something else since there was no accompanying light show. Massive migraine aside I was more pleased than angry to discover that such magic existed. Learning such a thing in a safe environment like this is far more preferable than doing so in a hostile one. While I was waiting for my headache to subside Madame Pomfrey approached my bed holding a tray of items. There were bandages, gauze pads, wound cleaning solution and a bottle of a blue potion I couldn't identify based off my textbook's knowledge. I opened my eyes as she set the tray on the nightstand next to my bed, careful to avoid touching the spear that I could have sworn buzzed slightly at her proximity like it was warning her. Here to change my bandages? I asked calmly. She nodded. Proper wound care is vital to recovery. You will also have to drink this potion as well. You will not enjoy it. She said calmly. 46. Trade idea. Madame Pomfrey was an expert at her job as she easily and swiftly removed the bandages from my right arm letting me see how bad the damage truly is. From my elbow down the skin was blackened with weeping cracks like angry red lightning bolts carved into the flesh. The pain flared up fiercely as she held my arm up to unwrap it and even more so when she went to wrap it with the new clean bandages after sterilizing the wounds. Still I grit my teeth and refused to scream at the pain, something she seemed both concerned and appreciative of. The left arm was the same as the right and felt just as bad to get cleaned and rewrapped. Finally she removed the bandage over my right eye and I could have sighed in relief as I saw a brief reaction to the light from it even if only faint. She carefully cleaned around the eye socket with that stinging solution before gently opening the eyelid to observe the eye within. She didn't say anything before closing it and replacing the bandage but her expression was far from positive leaving my hope embittered. Finally was the potion that smelled strongly acrid like it would dissolve metal if poured over it. I didn't resist and let the liquid be poured into my mouth and had to stop myself from violently spitting it out as the most horribly metallic taste filled my mouth. It was like iron and copper shavings flowing down my throat. Not the worst reaction to a raw potion I've ever seen. You have strong self-control for your age. You must have had a terrible time of it at that orphanage. She said with a pitying look. I prefer to pretend that part of my life never happened. I'm glad to be rid of it. I said honestly. I suppose that's fair. She said with an understanding nod before leaving with the tray. I was fairly certain it was an effect of the potion but sleepiness began to make my mind slow before I slipped into the dream world. I dreamt of being a great pirate in Whitebeard's world, laughing with crewmates whose faces were blurry and drinking with the old man himself. It was a good dream, calming and peaceful. When I eventually woke up I felt noticeably better. Not completely better by any means but the pain wasn't a constant piercing thing in my mind. Now it was a dull throbbing thing that was much easier to ignore. Extending my observation Hackey I was surprised to find that Madame Pomfrey was nowhere to be seen. This didn't exactly narrow down what time it was but gave me an opportunity to contact Whitebeard without risk. Spending the 50 system coins I initiated the contact with the system. The world grayed out around me as a white screen appeared before the image changed to one of Whitebeard mid-drink from a sake bowl big enough to hold a person. What happened to you? The man asked with a hint of concern as he set down his bowl. I smiled bitterly. Overconfidence got the better of me. This was the price. I said honestly. He nodded in understanding. So what do you need? He asked with an amused expression at my surprise. Ugh, getting read like a book sucks. Well, whatever. I need both some information and depending on that possibly a favor as well. I said frankly. So long as it's nothing troublesome I don't mind. What do you want to know, brat? He said curiously. First I need to know if Straw Hat Luffy has defeated Crocodile in Alabasta yet. If he hasn't my favor is for you to the Sky Island of Skypiea and find the guy called Enel there. He's an arrogant fellow with the Goro Goro no Mi that terrorizes the people there while calling himself a god. I want you to capture him and trade me his fruit, Hackey and physique. After that do whatever you want with him, release him or kill him, it makes no difference to me. So long as he's your prisoner and you technically own him the trade should go through without issue. I said seriously. He leaned forward at that. You said something interesting there, brat. You can get the fruits out of anyone without killing them so long as I technically own them. He asked for clarification. I nodded. That would work, yeah. By owning someone you also by extension technically own all they have including their devil fruit, soul, body, abilities and even skills. Why? I said a bit confused by his interest. Gururera. I think I have an idea how you can pay me back for this favor then. Seas are overrun with nobody pirates that have fruits wasted on them. You help me get those fruits for my crew and we can run a sort of credit system for trading. How's that sound? He asked with a grin. I froze for a moment as I thought about it, and indeed this was actually a fantastic idea. One of the biggest problems with devil fruits was not being able to guarantee its appearance on a fruit near you after its wielder was dead. Additionally, most people considered a fruit lost if someone else ate it. This was actually one of the reasons some people didn't eat any of them they found, as they had their hearts set on a specific fruit or none at all. This idea, however, would solve this problem easily. Whitebeard merely had to capture the current user of a fruit and then trade the fruit to me through the system before I sent it back, effectively obtaining the fruit at little cost. This would not only let Whitebeard fill his crew with devil fruits of their choosing but also allow me to gain a steady supply of the fruits and other trade items from that world as well. 47. First quiz: awkwardness. It's a good idea, but before we can implement it we need to test something. I'll send you some system coins. If my idea works then you should be able to use them to contact me rather than wait for me to contact you, I said before mentally sending 50 of the coins from my inventory to him. He looked at the shiny rainbow coins in interest when they arrived, and with a nod I closed the contact to wait. If this didn't work I might lose out on 100 coins but would learn a very valuable piece of information that would offset the price. Honestly, I wanted to slap myself for not thinking of this sooner, as it would make things so much easier. Naturally, any good merchant had a list of clients and providers that could contact them if they had a pressing need for something, so it would make sense that giving enough coins to my contacts would let them contact me of their own initiative, in theory at least. Nothing happened for several minutes, however, causing me to almost give up hope before the world grayed out and a screen appeared in front of me with Whitebeard on it. I breathed a sigh of relief. What took so long? I asked curiously. Had trouble figuring out how to get it to work. Need to use your full name to do it. Annoying. He said honestly. Alright, that one's on me. Should have explained that before hanging up. Now I'll send over 1,000 coins, which will let you contact me at will 20 times. I think every 3 days is a decent time frame for our trades. Remember to keep an eye on the world government once we start, because they will definitely try and find out how you are doing it. See you then, I said before ending the call once I sent over the coins. It was a good chunk of my current total amount of coins, but it was going to be paid off and more in time. I had no intention of doing the same with Rockwell though, as while the dinosaurs and maybe even plants were valuable, their value was not even slightly comparable to devil fruits and the One Piece physique. Also, Rockwell was for the most part just a normal human with no special powers or anything else that would allow him to create profit so easily like Whitebeard. An unfair comparison, I know, but that was just the way things are. With that matter done, I relaxed and began working on my observation Hackey again. I was fairly certain that Madame Pomfrey figured out that I was the source of the uncomfortable sensation of being watched from all angles after she returned to the wing and walked right into my outstretched Hackey. Still, she swatted my Hackey back with that pesky spell of hers that gave me a headache. She also didn't say anything about my Hackey when she came to change my bandages and have me down that foul liquid again. What she did say was that she was surprised at how quickly the injuries were recovering. Already the cracks in my skin were starting to seal on my hands, and whatever was going on with my eye also apparently showed signs of repair, but my sight in that I didn't grow any better than a faint glow when exposed to light. A pity, but I already resigned myself to seeking a replacement should such an opportunity present itself. In theory I could go the route of Moody, who has an alchemically created false eye with a few nifty features, but even in the books the guy was described as having a freaky look due to that eye, so I think I'll pass. Shortly after I woke up again from my no-doubt potion-induced slumber, I got my first professor visit with my quiz. Naturally it was my own head of house himself, Flitwick. It was amusing how he paused mid-step into my Hackey before continuing like he hadn't noticed it at all. Good afternoon, Alex. I hope your recovery is going well. Today I want to go over the basics of spell work with you. Please try your best, the small man said cheerfully. I chose to ignore that and recite the entire year's textbook verbatim while giving the gobstruck professor an amused smirk. When I was about a quarter through the textbook he stopped me. I must admit, when you said you mastered the theoretical aspects of this year's textbooks we were doubtful, but I am truly convinced now. It is astounding, really. In all my years I've never once seen a student with the entire year's course already fully memorized before they even begin. He said with a disappointed sigh. You sound like you are flattering me but yet look disappointed. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. I apologize. It's just a shame that this happened to you is all. I would have loved nothing more than to discover your prodigious mind in the classroom in a more natural way. Instead here we are, you relegated to that bed before classes even started and thus forced to reveal it all at once. I can't help but be slightly bitter about the lost excitement this would normally have given me. He said honestly. Well, if it helps at all, I didn't exactly plan to be here either. Right bloody annoying, to be frank. I said with a shrug. I can imagine. Still, I think I'll award 10 points to Ravenclaw for your fluent recital of the textbook. Exceptional students deserve rewards after all. I must admit, however, you've put me in a bit of a pickle. You see, I was going to slowly quiz you as I would normally teach the course, but clearly in your case that is unnecessary. I also can't test your practicals given the condition your hands are in. I am at a loss how to proceed. he said with a bothered expression. Why not pick out a book for me to read at the first-year level but not covered in the textbook and quiz me on that instead? I read and memorize quickly, so I'll need a new book every week, assuming the other professors do the same, but that will work. No. I suggested, both for his benefit and my own. 48. Herbology. He contemplated the matter for a moment before agreeing. It's an unorthodox but brilliant idea. Though if what Poppy has said is to be believed, you should be mostly recovered in 9 days if your recovery speed remains as it is. After that, it would be best if you joined your year mates doing coursework. He said honestly. I don't mind, since I'll likely breeze through it in all but the practicals that require actual time. I said confidently. Be careful not to let your confidence outstrip your skill. That road's been walked by many a prodigy, and very few ever reach its end with a good fate. He warned seriously. Oh, I've already learned my lesson about overconfidence, not to worry. I said with a self-depreciating chuckle. Yes, I suppose you have. Still, a reminder every now and again wouldn't be amiss. He said before setting off and leaving me alone again. I didn't get much chance to improve my Hackey after that though, as I got a second visit from a professor. This time it was none other than Professor Sprout, who was the one that technically introduced me to the wizarding world. She was in a simple brown outfit with fresh soil still clinging to it as she entered my perception. I may not know what the magic you are using is, but I suggest you stop doing so when around other people. It is off-putting. She chided calmly as she pulled up a seat and set a dirty brown bag on the nightstand. It's merely just a little trick I've figured out to extend my senses is all, I said with a chuckle. Be that as it may, feeling as though you are being observed from every possible angle all at once is not a pleasant feeling. She said firmly. I'll limit my usage when around you professors, but that is the best I can offer. It's too useful. I said honestly as I withdrew my Hackey. Very well, now then, are you feeling up for your quiz? She asked, and I nodded. Unlike charms or any other subject, herbology cannot be mastered without practical experience. So while the others may be satisfied with pure theory, I am not. In that spirit, I have procured an extended space bag that I have filled with a variety of magical plants at various stages of their life cycle. Your task will be to correctly identify them and how they are grown as I pull them out. She said, and I was awed. This was true dedication to teaching right here. Even with the limitations I had at the moment, she burdened herself to find a way to ensure I got almost the same practical lessons she gave everyone else. Frankly, I was all for it as well, since herbology was actually one of the subjects I most looked forward to due to the sheer amount of potential profit the subject held. To the average wizard or witch, the subject would be thought of as mere magical gardening, and to some extent it was. What most failed to consider, however, is the sheer amount of demand there was for those skilled in it. For every potion that required a plant, that plant had to come from somewhere. It couldn't all come from the wild, or the ingredients would long since have gone extinct from supply not meeting demand. For easy-to-grow ingredients, the profit margin was negligible unless grown in bulk, since so much of it was readily available. The real value in herbology, however, came when one grew rare or even monstrously difficult ingredients. Some plants required exacting conditions to thrive to a harvestable state, and recreating those conditions required skill and precision. Take the rare plant known as blaze grass that grew only in volcanic rock and needed the seeds to be heated by a specific temperature constantly as it grew, with no exposure to cooler air ever, or it would wither and die within moments. This wasn't a plant one could casually grow, and only a dedicated herbologist could do it. Naturally, not all hard-to-grow ingredients commanded a sky-high price despite the difficulty they presented, since their uses weren't in high demand. But more often than not, rare or hard-to-grow ingredients held a large profit margin if successfully grown. As a result, this subject was one I fully intended to put my full effort into, and thus also why I fully appreciated the length Professor Sprout went to for teaching me. I am ready to start when you are, I said eagerly. She nodded and pulled out a small planter pot from the bag with a many-leaved plant with woolly gray-green leaves and showy pinkish-purple flowers on a stiff stalk and fresh aromatic fragrance, Ditani. I didn't hesitate to identify it and how it needed to be grown for the best results. She smiled pleased and put away the pot before taking out another plant I easily identified and listed how it needed to be grown. We continued for at least an hour, during which she threw out extra variables such as plants ready for harvest and thus not having further growth methods, or even straight-up seeds that were especially difficult to identify because of their close resemblance to the seeds of another type of plant. For that last one I listed all the options and then how they would need to be grown, which she was quite pleased with. I earned Ravenclaw another 15 points for getting much of this right, and she even praised me further for being willing to admit when I didn't know something as she pulled out plants not covered in the textbook. Believe me, I racked my brain trying to identify the damn things stubbornly, but had to content myself with merely taking educated guesses about what kind of plants they were through the knowledge I had of other plants and context clues. Still, Sprout was more than happy to implement the method of study I suggested to Flitwick after seeing what level of theory I already held. Madame Pomfrey showed up shortly after the good professor left to change my bandages again and force me to drink that foul potion once more. I idly noted that I hadn't had any food since I'd been hospitalized and deduced from the fact I wasn't ravenously hungry that the potion likely had nutritional properties as I drifted back to unconsciousness. 49. Talent and Plans. My next time awake left me feeling strangely as I was visited by a ghost for history of magic quizzing, and I have no clue how the hell someone can just exist and make me tired, but Professor Binns did it. Shortly after that it was Professor Quirrellmort's turn to visit me for me data quiz. I'll give the guy props for his professionalism to playing the role of the terrified stuttering mess, as even when he was only dealing with just me he still stuttered and twitched while feigning paranoia. The worst part though had to be the god's awful scent he had wafting off him. A mix of incense and garlic at ridiculously strong levels. The most amusing part was when he acted out of his role and tried to grab my spear. Probably at the orders of the noseless face on the back of his head if I'm not mistaken. The literal shock he got for his troubles summoned Madame Pomfrey, who chided him for carelessness before leaving, since the shock was merely a warning from the spear and not an actual attack. Still, I got through the encounter unscathed, and it was fairly clear that even if the execution was shoddy due to the act, Voldemort still acted as a genuinely good teacher for the subject. Yeah, I said Voldemort and not Quirrell, and I meant it. According to the books, Quirrell was just a middling-level Muggle studies professor before he got hijacked by the Wraith of Voldemort. If you mean to tell me someone like that was well-versed enough in the subject of data to teach it, I'd call you a liar. It was pretty damn obvious that through Quirrell Voldemort was playing his fantasized role as a professor of the subject. While the stuttering and acting might distract from it, if you actually paid attention to what was being said you'd notice that it all made sense and contained insight not mentioned in the textbooks. If I'm being honest, I have to admit that perhaps Dumbledore rejecting Voldemort's application to the position was not entirely necessary. I get why it was from a moral and even strategical standpoint, as no sane person would trust the future of their children to a madman like Voldemort. But at the same time the guy was actually a pretty good teacher, though that might be from his own deep study and mastery of the dark arts. Whatever the case, I got through that quiz and teaching session without any trouble, minus a slight look of interest in Quirrell's eyes at how much I knew in pure theory. To be honest, that part didn't feel great at all. I absolutely didn't want Voldemort's attention if I could help it. I wasn't delusional though. There was no way anyone could show off prodigy levels of learning or skill without the guy paying them close attention. Even if my own Muggle-bornness might repulse him with his weird obsession with blood purity, he definitely appreciated talent even more. His trust and reliance on Snape from the books pointed this out, since Snape was only a half-blood but a potions prodigy and even quite talented in other fields as well. I very sincerely doubted I wouldn't be getting some form of recruitment attempt sometime in my future. Whether it be through Quirrell or even later during the Triwizard Tournament, it didn't matter, since it was definitely coming if I kept showing so much talent. I might not want to get involved in the messy events of canon, but I wasn't going to run from them if they came to me on their own. This life was my second chance and I was going to live it how I wanted, canon be damned. Though if I'm being totally fair, canon was likely foobar already just because of my mere existence. The moment I start expanding my merchant empire here with things from other worlds, the variables that lead to the future will get scrambled worse than if you threw an egg in a blender. I had no intention of picking a side either between Voldemort and Dumbledore, but would openly sell my wares to both. Once Whitebeard brought me the Goro Goro no Mi, it would become incredibly hard to catch or harm me, even for magical powerhouses like those two, for a single reason: speed. The fruit's power would give me the potential to think and even move at the speed of lightning. Not at first of course, since no human was meant to do so, but devil fruit spat in the face of what a person should be capable of. I'd need to seriously work on my physique and Hackey to pull it off, but in theory it was doable. Once I got it done though, I would be nearly impossible to trap. There is a reason the Goro Goro no Mi was called the invincible Logia. There is nothing in nature as destructive and fast as lightning, and when the full power of that is wielded by a clever mind, it's much more dangerous. Unlike Enel, who was absolutely wasting the fruit's potential, I fully intended to excavate the fruit's power. That aside, I figured that so long as I didn't get careless I wouldn't have much trouble. I got rebandaged and dosed a bit after that, so it was lights out. My new books were waiting for me when I woke up. Flitwick's book was on the various meanings and purposes behind wand movements. Sprouts was an extended encyclopedia of plants and seeds. Binns was a well-worn tome on the Goblin Rebellions. Finally was Quirrell's book, that was a tome on dueling, specifically the various tactics and combos for it. With nothing better to do, I focused my Hackey to bring up my magic and used a careful wandless spell to bring the book on wand movements to my lap. 50, hitting the books. It still hurt a lot to move my arms, and I had already checked to make sure Madame Pomfrey wasn't nearby, so using a little wandless magic shouldn't cause me any problems. I didn't push my luck though and use it even to turn the pages after I opened the book, but rested my right hand at the bottom corner of the book to turn the pages with little more than a flick of my fingers. Still quite painful, but not beyond my tolerance. The book was quite fascinating in truth, as contrary to how it seemed in the books and movies, how you moved your wand mattered. For example, the swish and flick movement represented the gathering of magic in a smooth manner and then the release of it smoothly. Stabbing your wand forward represented an aggressive, powerful release of magic, but not a stable one. Additionally, the more exaggerated the movement, the larger the resulting spell tended to be. All of these insights into the mechanisms that governed wand-based magic were absorbed and added to my mastery of the art hungrily. I only got through half the book before Madame Pomfrey showed up for my regularly scheduled torture, and it was off to yet another dreamless slumber for me. Professor McGonagall was waiting for me to wake up in her cat animagus form on my nightstand when I came to next. "Professor McGonagall," I said with a polite nod of my head towards her. Even though I fully expected it, actually seeing her jump off the nightstand and expand and morph into her human form left me awed all the same. She seemed almost annoyed that her usual trick of showing off was seen through so easily, but you'd barely be able to tell. How did you know that was me? She asked calmly as she waved her wand and created a chair to sit on next to my bed. In the past century there are only 7 registered practitioners of the animagus art, and you are one of them, with your beast form being that of a cat. I purchased a second-hand copy of this year's Transfiguration textbook that had a handwritten note in the front talking about this little display of yours. Simple research filled in the rest. I said with a grin. 5 points to Ravenclaw for thorough preparation. I assume you are prepared for your quiz on Transfiguration then? She asked, and I nodded. The quiz itself was mostly just questions on the principles of Transfiguration and all its basically known laws and limitations. For example, how the magic couldn't make something out of nothing or even permanently transform anything under normal circumstances. She did praise me for heeding the warnings about not attempting it on my own, as those abnormal situations where the change was permanent tended to happen because of a botched transfiguration job. I did ask if those circumstances were permanent, then why not try and find a way to copy them, but in a controlled way. She gave me another 5 points for the excellent question before explaining that such attempts had been made. But after the many failures with sometimes grave consequences, the idea was almost entirely scrapped due to it simply not being worth the cost in most eyes. I could respect that, since that was just the way of things sometimes. It came down to needing to objectively look at what you wanted to achieve and the costs it had taken to try and do it and weigh them. Would permanent transfigurations have revolutionized the art? Sure. But the cost to figure it out was simply too high on a personal standpoint for most, and thus the idea was left alone for the most part. Like the quizzes before this one, I passed with flying colors, and the stern but kind professor agreed with my plan for additional reading in place of practice work. If we went by my class schedule, Sprout would be next, but I would only be visited by the professors once per week to give me time to read the books they left for me, so that wasn't going to happen. That unfortunately left me with only 2 professors left to visit me for a quiz, and I genuinely wasn't looking forward to it: Snape and Sinistra. The first wasn't the real problem, as Professor Sinistra was a fairly young, upbeat, dark-skinned woman and taught astrology. Snape, on the other hand, seemed to take joy in making life uncomfortable for all but Slytherin students, with a particular hate boner for Gryffindor specifically. Not that I could entirely blame him for it given his past with that house, but he was a grown man bullying children at this point. Shameful. And I'm not talking just during Harry Potter's time covered in the books either, as the second-hand copies of the potion textbooks are filled with complaints about it. Naturally, my first visitor was Professor Sinistra, who was a fairly attractive woman, all things considered, with smooth skin and a near constant upcurve to her lips and bright eyes. She clearly hadn't been prepared to deal with my situation, as she was a bit awkward when quizzing me on the constellations and movements of the planets. I didn't make things difficult for her and remained polite and calm even when she stumbled slightly. I earned another 15 house points by the end of the matter, but no new book, since according to her the entire year's course was based entirely around identifying the various constellations and alignments of the planets and their meanings and uses in magic. To put it bluntly, the class was all theory and very little practicals. Don't get me wrong, she made it clear that even if that was the case, the class was very important, as many rituals and higher forms of long-term spellcraft needed particular celestial events. I got maybe another 2 hours of study time before Madame Pomfrey came for her part and knocked me out again. I finally got to finish Flitwick's book and was just about to grab the next tome chosen by Sprout when Snape arrived. He was a tall, pale man with shoulder-length, greasy-looking hair and a stern face that made it seem like he hated absolutely everything. So you are the one who has caused such a disruption so early in the year. I'm sure you've no inkling of the sort of inconvenience you've caused my fellow professors, and I do you? He asked sharply. Are you here to teach or waste time bullying a child? I expected better from a renowned potion master, but I suppose I was merely setting myself up for disappointment. Yes, I am in fact very aware of how much inconvenience this matter has caused. But as you no doubt already know, it also isn't entirely my fault, so that weight does not belong to me alone, and I won't shoulder it just because you want to make things difficult for me. So start your quiz and stop wasting both our times. I said, staring him right in the eyes calmly.
Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get: an unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.